Lloyd Frontier was alone outside when a handsome knight suddenly approached him and insisted they needed to return to the house. Lloyd was startled by the man's abrupt appearance in the dark, but he recognized him as Javier Ashran, a character from a fictional novel he had read growing up. Lloyd initially resisted Javier, yet he eventually followed him into the castle. Once inside, he bundled himself in a warm blanket as Javier lit a fire nearby. Javier explained that Lloyd had gone drinking earlier, become intoxicated, destroyed the pub's furniture as a result, and passed out on his way back to the manor. The man currently speaking with Javier was not the original Lloyd, however. Javier was unaware that this was actually someone else, a Korean man who was utterly bewildered as to how he had ended up in this body, certainly not through an isekai trope. Javier then mentioned that Lloyd's father had been worried for his safety and had sent him out to find him. Javier's words were lost on Lloyd, who was shivering intensely under the blanket. Lloyd was freezing his backside off and, touching the floor, began to miss the ondals, underfloor heating, of his original home. He felt annoyed that something as practical as an in-house heating system seemingly did not exist in this medieval fantasy setting. Javier then announced that he would leave him to rest and would report the events to his lordship tomorrow. Lloyd asked if that was necessary, and Javier simply replied that it was. Lloyd believed Javier was so uptight. Just as Javier was about to depart, Lloyd called out to him and asked if their family was heavily burdened with debt. Javier was surprised by the strange query. He then slammed the door shut and left. Lloyd sat there, lost in his thoughts for a moment. He knew everything that was going to happen in this story. He had only just finished reading the final chapter in his tiny boarding house room last night. He knew Lloyd's fate. The Baron and Baroness would fall prey to an evil con-man, lose all their land and fortune, and tragically commit suicide. Lloyd would then become a beggar, drinking his days away until he coughed up blood and died. This realization infuriated him, and he stood up, wondering about the point of being an aristocrat if the life was just as miserable as it had been in Korea. At that moment, a notification appeared, just like in a manhwa novel of this kind. You have been chosen to have a random wish granted by the absolutes. The next day, his mother and Javier approached him. His mother mentioned that he had broken things at the pub the previous night. Lloyd looked miserable, and his mother pleaded with him to go to the pub and apologize this time. Lloyd scratched his head and agreed, saying he would do it. His mother and Javier were utterly shocked and confused by his compliant response. Later that day, he walked out onto the street. A villager was arranging hay beside his shop. The man immediately spotted Lloyd and Javier and quickly hid. Lloyd was surprised by this reaction, and the same action was repeated by every other person in front of them. At the sight of Lloyd, they instantly concealed themselves. Even a baby peeping through a window was pulled back in, and the mother shouted that the child should not make eye contact before slamming the door. The village clearly detested him. Lloyd asked Javier why he was following him. Javier explained that his father had ordered him to escort him to prevent a repeat of yesterday's incident. Lloyd was confused about the need for an escort for himself, but Javier clarified that, on the contrary, the escort was for the villagers to protect them from him. Lloyd determined that the first priority was to get rid of this scumbag image. That way, he could at least get some food when he inevitably became a beggar. He then thought that if he could somehow sort out his family's debts before the ruin, he could live peacefully as the heir to a country baron and enjoy a comfortable life to a ripe old age. He wondered if there was a cheat code or skill he could use, and the notification immediately reappeared. He saw that he actually possessed two passive skills, human scumbag and rowdy drunkard. He realized they were utterly useless and instinctively scrubbed the screen in front of him. Javier glanced at him, confused by his action. Javier then asked where Lloyd was going, pointing out that they had already arrived at the pub and questioning if Lloyd had been lying about apologizing. Lloyd was caught off guard and quickly insisted he was just thinking. Lloyd received a sharp glare from Javier, but when Lloyd asked what was wrong, Javier shrugged it off. Lloyd opened the door and walked in, asking if anyone was there. Javier stood outside, regarding him intensely, as he believed something had been off since last night. It was as if Lloyd was a completely different person. Inside, the space was extremely damaged and scattered. The furniture was in ruins, just as had been described. Javier stood beside Lloyd as the latter tendered his heartfelt apology for everything he had done. The pub owner, assuming a position of extreme high alert, glared at Lloyd, insisting that Lloyd should not do this, as the apology did not seem genuine, though he didn't say the genuine part out loud. Lloyd wondered what he was supposed to do then. The old man eventually stated that it was fine, and Lloyd did not have to apologize. Lloyd just stared at him, sweat dripping down his cheek. Later that day, as he left the pub, Lloyd mentioned to Javier that even when he apologized, the owner did not seem happy. Javier responded that this was to be expected. Everything Lloyd had destroyed, the furniture and decorations, had been purchased with the owner's hard-earned money. Javier believed the owner likely would not be satisfied until he was compensated. Compensation, Lloyd thought. Compensating someone when they were already in debt. Was it so hard to get brownie points with the villagers? He knew that if they did not repay the debt, nothing would change, but he did not know how to proceed. Javier then added that not only had Lloyd caused the damage, but but the pub owner's mother was sick after the late winter cold. Combining that with Lloyd's misconduct, Javier said, one could imagine how difficult things must be for the owner. Lloyd suddenly realized that the inside of the pub had been rather chilly. A single fireplace would not be enough to heat the entire building, and the elderly could not handle that kind of cold for very long without underfloor heating. He suddenly stopped walking. As if a light bulb had discharged a jolt of electricity in his head, he began to sketch out his thoughts and visualize the underfloor heating system, Ondol. He realized there was no such thing in this world setting, and if he were to build them, they would definitely sell. The hooligan, Lloyd Frontier, could never have conceived of this, but the real him, Suho Kim, could. He had majored in civil engineering in school, and during his time as a military engineer in the army, he had built a house all by himself. He had also worked day and night at construction sites. This was it. With this, he could settle all the Baron's debts. He walked on enthusiastically and called out to Javier, saying they should return to the pub. When Javier asked why, Lloyd responded that it was to get his first order. A notification then appeared. Your true journey has begun. You have received an RP system, and you can earn RP points by improving relationships. Lloyd stared at this, shocked and confused. Lloyd glared at the screen with curiosity, intrigued by how RP was supposed to be utilized since it offered no instructions, except that the value increased when he successfully improved his relationship with key characters in the estate. A buzz startled him, and he turned to Javier Ashrin, who had a floating window hovering above him. The display showed that Javier's approval ratings were lower than ever. Lloyd felt he should attempt to work on it, and so he told Javier that he genuinely thought he was good-looking. He had been trying to buy Javier's favor. Unfortunately, this gesture backfired somehow, as Javier's approval rating suddenly dropped by 1 point, falling to 31. Lloyd wondered with shock why the rating had decreased. Walking off, he decided it would be better to leave the matter for later. He knew rushing it would only make things worse. They arrived at the pub not long after. Lloyd had already prepared a contract, explaining that the pub owner would be the purchaser, and he would be the builder. Lloyd loudly stated that they would write off all construction fees against all the property he had damaged. He then asked the owner to send his signature. The pub owner stared at him for a second, looking suspicious of his intent. Lloyd inwardly sighed, recognizing that no one had any trust in his original self, as the pub owner had already used the skill Stonewall Heart in attempts to be on guard against Lloyd. But Lloyd resolved that his big plan could not fail from the start. He had decided he did not want to resort to his next move, but he had no choice. He decided he would use the hooligan image to his advantage. Lloyd then said to the man, frowning fiercely, that they were going to be seeing each other a lot from now on, so they should trust each other. He demanded to know the owner's answer. Greatly intimidated, the man immediately put pen to paper. As soon as the document was signed, Lloyd received a notification saying that he was a total scumbag. He paid this no mind, however, as he had finally gotten his first order. He then said to the man that he had made the right choice and he would not let him down. But Javier still glared at him, ever suspicious. Not long after, Lloyd stood at the construction site. Just as he was about to start, Javier called out to him, addressing him as Master Lloyd. Javier then asked him if he was coming up with new ways to cause trouble, pointing out that he had threatened the pub owner to sign the contract. Lloyd glared at him for a brief moment and said that Javier was not as reasonable as he seemed. He then asked if Javier had ever heard of cognitive distortion. Javier seemed confused. Lloyd explained that it was a mental state where one believed someone would act a certain way because of what they did in the past. He described it as distortion caused by prejudice and negative thinking clinging to one's brain. Javier replied that it was not prejudice. It was based on experience and statistics. Lloyd asked in return if experience and statistics were not all from the past. Javier was taken aback, wondering if Lloyd had always been such a smooth talker. Lloyd then stated his intention. He would make them smile. The pub owner and his mother. He would make them smile for sure. As he began his construction, he inwardly confirmed that those smiles would be the foundation of his money-making. It was noon, and Lloyd had already started his work. He was scooping out the dirt, moving it, packing it, and repeating the process, patting the ground with his shovel. He noted that the timber was from the warehouse at the Byron's residence, and thus it was going to be a traditional timber frame. He needed to use the clay he had dug up from the river to complete the walls. Some days had gone by, and at this point, Lloyd was already extremely exhausted. He complained that his body was so weak as he gasped for air. Javier then called out to him and said that his efforts did not take long, noting that in only 3 cuts he had already gone this far. But in reality, it had taken Lloyd a week. Lloyd screamed as he rose up. Javier thought that Lloyd really was building something, and wondered where he had learned this skill. He doubted that the hooligan Lloyd Frontier was truly planning on honoring his contract with the pub owner. Lloyd then got up slowly, complaining about how sore he was and how there was no time to rest. He picked up the axe once more and staggered, trembling, as he tried to raise it up. He managed to lift it, and just as he was about to slam it down, Javier grabbed his hand and stopped him. He patted Lloyd on the shoulder, asking him to stop, and removed the axe from his hand. Javier then asked what Lloyd needed him to do. Lloyd explained that he needed thin little pieces of wood, each one about 2 hands' lengths tall, 1 hand's length wide, and 1 finger's length thick. Javier then threw the logs up in the air, and, with a swift swing of the axe, sliced through all the logs in an instant, cutting the measurements just as expected as the pieces clattered to the ground. Lloyd was shocked at this display and gave him a thumbs up. This was truly the action of someone about to become a master swordsman. Who needs modern equipment when you have someone like Javier? Lloyd then walked up to Javier and said that when he was done he should help him with the digging. Javier then glared at him in annoyance. Javier was frustrated that instead of being thanked he was being given more work to do, thinking the man truly was hopeless. Javier instantly regretted his decision. Lloyd then said to him cunningly that Javier was helping because he was curious, was he not? Lloyd suggested that Javier clearly wanted to see how he was going to con them and really wanted to see what would happen. Lloyd then stated that the work needed to be finished faster and asked how they could achieve that. He answered his own question, by doing it together. As he said this to Javier, Javier was caught in a tight corner. Javier conceded that Lloyd was not wrong and had completely changed since a few days ago, but his past made him utterly impossible to trust. Javier helped him nonetheless. He decided all he could do was hurry the process up and see if it actually worked out. They worked tirelessly, shuffling and shuffling. After a long, exhausting experience, Javier was done with the logs, and Lloyd was also done with the digging. Lloyd was extremely happy. Javier then took note of the crest in front of the site, asking what it was, which Lloyd pointed out that it was his logo crest. Inside the new house, the pub owner's mother, as well as the pub owner, laid on the ground, stunned by the results of the construction. His mother said that it was lovely and so good, noting that all her stiff joints felt so relaxed. The pub owner was also astonished, wondering how it could be possible. Lloyd glared at them in satisfaction. He thought this must be astonishing to the people of this world. Lloyd stated that these were the powers of the underfloor heating. It was almost like magic. The pub owner then said to him that he was thankful, young master, as it had been so long since he had seen his mother smile like that. The pub owner and his mother smiled. Javier was shocked at this. Just as Lloyd had said, they actually smiled. Javier wondered what was happening, as if the change in Lloyd's speech and manners were not enough. Now he worked hard, and kept his promise to the people of the land. Javier felt there was no way Lloyd Frontier would ever do such a thing, and yet, somehow, it had happened. The pub owner and his mother were extremely happy. This made Javier happy as well. Lloyd then received a notification saying that his approval rating by Javier had increased by 2 points, leaving it at a whopping -29 points. He had earned 36 RP from improving his relationship slightly with a key character. He smiled at this. He then said to Javier that he knew what he was thinking. Wow, this guy isn't total garbage after all. Javier glared, looked away, and said that was not what he was thinking. Lloyd noted that in building this house he actually ran at a loss, but that wasn't important because the house was only a model and a step in his meticulous plan. After a few days, a lot of people lined up to experience the wonders of the new Ondal house. As they lined up, Lloyd sat outside, waiting. One of the visitors came out, pulling his shirt as he was extremely warm from the effects of the Ondal house in the cold weather. The man said that he thought he was going to melt. One of the other men, glaring at the departing visitor, was shocked at how the experience actually was, as he was anxious to go inside and feel it for himself. Just as the man was about to walk out, Lloyd tapped the table fiercely as he called out to him. Lloyd asked if it was not amazing and really warm, suggesting that the man probably wanted a room like this at his home too. The man glared at Lloyd, who continued, saying that this was it. Style A was an annex in the yard, and Style B was remodeling the man's current home. Lloyd offered 10% off the cost of construction if he ordered both of the options now. The man glared at Lloyd and was staggering because the villagers naturally did not trust him. But Lloyd used his passive skill once more and said to him that they would see each other often, so they should trust each other. He then continuously berated the man. Lloyd insisted that at that price he was practically giving it away. But at that moment, someone walked into the scene and called out to Lloyd as he turned his attention over to the man. It was Lloyd's father, Arcos Frontera. Arcos asked him what he thought he was doing. Lloyd glared at his father, noting that his approval rating was -20, and he was shocked for words. Not long after, they were seated back at the manor, where Lloyd Frontier and his father, Acros Frontera, were having a meal. The atmosphere felt very awkward. Lloyd thought he had managed to avoid his father until then, and his main concern now was whether his father would stop him from building. His father then asked what exactly he was up to this time. Lloyd wanted to keep his explanation short. He mentioned that the pub owner had ordered an Ondal room built outside, and he was fulfilling the order. Internally, Lloyd decided he would respond to his father in his best rude voice. His father then mentioned that the other people of the land were also placing orders. Lloyd replied that his father seemed to know it all already. His father stated that these were the people they must look after, and that he would not tolerate Lloyd lying to them or tricking them. Lloyd told him not to worry, saying he was not planning to do that. He felt that no matter what he did, everyone always thought the worst of him, and so he stood up, wanting to get away from the conversation as fast as possible. He asked his father if they were finished and if he could take his leave. As Lloyd walked out, his father asked if all of this was because of their family situation. His father implied Lloyd must know what was going on since he had eyes and ears. His father assured him not to worry, claiming he could get them out of this trouble soon, and advised Lloyd not to get too involved. Lloyd turned and looked at his father pitifully, remembering that he had heard those words before. A flashback occurred when his actual father had said the same words to him, assuring him that it would all be fine, so he shouldn't worry, that it was nothing, and just to keep his head down and study hard. Lloyd truly thought everything would be okay back then, but he knew his current father was lying now, and he knew it was not okay. He was determined not to be miserable again because of stupid money. As he walked out, he told his father please not to give up, because he wouldn't give up either. A few years ago, Lloyd had wished he had said those words to his own father. As he walked in the corridor, he mentally calculated their progress. They currently had 32 Style A orders and 57 Style B orders, and he had already received half the construction money. Just as he was thinking about the whole thing, some men, who were his father's moneylenders, appeared in front of him. He glared at them but simply walked past. He found it notable that they didn't even stop to greet him, despite him being the son of the Lord. He then realized those two people were actually mentioned in the novel. The scene then cut to inside his father's office, where the moneylenders were speaking to him. One of them, seated on the table, asked the Baron how much longer he was going to put this off, mentioning that 5 days had passed since the agreed-upon day. He warned that if the Baron continued to delay, they would have no choice but to take action. Acros Frontera was visibly uncomfortable. Another moneylender then viciously suggested that if the Baron sold some of the items in the place, he would get some money. Lloyd peeped through the door and, upon seeing the scene, smirked. He was satisfied, noting that the timing was nice and that they were here just in time. Just last night, Lloyd had pondered about the RP system discussed earlier. Lloyd had gained some RP after raising Javier Ashran's approval ratings and was wondering how to use it, as he did not know how the system worked. He then received another notification that stated he could invest his RP in gaining abilities. Lloyd was surprised by this, remarking that this trash system actually knew how to explain things. The system became very angry at him, but then Lloyd apologized and asked for forgiveness. Not long after, blue lights shone under Lloyd's legs and instantly scanned his body. Upon scanning, the system notified him of all the potent skills within him, skills he had acquired from his past life, stating that he knew more than he looked like. Lloyd was annoyed by these words, but the notification continued, listing his available skills as basic surveying and basic design, among others. Lloyd glared at the screen, thinking he could not tell what those were based on the titles alone, and so he clicked to buy them. Upon acquiring them, he realized that just by looking at the land outside, he could easily take measurements from sight. He thought, could this be real? He realized he didn't need a GPS surveyor and could just see it all with his own eyes. He could also do some basic designs on thin air, which was very helpful. He sat back on his bed, thinking that things would definitely be a lot easier going forward, but wondered if Javier alone would be enough to cover all the construction. He knew it would be nice if he could summon some heavy machinery with his knowledge. Then he received yet another notification that stated if he wanted a summon, there was something he could summon. He was shocked, and the notification explained he needed to spend RP to pick a summon, offering unique abilities and a wide range of skills, urging him to enter to get his own loyal summon partner now. Lloyd read it and mused that it seemed like some kind of ad for a premium game. He glared at it for a second, deciding that he did not have the required quantity of RP. He concluded that a summon could be as useful as heavy machinery or just one of the weapons if he was able to get one, and so he decided he had to find a way to get more RP. To do that, he needed key characters in this world to like him. And so, back to the Baron's office, the moneylenders were still there. One of them pounded on the table and suggested that if the Baron had no money, he could sell the Baroness and her ladies to a very nice place, as they would fetch a hefty sum. "How dare you?" Lloyd's father said. Then suddenly, Lloyd grabbed the moneylender by the shoulder. He said that just because he was a lender didn't mean he had to lack manners. The moneylender fidgeted out of Lloyd's grasp and asked who he was. Lloyd's father called out to him, but he paid him no mind. The moneylender said to Lloyd that he must be the eldest son with the peculiar manners, and asked if that was why he was so rudely interrupting their discussion. Lloyd cut him off, saying, whatever. "Now show me your warrants." They were surprised by this demand. Lloyd then cited the Royal Family and Nobility Act, Article 3, Clause 6, that all nobles may exercise their rights to protect their interests as vassals of the king, and that entry into the residence of a noble family without a warrant was considered trespassing. That was the key section. They were shocked and yelled, asking what he was talking about and claiming they had never even heard of such a law. Lloyd told the moneylenders, "You don't know?" Then let's go find out together. He called for Javier, who walked into the office with his hand slightly resting on his sword at his waist. Lloyd then ordered Javier to cut off the trespassers' arms. Javier walked towards them as they were visibly very scared. "What is this? We are going to sue," they exclaimed. Lloyd replied, "Like I said, let's go find out whose side the judge will take." Javier walked fiercely toward them. They were very, very frightened, and so they dashed out, screaming at Lloyd that he would not be able to get away with this and that he would regret it. They slammed the door and left. His father then called out, "Lloyd, Javier, what did you just do? We don't have enough to stave them off." Lloyd then dropped a bag of coins on the table and said to his father that he was planning to give it to him after he collected all the money from the orders, but this should be enough to cover a big part of this month's interest. "Money from the orders?" his father asked him, stating that he didn't want them taking money from their people, extorting money from them like this. Javier responded on behalf of Lloyd and said not to fear, as he would ensure that Master Lloyd fulfilled the orders. Lloyd's father was shocked for an instant, and Lloyd noted from his father's face that he completely trusted Javier. So Lloyd bowed to his father and said nothing further. Javier then asked Lloyd how he knew about such a law, noting he always thought Lloyd was the ignorant type. Lloyd, feeling annoyed, told Javier he had just picked it up somewhere. It was true that he had actually picked it up somewhere. It was from the book he read, which was actually something Javier said. It was right after the Baron and Baroness committed suicide. Javier was outside the graves of the Baron and Baroness, as the two loan sharks came with some people that had shovels to dig up and sell the bodies. That's when Javier had cited the Royal Family and Nobility Act, Article 3, Clause 6. All nobles may exercise their rights to protect their interests as vassals of the king. After he said this, it was off with their heads in an instant. When Javier was brought before a judge, he was found not guilty, knowing the content, as he was within his rights to kill them in that moment. Lloyd thought to himself that knowing the content of this story was a huge plus, and he should be getting a pop-up any second now. Just then, he received a notification that stated Baron Frontera's approval rating of him had increased by 6 points, and he had earned 60 RP for improving his reputation with a key character. He was sitting at a whopping 61 RP currently. He was very pleased, knowing that he was the player and was going to use this to acquire a summon. Later that evening, Lloyd was outside. He looked meticulously left and right to ensure that there was no one around. He then called out to the summon game, and it appeared in front of him. He clicked on it swiftly, using the RP points. It flashed a bright light in front of him, and then some type of mechanism began to twirl like a magic portal, shocking Lloyd. He thought, that must be a magic circle. This is so over the top. But he immediately wondered, why is it so tiny? He glared at it, slightly disappointed, as it made cranking sounds while trying to summon the creature. Then something slowly flushed out and a cute little creature said, "Wah!" Lloyd glared at it with the disappointment of someone who had just looked at a tiny rat. The hamster flopped to the ground and glared at Lloyd, springing its head up, looking very enthusiastic. Lloyd glared back at him and scoffed, deciding it was a dud. When he said this, the hamster almost choked in shock. He wanted to walk off, but the hamster was speaking its own language, P-P-O-D-O-N-G. Lloyd glared back at it, as though he could understand what it was saying. "You are not a dud?" Lloyd asked it. He then said, "I don't need it." The hamster, however, kept fidgeting its hands and trying to get his attention. Lloyd then told it to show him what it could do. It then gulped up something from its mouth and spat it onto the ground. Lloyd casually bent over and picked it up. It was disgusting, but it was a manual, physically. He read from the manual, P-P-O-D-O-N-G is an adorable hamster. Please give Pudong lots of love. Feed Pudong one of the enclosed sunflower seeds and its size will change. It had a red sunflower seed and a blue sunflower seed. The red one made it grow gigantic, while the blue one made it shrink back to the normal size. One set of the two colors of sunflower seeds was 1 RP. Lloyd glared at Pudong and asked just how big it actually thought it was, like people's size. Pudong indicated he should feed it the seed so that he would see for himself. So Lloyd did just that. As Pudong ate the seed, it began to grow and expand, which greatly surprised Lloyd. It grew so fast that its body hit Lloyd, and Lloyd flew back, slamming himself onto the ground. When he got up, he was very shocked as he glared at Pudong. Pudong was massive. It was over 30 feet high. Pudong then smirked at him, because now it was the bigger person, so to say. It had multiple skills. It could dig very quickly and smooth the ground very quickly, and it had very deep cheek pockets as well. Lloyd was very pleased with this, seeing it as a jackpot. He felt he had now gotten his heavy equipment. The next day, Lloyd thought to himself that if someone saw him with those huge things all of a sudden, they would get very suspicious. He decided he would just carry a book on summoning with him, and if anyone asked, he would simply say, "Oh, I'm a summoning master." The problem would be solved. At that moment, Pudong was resting within his cloth. He even patted himself, thinking how smart he was. Next, he decided they needed to figure out the labor part of the construction project. He walked outside. Later that day, he stood with some of the soldiers from the barony. He told them to repeat after him, "Safety first." They glared at him and could barely utter the words, looking very tired. Lloyd found this frustrating, thinking they were just like soldiers who got paid to do nothing. He wondered why the Baron hadn't gotten rid of them, given the ton of debt. He grinned, thinking that thanks to the situation he now had free labor, and it was a good thing he could put them to work. "Listen up, you are all soldiers and this here is the army," he told them. He continued that the point of an army was to do work. He remembered that when he was in the army, he spent more time digging holes and pulling weeds than actually training. He told them, "Okay, do you see that pile of clay over there? That is the clay I spent all last night digging up. Actually, it was Pudong that dug it up in only 30 minutes, but still." He then continued, saying, "We are about to break ground on our estate. I am talking about the Ondo construction business for the people. To do that, I need all of you to move that clay to the construction site." They were all gloomy at this sight of work from Lloyd. Lloyd thought it was okay, as he expected them to be gloomy. Before his thoughts could continue, someone disrupted him. "Master Lloyd." He turned to the back and saw someone who asked what he was asking his men to do. The man in question was the senior knight in Lord Frontera's barony, Sir Neumann. Lloyd smirked because he was expecting him to confront him like this too. In this land there were 3 knights. Neumann, the man here now. Under him was Bayern, and under him was the protagonist of the novel, Javier Ashran. At the start of the book, when the estate falls into ruin, Javier and Bayern remain loyal until the very end. But Neumann was the first to betray the Baron and run, selling information on the Baron to the con men and leaving him with a huge debt. Lloyd thought it would not do for this man to be the land's foremost knight. He walked up to Sir Neumann and asked what it looked like he was doing. Neumann responded that Lloyd had ordered those honorable men to cover themselves in dirt, and as their commander he would not tolerate it. Lloyd internally dismissed this, thinking that Neumann was just unhappy because Lloyd was close to making money that could pay off the debts. Lloyd then stated he had his father's permission. Neumann replied that he did not know how Lloyd had fooled his lordship, but he reminded the young master of his prior conduct. Neumann stated he could think of no other reason for Lloyd to use his men than for personal gains, and asked if he was wrong. At this point, Lloyd was not being calm anymore. "No, that sounds right if you want a beatdown," he said. Neumann became visibly annoyed and crumpled, looking fragile. Lloyd inwardly noted that if this man ever played an online game, his fingers would be flying across the keyboard. Lloyd then dug his shovel into the ground, pulling out the dirt, which he thrust at Neumann's face. Everyone around gasped in shock, even Neumann. But it seemed as though they were all dancing to his tune. Neumann said, You scoundrel! Did you just insult a knight's honor?" Neumann inwardly thought that Lloyd was nothing but the son of a poor, soon-to-be-ruined baron. Lloyd then said, "Huh? What was that? Let's forget about ranks and fight this out?" He twirled his staff and pointed it at the man, requesting that they duel. Neumann was very angry and said he would make the scoundrel regret it. Back at the manor, not long after, Javier mentioned to Lloyd that he would be facing Sir Neumann in 1 month and asked if Lloyd felt confident about winning. Sitting on the bed, Lloyd questioned if Javier was foolish, stating emphatically that he was not confident at all. Lloyd pointed out that Neumann was a low-level sword expert knight who could use the manor's hard skill, while he was merely a nobody. He scoffed, asking Javier what he expected and if he had even been thinking. Javier felt annoyance brewing because of these words. Lloyd pressed further, asking if Javier was even using his head. Javier noted that he had been so close to striking Lloyd down just then. Javier's mind registered that Lloyd looked pathetic, yet had suddenly shown the audacity to insult Sir Neumann and issue a challenge. Javier had initially suspected that Lloyd was reverting to his old hooligan ways. However, Javier recognized the behavior seemed too carefully planned. He recalled that Lloyd had asked the Baron to separate them so he could pick a fight with him, and then designated Sir Bayron as a substitute overseer for the soldier's work. Now Lloyd was claiming he was not confident in the duel. Javier admitted he did not know what Lloyd was playing at and simply did not understand the boy's actions. Then, Lloyd continued, telling Sir Javier that there was something he needed him to do: teach him how to use a sword. Javier stared at him and flatly refused. Lloyd immediately asked why. Javier explained that his job was only to watch him. Furthermore, he added that if human trash such as yourself, as he put it, learned to use a sword, everyone around him would be in even greater danger, though he corrected his initial harsh wording. Lloyd jested about Javier's poor attempt to tone down the insult when correcting himself. Lloyd then asked if Javier was simply refusing to teach him. Lloyd pressed on, asking if this refusal would stand even if teaching him to sword fight meant Lloyd would cure Javier's insomnia. This knowledge surprised Javier, who wondered how Lloyd could possibly know about that. Lloyd's internal feeling was one of easy confidence. The information was simply in the book. He also knew the cause of Javier's insomnia, an insight that made him smirk. He recalled the book, The Knight of Blood and Iron, which detailed the ranks of knights: swordmaster, high-level sword expert, mid-level sword expert, and low-level sword expert. Javier was on the verge of transitioning from a high-level sword expert to a swordmaster, right on the border between human and supernatural abilities. Lloyd knew that with Javier's senses so sharpened, he simply could not sleep. The insomnia was, in other words, a side effect of becoming a swordmaster. Lloyd was aware that Javier would have no way of knowing this specific technical detail in a backwoods region like theirs. Lloyd then asked Javier if they had a deal, observing that it was pointless to pretend when the insomnia was so clearly visible on Javier's face. Javier sighed, calming himself, and finally said that they could try. Lloyd smirked and asked if that meant there were no takebacks. Javier returned the smirk and said that of course not, adding that he felt certain the deal would fall through. Javier mentioned that there was no remedy he had not tried to cure the insomnia: sleep cognition therapy, herbs, aromatherapy, exercise, and even Eastern medicine. In the very next second, Javier was snoozing and dozing on the bench right beside Lloyd. Lloyd laughed at the sight, mentioning to the sleeping man that he had him all figured out. Lloyd explained he also knew how to cure his insomnia. Lloyd recalled that Javier had first fallen into a deep sleep while listening to a magic spell. So the remedy was to read Javier his reinforced concrete textbook, which Lloyd asserted was at least 18 times more sleep-inducing than any magic spell. Lloyd inwardly celebrated, realizing that Javier's swordsmanship was now his. The next day, Javier looked prim and proper, as if he had never had a better night's sleep. Javier told Lloyd to complete 50 laps around the perimeter and to start. Lloyd stared at him, turned, and then began jogging. Javier was surprised that Lloyd was running without any complaints. Lloyd jogged along. When he got back to Javier, he simply stated that he did not like this and wanted Javier to teach him some skills, before continuing his run. When he got back to Javier again, he asked if Javier had thought he would not do it, and if he had expected him to just refuse. He then continued jogging again. When he got back to Javier for the third time, he asked if Javier had planned to tell him he did not have what it takes, and use that as an excuse to refuse to teach him. It seemed as if Lloyd was reading Javier's mind. Javier felt thoroughly frustrated. Lloyd laughed, ran past him, and declared that he was going to finish running. He then received a system notification stating that his passive skill, Annoying Brat, had risen to level 4. Lloyd was angry at the system, shouting that he knew it had just made that up and telling it to go away. As he continued running, Lloyd thought that the running was honestly difficult. He would be lying if he said it was not. However, compared to his life in Korea, this was much better. He remembered being without a family to welcome him, spending each day in a tiny room at a boarding house, carrying bricks up to a 4-story building all day, and loading and unloading delivery trucks all night, all just to still starve to death. He had held on to the hope that things would improve, encouraging himself to hold on a little longer. He had told himself it would get better someday, that he was working hard and deserved better, constantly pushing for just a little more, trying to reach a light that only kept getting farther away until he collapsed. Lloyd felt that compared to that pain, that despair, the running was nothing. He was motivated to continue. Later that evening, Javier recognized Lloyd's determination and decided that he would teach him his sword fighting techniques. Lloyd then received a notification that he had received 1 approval point from Javier, dropping his current approval rating to -28, and he had earned 18 RP, bringing his current RP to 29. Later that evening, Sir Neumann and Lloyd's father, Acros Frontera, were discussing the situation in Acros's office. Acros expressed his disbelief at the disrespect, considering Sir Neumann had protected their family for 5 generations. Acros admitted he had recently thought Lloyd had come to his senses, but now realized he was wrong. Acros mentioned that while he had no just cause to stop the duel, Sir Neumann, as his hair was involved, should not be too harsh with him. He asked Neumann to do just enough to pull Lloyd back to his senses without seriously hurting him. Sir Neumann bowed and said he would do as his lord wished, yet he inwardly acknowledged that duels do not always go the way one intends. As Sir Neumann walked out, he internally planned that if he were to kill the cocky hooligan by cutting off his head, and if the Baron raised an issue, he would simply kill the Baron and Baroness too and make it look like a suicide. After that, he planned to leave the tiny village and go somewhere bigger. He realized that thanks to that hooligan, his plans were actually speeding up as he walked away. The scene then cut to 1 month after Lloyd's training. Lloyd and Sir Neumann were in the field, ready to duel, with murmurs all around. Lloyd's father and mother, along with Sir Byron and Sir Javier, were on the podium. Lloyd was standing there, his shovel resting on his shoulder. Lloyd smirked at Sir Neumann, and replied that he was ready to knock his lights out. It was clear that a crazy fight was about to begin. With people murmuring about the fact that Lloyd intended to fight Sir Neumann with a shovel, everyone was surprised and confused by the commotion. Sir Neumann was clearly angry that Lloyd was not taking the duel seriously. Javier stared at the shovel and thought that a solid iron shovel was what Lloyd had requested from the blacksmiths. Lloyd's father commented that the whole thing was apparently a joke in the end, but Javier inwardly mused that he did not believe it was a joke. Javier recalled that what Lloyd had showed him over the last month, performing basic training in the small hours, running around construction sites to teach the village engineers about certain subjects, and then practicing sword work right up until he went to sleep, was not the disposition of someone preparing a joke. Javier felt that Master Lloyd was now more serious than ever. Lloyd's father raised his hand and declared that the duel between Lloyd Frontera and Sir Neumann would now begin. Sir Neumann stood ready, but Lloyd's stance with his shovel looked awkward. Javier thought to himself. Wondering about that lackluster pose, Sir Neumann swiftly dashed toward him and asked if Lloyd was playing with him right now. But then, Lloyd pointed his shovel and swiftly clanged it against Sir Neumann's sword, successfully dodging the first attack. Everyone was shocked. Sir Neumann dismissed it, saying luck does not strike twice, and struck again. Lloyd clang-blocked the attack for the second time. Javier was shocked, noting that Lloyd's movement was so efficient, a skill specifically adapted for real-life fighting, as if their swordsmanship had evolved through the ages. Sir Neumann was very confused by this. Lloyd smirked and inwardly thought that any Korean man would know how to do this, calling it the essence of modern hand-to-hand combat, bayonet training. He then quickly targeted Sir Neumann, but Sir Neumann was able to dodge. Lloyd thought to himself that the shovel was a much more formidable weapon than one might think. Sir Neumann tried to strike him again, but Lloyd swiftly dodged once more. Lloyd mused that the shovel's wide blade could be used as a shield, and that it could even cut through thick tree roots. Lloyd then did something inexplicable and strange, laughing at Sir Neumann. Javier was shocked, wondering if the whole thing was actually a joke after all. But Lloyd was simply laughing, appearing to be enjoying himself. Sir Neumann almost lost his composure and dashed at Lloyd one more time. Lloyd cut his steps and thought that the first weapon he prepared to destroy Sir Neumann was the shovel, and the second was the basic sword-fighting steps he learned from Javier. Sir Neumann was almost confused at this point and felt that he was truly intent on destroying Lloyd. Neumann inwardly wondered where this strength was coming from, as up until now Lloyd had only been a scumbag, bottle-loving lowlife. Lloyd thought to himself that his third weapon was the special expansion shoveling skill level 1. As he raised his shovel, Lloyd recalled his recent training. Javier, his father, and his mother had been watching him, and he had gained RP because their approval ratings had increased. He had used the RP to acquire a new skill, acquiring the option he saw. And so, at that moment, standing face-to-face with Sir Neumann, he was ready to use everything against him. But Neumann also had other tricks. He calmed himself and took a deep breath, thinking that against a civilian he had no other choice, admitting he had not expected to need to use this. He suddenly began collecting mana. Sir Javier was surprised as he watched Neumann accumulating mana within his mana heart. Lloyd realized that Neumann was summoning his mana heart. Sir Neumann took his stance and told the hooligan that they were only getting started, but Lloyd remained silent at that moment. In a flash, Sir Neumann dashed at Lloyd. Sir Javier quickly realized that for someone without the skills, it takes over 10 years for a regular person to summon mana hearts, and it would be impossible for Master Lloyd to block an attack with so much mana. At that moment, Sir Neumann swung his sword, attempting to strike Lloyd. Sir Neumann inwardly vowed to crack Lloyd's blade, and his head as well. Lloyd's mother gasped, and his father was extremely worried. But Lloyd also used his shovel to attempt to dodge the attack. Sir Neumann was shocked and wondered what was happening, feeling as if all the strength in his body was leaving him. Lloyd gave a very mischievous smirk, thinking that this was the fourth weapon he had prepared. The mana conjuring skill that had made Javier the strongest man in the world in this story, the Ashram Core technique. Lloyd was swiftly absorbing the mana from Sir Neumann through the impact of the sword and the shovel. Sir Neumann swiftly pulled his sword back and screamed that Lloyd was an absurd bastard for absorbing his mana. Lloyd took this opportunity to swing his shovel, and the impact was almost instant. His shovel struck Sir Neumann's face, and one of his teeth went flying. Sir Neumann wondered what had just happened, taking a very weird pose as he almost lost his balance. He questioned if that was his tooth. To his shock, another impact came as Lloyd struck him a second time. Then Lloyd raised his shovel to the air, glaring at Sir Neumann with a calm, almost calculated composure, and struck it down on the top of his head, making his eyes almost bulge. Sir Neumann instantly fell to the ground, leaving the entire arena stunned. Everyone gasped in surprise, wondering if Master Lloyd had won. There were many gasps and whispers. Master Lloyd's father raised his hand in confusion and declared Lloyd Frontera the winner of the duel. Just then, Sir Neumann was on the floor, confused, wondering what he had just seen. The sword expert he had lost to that low life. Lloyd then walked up to him and asked if he had heard that he had won the duel. He said that now that it was over, he raised his hand once more with the shovel and announced, "It's time for you to take a pounding." Sir Neumann looked visibly scared at this, as Lloyd's father screamed Lloyd's name, asking him what he was doing, since the duel was over. But Lloyd mysteriously struck Sir Neumann multiple times, shouting, "Grr, take that!" as his father could only scream his name in attempts to stop him. The duel had concluded, but Lloyd Frontera was not finished teaching Neumann a lesson. Some soldiers gathered, trying to stop Lloyd. They insisted that the duel was over and that he must cease the attack. Even Sir Byron felt a deep sense of confusion, wondering if Lloyd had completely lost his senses. Javier Ashran also gazed at Lloyd, questioning inwardly if the young man had truly gone mad. Lloyd told the soldiers it was fine and to release him, giving the appearance of calm and imminent departure. He took a momentary, deep breath, then continued to thrash Sir Neumann viciously. Javier watched, noting that from his vantage point, Lloyd appeared to be striking with calculated precision to injure the man completely, not just a single area. He also observed that Lloyd's calm face suggested he had already predicted the coming events, acting as though he knew everything in advance. 15 days earlier, before the duel, when Javier was still teaching Lloyd, Lloyd asked him to teach the Asheron core technique. Javier was understandably shocked. Lloyd questioned Javier's surprise, asking if he looked as though he were running from something, or if he had requested instruction on stealing. He then described the core method, saying it drew in surrounding mana, not just the mana conjured by the individual, and asked Javier for confirmation. Javier asked Lloyd how he knew about the technique. He thought to himself that it was a method he had not yet told anyone about, and that it was still incomplete. Lloyd then jokingly claimed that Javier spoke of it in his sleep every time he was put to bed with lullabies. Javier dismissed the claim, thinking that the young master was being strangely brazen, and realizing that, aside from talking in his sleep, there was no way for Lloyd to know about it. Javier apologized, explaining he could not teach an unfinished technique. Lloyd immediately asked if that meant Javier would teach him once he helped perfect it. Javier, surprised by Lloyd's confidence, said that if it were possible he would. Lloyd then offered his insights. He guessed that Javier was attempting to take the outside mana and combine it with the mana heart inside him, causing it to bounce off as a foreign object. Lloyd suggested a change in perspective. Instead of mixing the absorbed mana into the mana heart, it should be condensed separately nearby and used on the outside, like an auxiliary engine next to the main one, separate yet one. He asked Javier what he thought of the idea. Javier responded that it definitely sounded plausible, though he didn't know the proper answer. He began to ask Lloyd how he had figured it out. Lloyd interrupted him, asking if it made sense, claiming he was just spitballing as he clapped his hands. Javier thought to himself that Lloyd clearly knew something. He had that look on his face again. Javier looked away, contemplating the idea, and in that moment he was able to perfect the Asheron core technique, which he had agonized over for a long time. On his first try, he was able to successfully reach up to 3 circles, and Lloyd was sure that with more training, Javier could achieve 4, 5, or even more mana circles. Lloyd's approval ratings by Javier increased by 5 points because of this. Javier asked why Lloyd wouldn't just learn the mana heart itself. Lloyd scoffed, asking Javier what he was thinking, and if he thought he had nothing better to do than learn how to use mana hearts. He said he didn't need the full technique, just the absorption aspect, the ability to take in mana that came into contact with his body, not the mana from the air. Lloyd was sure that with this knowledge he would be able to beat Sir Neumann. And just then, he won quite easily. Acros Frontera then yelled at him to stop, refusing to tolerate the sullying of the knight's honor any longer. Lloyd paused, exhaled, and asked his father about this so-called knight's honor. He suggested his father look under the tablecloth and then decide if those words were appropriate for Sir Neumann. Lloyd's father paused, surprised, and pulled back the cloth to find letters underneath. He was shocked by the contents when he opened them. Lloyd explained they were letters exchanged between Sir Neumann and Tordes, the con man who had defrauded the family in a real estate deal. The letters detailed their financial status, the lordship's preferences, and plans to forge real estate documents. Sir Neumann was horrified as he had hidden the letters in a wall and wondered how Lloyd had found them. Lloyd inwardly grinned, recalling that Javier had found those letters in the book he'd read, so he had Podong scramble around for them the previous night. Lloyd's father sat down, heavily shocked and confused. Lloyd thought that his father truly was a kind person, as described in the book. Anyone else would be demanding Neumann's head. He knew his father was soft but kind, though he also realized a good person and a good leader were 2 separate things. Lloyd then started to offer his suggestion on how to deal with Neumann. His father shakily urged him to continue. Lloyd suggested they drop a vicious mouse on the man's head. If he was injured by the mouse, he should be exiled from the land. Otherwise, he should be demoted to a foot soldier and given an opportunity to repent. The people mumbled, wondering why a mouse of all things, as Sir Neumann would never be hurt by one. Lloyd's father was confused, but realized Lloyd was suggesting a test that allowed for repentance, while keeping the possibility of a greater punishment hanging over him. Sir Byron commended the idea as wise and generous, while still serving as a clear warning to others. Lloyd's father agreed to proceed, as Lloyd suggested. Lloyd asked Sir Neumann if he had any objections. Neumann responded that he had none and was grateful for the offered mercy. Lloyd thought that offering a guilty party a merciful outcome would not lead to repentance, concluding that his father was soft. Lloyd was certain such people would only grow more cunning and stubborn. Meanwhile, Sir Neumann was already plotting his revenge on Lloyd and his father. Lloyd smiled, saying it was nice to see Neumann smile, though it would be for the last time. Neumann was surprised and asked what he meant. Lloyd pulled out a nut and gave it to Podong, the summon, asking Neumann what he thought it meant. He flung Podong high into the air, glaring at Sir Neumann, and stated that the best way to ask for forgiveness was to remember that there was none. Podong ate the nut and immediately expanded in size. Lloyd's father, Javier, Byron, and everyone in the arena were shocked by the sheer size of the hamster. As the creature began its descent, Lloyd quickly fled the space. Sir Neumann could only scream as the hamster landed on him with a loud boom. When all was over, Lloyd raised his hand, smirked, and screamed, "Exiled!" declaring that the rotten apple of the land was gone. After the fight and the subsequent exile, the city returned to its normal construction activities. Podong was currently digging through the city. Javier asked Lloyd what the creature was doing. Lloyd explained that Podong was carving out a road. Now that the previously feeble soldiers looked like proper construction workers, the real work could begin. He recounted how the ancient city of Rome was enamored with roads and declared that he would use the method from their great Appian Way, starting a road that would run from the lordship's manor to the base of the eastern mountains. Javier asked why a road. As Lloyd walked away, he said that Javier would just have to wait and see, assuring him he would put their land on the map. Javier looked at Lloyd and calmly inquired where he had suddenly acquired this knowledge, asking if he was truly Master Lloyd, given that he had built a hidden system no one had ever heard of and summoned a high-level creature out of nowhere. Lloyd was warned by a sudden notification that Javier had suspicions about his identity. Lloyd felt a small trickle of sweat, recalling that the Javier of the book would not hesitate to use his sword if he found out someone had stolen the body of his lord's son. Javier would do that and more. However, Lloyd remained unconcerned, as he had a special skill for this situation. Activating his stubborn insistence, he asked Javier why he wasn't allowed to study in private. Javier replied that when no one was looking, all Lloyd did was drink. Lloyd challenged him, asking if he was watching him 24 hours a day, listing various activities, and asserting that Javier didn't know what he was doing. Javier then stuttered, asking for an explanation of the summoning magic, something even a skilled mage with 20 years of training would find difficult. Before Javier could complete his thought, Lloyd countered by asking how Javier was so adept at conjuring mana for someone in his early 20s without a teacher. Lloyd asked the question twice, then declared they must have a genius present. Javier grew uncomfortable and denied considering himself a genius. Lloyd immediately asked if that meant Javier could be a genius, but he could not, claiming he was simply born with the gift of summoning. Javier was stunned and speechless. Lloyd then activated his speedy topic change skill, turning swiftly and saying he was leaving to take care of important business if Javier had nothing else to say. He quickly walked away from Javier, thinking that the trick had landed and telling himself to calm down. He walked over to Sir Byron and instructed him to oversee the road in his absence. Sir Byron agreed, wished him a good trip, and assured him he would take care of it. Just as Lloyd was about to depart, Javier walked up and said he should accompany him, as it was his job to watch him. Lloyd replied, "Huh? Of course, you are coming with me." What a silly thing to say. Javier asked where they were going. Lloyd simply said, "Somewhere far," and explained that he needed to retrieve some stolen money. Javier glared at Lloyd, confused by his words. Later that day, in a small border town called Ludania, inside an inn, a man violently slapped a small table, looking visibly distressed. He lamented his incredible loss of money, convinced a trick had been used. This was the real estate con man, Tordes. Beside him stood a man in a black robe who pointed out that this was simply how gambling worked, and Tordes had always earned his fortune that way. The robed man stated he would take his leave if Tordes could not pay him for protection. Tordes turned swiftly and insisted he had enough for the current payment and would find the rest, so the man shouldn't leave. The robed man warned him he would be gone the moment Tordes defaulted. Tordes, stressed, muttered about finding another easy mark, saying they first needed to stay hidden from those who were out to get him. Just then, the door banged open and Lloyd swiftly entered, asking if they were just talking about him. Tordes stood up and screamed, demanding to know who he was. Lloyd said that Tordes wouldn't know what he looked like and then introduced himself as Lloyd Frontera, asking if the name rang a bell. Tordes was visibly shocked. He turned and fidgeted, looking left and right, then nudged the robed man. The man asked if he should kill Lloyd. Tordes yelled, "No, no, let's run, let's run!" The robed man grabbed Tordes by the belly, broke through the window and dashed out. As he landed, he saw a man holding a sword in front of him. The man swung the sword swiftly, preparing for battle, and commanded the robed man to leave Tordes there and walk away, adding that refusal would lead to him being viewed as a conspirator. This was Javier, who had been waiting outside. Javier thought that Master Lloyd had been right. They would attempt to escape out the back window and had instructed him to wait for them there. The robed man began to conjure black magic, asking Javier if he was too young to even know how to hold the sword. Lloyd watched them from inside the inn. He recalled that in the novel, Javier vowed revenge after losing his master, Baron Frontera, and managed to find the conman's head and fight his bodyguard. It was Javier's first encounter with a dark enchanter, and in the book, he struggled to hold his own against the gravitational magic used. However, Lloyd smirked, noting that things would be different this time. The mage launched an attack, which Javier dodged with his sword. Javier was slightly taken aback because the skill dispersed and instantly surrounded him. The man smirked, called Javier naive, and then folded his arms, clenching his fist as though activating the second phase of the skill. He commanded Javier to die. Javier began to struggle within the enclosed magic, feeling a great weight fall upon him. Lloyd mused that in the book, Javier was just an average, high-level sword expert. But now, Javier was equipped with a triple circle mana heart, and such an attack would have no effect on him. Javier swiftly cut through the gravitational magic and glared at the man, asking what that magic had been, mockingly calling it magic that increases one's weight. The mage was confused, began to sweat, and immediately dashed away, telling Tordes that their contract was no longer valid. Tordes reached out, calling the man a jerk and begging him not to leave. But this was no longer important, as Javier was walking towards him. Javier told him how serious a crime it was to commit fraud against a noble family and kicked him, sending him crashing into a barrel. Javier then stated he would cut off Tordes' legs and make him crawl to the courthouse. As Javier was about to swing his sword, Lloyd immediately stepped between the attack and said, "Enough, Javier. You are out of control." He said that Tordes would lose his head if he went to court. Javier was stunned and confused, wondering if Lloyd was showing pity for the man. Lloyd merely glared at him in silence, as he had other plans in mind. Later that evening, Tordes was seen trembling in his room, seated on a chair. Lloyd Frontera stood before him, and a brief silence settled between them. Lloyd attempted to calm the situation, mentioning there was no need to be so scared. He added that everyone got a little greedy sometimes, and he understood why Tordes had made the most of his opportunity. Tordes appeared confused by this statement. Lloyd continued, saying that to behead people for such a thing seemed like the law was a bit harsh. Tordes then asked if Lloyd was going to forgive him. Lloyd responded with an affirmative, saying he would not take him to court. Lloyd then assumed Tordes was grateful, and asked Tordes to hand over all the Baron's remaining assets. Tordes readily responded that he would do so gladly if it meant Lloyd would forgive him. Lloyd stated that they were just getting started, causing Tordes to gulp. Lloyd explained that Tordes needed to do something else to be forgiven. Tordes quickly asked what it was, offering his word as Lloyd's command. Lloyd then slid a paper in front of him, saying they would be done once he signed the contract. Tordes glared at the contract and asked what kind of contract it was. Lloyd said it was just a normal employment contract, with a paid salary of course. However, he calmly added that 80% of Tordes' salary would be kept back as repayment for the money he had defrauded them of. Tordes began to sweat profusely. Lloyd smiled and said that after just 520 years, Tordes would be all paid off and everything would be done. Tordes was extremely shocked at the absurdity of the proposal. Javier Ashran, who stood behind Lloyd, was also shocked as well, believing his initial suspicion that Lloyd was not about to just forgive the man was correct. Lloyd silently mused whether Javier thought he would be stupid enough to kill the man who owed him a debt, resolving that he would never let the opportunity go to waste and would ensure Tordes paid for the rest of his life. Tordes stated that he had never seen such a shameful and unjust contract. Lloyd responded viciously, saying that he could not force Tordes to sign it, suggesting they go to court instead. Tordes immediately grabbed the ink and signed the contract, crying profusely. After some time had passed, it was already the next day, and Lloyd was heading back to the Frontera barony. Javier mentioned to Lloyd that they had secured some money from Tordes, so they should not have to worry about the interest for a few months. Lloyd asked what he meant, saying he planned to invest the money in hiring more men. They had already started with 30 soldiers. Lloyd thought that 30 soldiers were not enough, considering that if he put up a help wanted sign, he wondered if any villagers would apply, given his annoying hooligan reputation. A few days later they arrived at the Frontera barony, and just as Lloyd had thought previously, he put up a banner saying, "Workers wanted." It offered a salary of 20 gold per week and directed people to inquire at the tourney square of the Baron's estate for more information. Not long after, there was a whole queue of men in front of Lloyd and Javier, murmuring as they waited for him. Lloyd was quite shocked, wondering if these people had not all hated him. Javier said they absolutely did, but Lloyd had delivered the undersystems on time and had taken care of the con man, so he was now considered a trustworthy and talented man. Lloyd was shocked upon hearing this, wondering how that could be true just for those reasons. One of the men in front of Lloyd spoke, saying that regarding the work contract, Lloyd interjected, telling him to sign. The man then continued, first wanting to express his gratitude. He explained that his child would suffer from a severe cold every time there was a cold spell, but this year, thanks to Lloyd's undersystem, they no longer had to worry. He thanked his lord as he bowed. Lloyd was a bit uncomfortable by this, saying he was very happy for them. He privately thought that he was just trying to satisfy his greed, and now felt embarrassed. The man then mentioned he had a relative in the neighboring Lacona land who wanted to know if Lloyd would accept an order from him as well. Lloyd considered that this was finally the first stage of his big plan. He reflected that he had not built all those undersystems at a loss for nothing. He would use the traveling expenses as an excuse to up the cost and clean up nicely, smirking viciously. He then told the man that of course he would, but added that they would need to pay extra for the travel expenses. Javier glared at him, thinking that there was that shifty look on Lloyd's face again, realizing that this was the reason Lloyd had built those undersystems at a loss. Javier then wondered why Lloyd was constructing that road to the mountain, finding it quite strange. Later, Lloyd and Javier were at a nearby cliff. Lloyd said to Javier that pretty soon, these mountains would be stripped bare. Javier was confused and asked for clarification. Lloyd continued, saying that an Ondal heating system required an astronomical amount of fuel and that the trees here would not be enough. Javier was speechless. He then asked why Lloyd had done this, knowing this would happen. Lloyd responded that that was why he was laying down the Appian Way. He explained that at the end of the road, they were going to mine for black coal and sell it at a huge markup, because once people got used to an Ondal system, there was no getting out of it. As he said this, he laughed viciously. Javier glared at him viciously as Lloyd continued, mentioning he would of course give their people a discount. A small one. A very small one. Javier thought Lloyd was so sneaky and devious. Lloyd then glared at Javier, saying Javier probably thought he was sneaky and devious, but asked if Javier thought they would be able to repay their debt if he did not do this. Javier was short of words and did not respond for a second. He then admitted this was the best solution for now. However, he pointed out that previous barons had left the black coal undisturbed not because they were unaware, but because they had tried several times. Lloyd responded, saying he knew the mine collapsed because of the weak bedrock, but he was different. Lloyd thought to himself that he had the benefit of modern excavation technology, and that the shield tunneling method was what they were going to use. "Let's go," he said, noting there was so much for them to do. Javier wondered again about the shield tunneling method, as he had never heard of such a thing. He resolved to trust Lloyd for now, believing their lord was a new man and had a plan. As Lloyd walked away, the perspective shifted, slowly zooming into the tunnel. Something slid through the view, and some antennae shuffled. Multiple eyes glared into the distance, and as the view zoomed in further, it became clear there were massive ants within the tunnel. Lloyd was about to encounter such a vicious threat. Lloyd Frontera was back at the pub, lost in thought as he attempted to finish his work. He imagined how wonderful it would be to possess remarkable skills, perhaps even the power to summon a modern building in an instant. Though he was using the intermediate design level 1 skill to generate artificial drawings, the process felt completely exhausting. He sighed, expressing a wish to summon 100 undead workers so he could avoid manual labor entirely. A system notification appeared, suggesting that if he disliked the process, he could simply draw everything by hand again. Lloyd immediately dismissed this advice, affirming that the skill, despite its drawbacks, remained the superior option. He then resumed drawing by hand. Following the incident involving Neumann, Lloyd had gained the approval of the Baron, the Baroness, Javier Ashran and Bayern, which earned him 639 RP. He used these points on an intense leveling spree, upgrading his basic planning and basic surveying skills to intermediate planning and intermediate surveying, and acquiring various new skills as he progressed. Later that evening, Lloyd stood outside the cave entrance. He needed a method to breach the blockage, so he activated the optional skill, Intermediate Surveying, GPR Scanning, to analyze the tunnel. The skill granted him a 5-meter depth view, enabling him to locate a secure path. The main difficulty, he knew, lay in digging it out quickly. Relying solely on human labor would take too long and the workers would become fatigued too rapidly. Podong was currently recovering from constructing the road and other extensive tasks. Even once recovered, Podong would be too large to safely enter the narrow opening. Lloyd realized that he needed to summon a new creature. Confident that he had ample RP, he initiated the summoning game. As he waited, the portal cranked and emitted the familiar sounds from his previous summon. A small head poked out, and a new summon emerged. The creature plopped onto the ground, momentarily splatting her head, but then sprang up, introducing herself to Lloyd as Bangul. Lloyd felt immediate skepticism regarding the new summon. He wondered internally whether this snake-like creature was intended for assassination, or if it possessed poison. From an initial glance, Bangul seemed entirely useless, Lloyd thought, but then he reminded himself that Podong had also appeared useless at first. He reasoned that Bangul must certainly have a valuable purpose as well. He asked if she could grow larger by consuming sunflower seeds, and the creature confirmed this with a nod. He then inquired if she possessed a special skill, receiving a second affirmative nod. Lloyd requested that she demonstrate her special abilities. A few weeks later, construction was well underway at the front of the shield tunneling machine. An enlarged Bangul was aggressively tearing and chewing through the earth. Behind her, Lloyd instructed Javier Ashran to ready himself. Bangul activated her skill, Accelerated Digestion Level 1. As Javier prepared, Bangul launched large steel domes using another skill. Javier swiftly cut these domes into uniform lengths, allowing the smiths to fashion steel segments for supporting the tunnel head. Javier experienced a moment of utter disbelief, questioning if he was truly a knight and why he was deep underground slashing at what appeared to be giant snake waste. "Great! Let's move forward," Lloyd exclaimed, signaling them to push the tunnel deeper. Lloyd started feeling lightheaded from the lack of oxygen and believed that without the installed pipe, they would have already lost consciousness. Javier suggested that it would be best for Lloyd to leave and take a break like the other men. Lloyd emphatically rejected the suggestion, reminding Javier that he was the one in charge and needed to remain on site. He recalled that in Korea, many executives merely used their titles for show and never visited the worksite, a precedent Lloyd had sworn never to follow. He used his GPR scanning skill once more and declared that he could see it, the black hole in the wall. "We are almost there, men. Let's keep going a little longer," he screamed, and everyone present echoed his excitement. Bangul snuggled up to Lloyd, who thanked her, acknowledging that the job was finished 10 times faster because of her efforts. Lloyd instructed everyone to pay close attention, explaining that once they reached the solid layer, they would dismantle the shield and enlarge the mining space. He cautioned that the area remained dangerous and they must not become complacent. Just then, they heard a low, slightly echoing rumbling sound. Lloyd turned toward the tunnel's exit. A small rock fragment crumbled, and he was jolted with shock, wondering about the source of the noise, since the surrounding rock was solid and there was no logical reason for a cave-in. He used his GPR scanning again and detected a hole where none had existed before. Suddenly, a massive ant burst through the wall, lunging as if to attack Lloyd, who instinctively screamed and jumped backward. Javier immediately adopted a defensive stance. The ant attempted to chomp down on Lloyd, but he successfully dodged the attack. Javier drew his sword and sliced through the ant's mandibles, while Lloyd used his shovel to smash the ant's head, killing it instantly. Lloyd was completely unnerved, thinking internally that this unforeseen scenario had not been covered in any of his books. He questioned what exactly was unfolding. Then a chilling realization struck him. Why were they merely standing still? Ants lived in colonies. Right in front of them, he saw many glaring eyes, and more ants began to pour out of the hole. "Everyone out now!" Lloyd cried as the workers began to flee. Javier was at the front, slashing at every ant that tried to pass through the entrance. Lloyd felt a growing panic, agonizing over the sheer number of ants. He thought that if they were overwhelmed, the barony would be doomed. He doubted Javier could hold them back for long before being overcome. There was not enough oxygen, and the shaft would not collapse. Even if it did, the ants would quickly dig themselves back out. Lloyd frantically questioned what their next course of action should be. Just then, Javier slapped him ferociously and shouted that Lloyd desperately needed to regain control of himself and prevent panic from taking over. The slap completely shocked Lloyd, and Bangul was startled as well. Lloyd quickly countered, yelling that he was not panicking but actively trying to formulate a plan. Javier urgently told him to think fast because he could not maintain the defense much longer. Lloyd realized that this was an ant nest and, recalling the black hole he had scanned earlier, an idea suddenly illuminated his mind like a turned-on light bulb. That was it, he thought. He ran to the side, grabbed one of the torches and screamed to Javier that they would confront the ants head-on and go into the ant nest. Javier thought the entire concept sounded utterly ridiculous. But as he slashed at more ants, he reasoned that Lloyd must have a valid justification for issuing such a command. Lloyd screamed his command, and they immediately dashed inward into the cave. A guard quickly entered the Frontera manor and explained the escalating situation to Lord Acros Frontera. Acros immediately asked what had happened to his son, Lloyd Frontera. The guard explained that Lloyd had ordered all the workers out and remained inside the cave with Javier Ashran. He further relayed that Sir Byron was preparing to shut down the mine completely. Acros wasted no time, going straight to his closet, dressing in armor and shouting for them to head back to the cave immediately. Back inside the cave, Javier was still struggling against the ant creatures. He asked Lloyd if they had reached their destination yet, and how much further they had to travel. Lloyd, engrossed in his task, simply told Javier to stop talking because he was busy. Javier continued fighting the ants. Lloyd felt relieved that the ants were not leaving the caves, but they were perilously close to being surrounded. He knew Javier could not hold out much longer. The hot, airless cave was exhausting even for him. Lloyd's internal focus sharpened. He had to find the methane gas layer without a second to spare. He was certain there must be a layer of methane gas there, as methane-producing bacteria lived in coal. He screamed at Javier to push forward, realizing that pockets of methane gas must be scattered throughout the area. If he could find one, he felt, he could blow up the entire colony. As he glanced back, Lloyd spotted the methane layer in a small crack. He slammed his shovel into the ground and instructed Javier to keep slicing up the ants quickly while he dug. He swiftly began his excavation, shouting with exertion. An ant shrieked as it lunged to attack Lloyd, but Javier quickly sliced it apart, continuing his relentless defense. Javier focused on ensuring no ants got close to Lloyd, who was digging toward the methane layer. Suddenly, they heard an extremely loud, disruptive shriek from one of the ants. They then saw a massive ant, far bigger than any they had encountered before. Lloyd surmised it must be the queen, and she was absolutely enormous. She walked slowly toward them with a crunchy sound. Lloyd asked Javier if he could hold her back. Javier flatly replied no. Lloyd then challenged him to try first before dismissing the possibility. Javier argued that some things were known without trying, but conceded they currently had no other choice. As the giant queen dashed toward him, Javier unleashed the full power of his mana circles and mana heart, dashing forward to meet her attack. The giant ant queen seemed shocked that Javier could actually hold his own against her assault. As the brawl continued, Lloyd kept digging, convinced Javier was holding out long enough. The time was now, he determined, digging furiously while Javier fended off the mother ant. A foosh sound suddenly came from the ground, and Lloyd instantly took note of it. He yelled at Javier to run to the exit, and simultaneously dashed toward the lighter stick lying on the ground. The Ant Queen chased them as they ran out of the dungeon. Lloyd noted that the small tunnel they had entered through was their goal. They kept running relentlessly. When they reached the entrance of the small tunnel, Lloyd instantly turned back. The two of them scrambled out of the tunnel, and Lloyd hurled the torch back into the confined space, shouting for the ants to feast on it. The torch bounced off the queen ant and tumbled past the other ants as well. As Lloyd and Javier emerged fully from the hole, the mother ant attempted to follow but was too large to fit and became stuck, clogging the entrance. The lighter finally reached the exact spot Lloyd and Javier needed it to, the methane gas exuding from the ground. Just then, a loud kaboom erupted, destroying all the ants within the space and obliterating the mother ant stuck in the entrance. Javier swiftly used his strength to shield Lloyd from the blast. All the ants deep within the space were instantly torched. The vibration of the explosion tore through the entire mine, and even those standing outside felt the rumble from the cave. Lloyd's father, Akros, who had already reached the cave entrance, cried out for Lloyd. Sir Byron held him back, insisting that his lord could not put himself in danger as well. Not long after the commotion from the explosion had subsided, Lloyd was seen underneath Javier. Bangul was also on the ground. Lloyd slowly rose, clutching his ears, which were ringing profusely. He looked back and realized his plan seemed to have succeeded. He noticed Javier had shielded him from the blast. He apologized to Bangul, who appeared deeply shocked by the explosion. However, an immediate problem arose. Lloyd looked forward and realized the entrance was blocked. He understood this was not good. If that side had collapsed, they were now trapped within the tunnel. He slowly stood up, still dizzy from the ringing in his head. A notification appeared, informing him that his oxygen was running out. Lloyd acknowledged that he already knew. He immediately used a skill to try and see through the enclosed space ahead. He realized they had to go that way, but that he would have to dig for more than 15 feet. With the remaining oxygen time counting down, he dashed toward the spot where he needed to dig, knowing he had no other choice. He declared to Javier and Bangul that they would all get out of there together, no matter what. Javier looked up at the digging Lloyd, who said he was responsible for both of them and had to find a way out. Javier then slumped back, utterly exhausted. At that moment, Lloyd received a notification stating that Javier was touched by his determination not to give up, granting Lloyd a 6-point approval rating from Javier. He also earned some RP, making his total RP 157. The good news of the RP was not as vital as the rapidly reducing oxygen level. Lloyd decided he should try something else immediately and called out to the messenger system, asking it to search for an upgradable skill that could help them in this dire situation. The system began scanning his pre-existing skills, and Lloyd waited patiently. The identified skills were absorbing mana from the surrounding, processing absorbed mana, and amplification of absorbed mana. The system noted these could be combined into the skill, Ashram Core Technique. Yes, Lloyd thought, feeling a sense of affirmation. He had practiced every chance he got, even after the duel against Neumann. Whatever he had learned to do, he could now improve. After receiving the notification asking if he would combine the skills into the Ashram Core Technique, Lloyd immediately tapped the confirmation. His body instantly began to glow, as if a power was surging into him. It was the Ashram Core Technique, Single Core Level 5, which he had just awakened. A mana circle appeared in his heart and began to flow around it. He regretted not having a mana heart, but he could definitely feel the mana circle. Mana was amplified to 120%. Usually, a skill could only be improved slightly, even with great effort. However, since Lloyd had RP, he received the option to increase the skill's level. He decided to boost it significantly, in a very short time. He clicked the Level Up option, and the Ashram Core Technique increased to Level 6, increasing mana amplification to 125%. He repeated the action, noticing it cost him 5 extra RP for each level, but he did not stop. He continued to level up, determined that he had no other choice but to increase the level all the way. After some time, his skill upgraded to possess 2 mana circles at once. Ashram Core Technique Double Circle Level 1 had awakened, and his mana amplification was at 200%. However, he could not go any further because the next level up cost 100 RP. And he only had 7 RP left. At this point, he addressed the system, asking if it had something else to tell him, referring to the additional options he received when he leveled up his surveying and design skill. He immediately received a notification detailing optional skills. Level 1 Energizer, which allowed movement for 10 minutes without fatigue but could only be used once per day, and Latent Power Surge, which allowed tripling mana amplification for 20 seconds, also usable only once per day. Here we go, Lloyd decided, and used the Energizer skill. Lightning and power surged throughout his body. He resumed shoveling as the oxygen continued to dwindle rapidly. He desperately wished the tunnel end was near as he shoveled. He used his skill to peer through the wall. He thought he saw a tiny hole and hoped that seeing even one tiny hole meant he was close. He kept digging for what felt like hours, and his oxygen level continued to drop. Finally, he could see the end of the hole. He kept shoveling and shoveling and shoveling, even as the oxygen diminished further. He was screaming with effort as he tried to shovel. The oxygen was critically low. Only 3 meters separated him from the oxygen space. But just then, his body gave out, and he collapsed to the ground, his shovel clanking beside him. The 10-minute time limit for the Energizer skill had expired. The scene widened to show Javier and Bangul still lying almost lifeless. Lloyd decided to use the screen again. He activated the latent power surge skill, picked up his shovel, and went up for one last, desperate attempt. Shouting, he continued to shovel. Only 30 centimeters remained, but he only had 20 seconds of oxygen left. The sound suddenly cut out as Lloyd, having given up, fell to the ground. He thought the effort was futile. The time was too short. He yearned for the nice, sweet life of the son of a country aristocrat, feeling as though he was speaking his last words. Silence filled the space. Suddenly, Lloyd heard a loud crumbling sound and opened his eyes. He looked up at the wall as it crumbled. All of a sudden, Podong's head opened through the space, and with Podong came oxygen. Lloyd was extremely excited to see Podong and eagerly breathed in the incoming air. He mustered his last bit of strength to stand up, calling himself Suho and reminding himself that the sweet life of a nobleman's son awaited him. Later that evening, Lloyd's father, Akros, and Byron, along with a few soldiers, were walking into the dungeon. Byron told his lord it was too dangerous to go any further. Akros, however, told Byron and the others to turn back, stating that he would continue to the end. But then he spotted something. Looking closer, he saw 2 people approaching. It was Lloyd and Javier. Lloyd was carrying Javier at that moment. Lloyd then received a notification. He had overcome his physical limitations in an extreme environment through impressive improvisation, and this experience was having a strong effect on his ashram core technique. He was awarded a new skill called Power Saving Mode, which explained that even in extreme exhaustion, Lloyd could use the ashram core technique. Just then, his father threw his torch and cried out as he dashed toward Lloyd. When Lloyd finally saw his father, his body completely gave out, and he fell. However, his father was able to catch him before he hit the ground, and they shared a moment of relief and closeness as the night wore on. Not long after, it was morning, and some time had passed. Villagers were discussing what had happened concerning Lloyd. One of them said he thought Lloyd was a troublesome drunk, but realized he had been wrong. His nephew, who worked in the mine, saw it firsthand. When the wild ant appeared, Lloyd did not hesitate to evacuate the workers first. The rumors were true. Someone else confirmed. Another asked if it was true that he and Sir Javier went into the ant colony, just the 2 of them, and that he had gotten rid of all the ants. The first speaker confirmed it, adding that Lloyd had carried Sir Javier out on his back, even though Lloyd himself was half dead. Lloyd had completely changed from the Lord Lloyd they had known before, and his reputation in the barony began to shift. The scene then returned to Lloyd, seen through a window, resting on his bed with Javier seated beside him, watching. Lloyd was sleeping peacefully, then slowly opened his eyes. Javier registered this with a quiet surprise. Lloyd received a notification as he woke up. All of Baron Frontera's subjects were deeply moved by his heroic courage and sent him their praises. Lloyd stared at this, the first thing he saw upon waking, feeling slightly confused. The notification continued, saying that for this great achievement, he had been awarded a large amount of bonus RP. His RP swiftly jumped to 507. Lloyd saw the total and felt being a hero was unimportant compared to the 500 RP he had just received. "Sweet," he said, grinning softly. A few weeks had passed, and the barony had settled back into its regular work routine. Inside the tunnel, a group of men paused their work as their attention was drawn to 2 approaching figures. Master Lloyd Frontera, accompanied by Javier Ashran. One worker instantly recognized him and mentioned it was Master Lloyd. The men stopped and respectfully bowed their heads. One worker wished him a good day, and sincerely thanked him again for his gracious service. Lloyd simply replied with a casual acknowledgement. The workers regarded him with profound admiration, firmly believing that he was a man who had fought and risked his life for their benefit. They felt he was unlike other aristocrats and was the very embodiment of noblesse oblige. Lloyd, however, felt distinctly uncomfortable with the intense attention. 2 weeks had gone by since the wild ant incident. In that time, work on the mine had proceeded smoothly, and everything appeared to be in order. Yet Lloyd maintained that safety must come first, especially now. He felt compelled to find and resolve even the smallest potential hazards. As they proceeded deeper into the tunnel, Javier respectfully asked why they were searching the ant tunnels again and inquired if he might ask a question. Lloyd told him to be brief, noting the very limited air quality in their current location. Javier then asked why Lloyd was doing such dangerous work in person when he could simply assign the task to the workers. Javier questioned whether Lloyd was truly worried about the workers' safety and began to remind Lloyd that he was the heir to the land, implying the risk was unnecessary, but Lloyd cut him off before he could finish. Lloyd called Javier a fool, telling him that the greater the risk, the more reason the man in charge should be in the forefront. Javier was surprised by these words. Lloyd then turned and grinned mischievously, explaining that doing so meant no one could complain when he took the biggest share of the money. Javier was left uncertain, thinking that he could not tell if Lloyd was fundamentally good or bad. Lloyd received a notification stating that Javier's approval rating was about to rise, though it ultimately did not. They reached a specific point that appeared to be a dead end. Javier mentioned that this must be the end of the tunnel, with nowhere left to search. Lloyd disagreed, insisting he thought there was a space behind it. He then began digging into the so-called dead end. Lloyd suggested they must keep digging to find out for sure, reminding Javier that the space could be full of ant eggs, which would cause a significant problem if they were to hatch. As Lloyd dug deeper, he broke through and found a hidden space. Inside, he saw an orc and several other animals tied up in webs. Lloyd was mildly surprised. Just then, Javier moved to pull out his sword to strike down the orc, mentioning that it looked dangerous and he should take care of it. Lloyd stopped him, cautioning him that despite appearances, Javier was actually quite reckless. Lloyd asked what kind of thing the creature was. Javier responded that it was an orc, of course. Lloyd asked if an orc actually looked like that, and wondered if it was dead. Javier doubted it was dead, explaining that he had heard wild ants paralyze their prey and store them away for later consumption. Lloyd smirked, feeling he had hit a jackpot and internally declaring the immobilized creature to be an amazing new item. Later that day, within the Frontera Manor, the orc sat on a chair. The orc introduced himself, stating that his name was Arash. He told Lloyd he had saved his life and that he would not forget the deed, ending all his sentences with a peculiar oink. Lloyd immediately asked if he was saying oink on purpose to help his character stand out. The orc responded that he had no idea what Lloyd was talking about, concluding with an oink. Arash, the son of the orc tribe chief, quickly recovered thanks to the Baron's physician. Arash declared that the son of the Sand and Steel tribe chief did not forget acts of kindness. He instructed Lloyd to name his desire, and it would be granted, adding another oink. This was exactly what Lloyd had been hoping for. Lloyd glared at him and said, "Oh, really?" He then smirked and requested 120 orcs to work the mine. The orc immediately responded that this was impossible. Oink. Lloyd was initially furious, but then calmly asked why the request could not be granted. The orc mentioned that Lloyd had just clicked his tongue like a bad man oink. Lloyd vehemently denied it, claiming it was merely a habit, just like Arash's oink. The orc explained that they were warriors, and warriors only followed a warrior's orders, oink. He stated that Lloyd was not a warrior, and even if they were given orcs, Lloyd would not be able to command them, oink. Lloyd realized that was how their society worked. He recalled hearing that orcs in the wild had to bring back the head of a wild ant for their coming-of-age ceremony. He deduced that Arash must have accidentally ventured too far into the ant cave and gotten paralyzed. If that was the case, Lloyd thought, licking his lips ferociously, there was nothing they could do. He then casually congratulated Arash on completing his coming-of-age ceremony. Arash looked away uncomfortably, admitting that he had not even caught a wild ant and had instead gotten paralyzed, calling it a failure, oink. Lloyd pretended to be confused, asking what Arash was talking about, claiming that they had caught the creature together, motioning to the ant head. Arash responded that he did not remember catching an ant that big. Lloyd feigned concern, saying that Arash's memory must have been affected by the paralysis. He then dramatically described an unbelievable sight, grabbing Arash by the shoulder. Lloyd claimed that when he entered the ant's nest, the queen ant looked like a quivering pile of rags and had cried out, "Argh, I can't believe I was attacked by a young orc." Arash questioned this, asking if wild ants could talk. Lloyd affirmed that they spoke very well, "Thanks to you." Lloyd continued, saying that because the ants were weakened, he was able to easily strike them down. Javier was clearly disgusted by Lloyd's fabricated story. Lloyd then switched to the other side of Arash, and then back again, declaring that the wild ant was caught by both of them. He pointed Arash's head towards the exoskeleton of the queen ant's head, which was hanging by the side of the room. Lloyd emphatically stated, "Arash, the great warrior, and me, had caught that wild ant." Arash hesitantly repeated the title. "The great warrior?" Lloyd confirmed it, and then asked once more about the 120 worker orcs. Arash swiftly responded that Lloyd would have them. 1 week later, they found themselves in the village of the Sand and Steel tribe of wild orcs, having completed the long journey to retrieve the worker orcs. However, Arash's father, Akush, greeted them with an apology, saying, quote, "Apologies, Lloyd Human, your request cannot be granted, oink." Lloyd was shocked, internally wondering why they had changed their minds again. He addressed Akush as His Highness and the great chief of the Sand and Steel tribe, politely asking the reason for the refusal. Akush explained that his tribe ate a lot of meat to build up their muscles, oink. They had to hunt every day in 3 shifts. Otherwise, they experienced muscle loss, which he claimed would mean the end of the tribe. Therefore, he could not reduce the number of warriors on the hunt, oink. Lloyd paused, questioning if they went out hunting every single day. Akush confirmed it, yes, oink. explaining that meat deteriorated after one day, and if they ate it then, they would suffer muscle loss. Lloyd internally noted the orcs' extreme focus on muscle loss. Javier suggested they give up, as he recognized that protein and muscles were the essence of life for these orcs. But Lloyd had an idea. He asked Akush, "What if your meat could last multiple days without spoiling? You wouldn't have to go hunting 3 times a day, and could lend us your worker orcs." "Is that what you are saying?" the chief responded. "Yes, Oink. Although us orcs would like to repay your kindness, we cannot risk muscle loss." Lloyd responded confidently, saying he believed it was possible, and that he could make the meat last for days without spoiling. Before continuing, they quickly rewound to their initial arrival at the village, and the display put on by Arash and Akush. When Arash saw his father, he screamed. When his father saw him, he screamed, "Arash!" Arash dashed towards his father with a fush sound, and his father dashed as well with a baboom sound. They swiftly ran toward each other. When they met, they crashed into one another and hugged in a long embrace, demonstrating immense happiness. The impact of their embrace created a harsh wind that blew on the faces of everyone nearby. Lloyd smirked, internally noting the enormous power of the hug and realizing that if he acquired 120 workers like that, their productivity would increase hundreds of times over. Another detail caught his eye. When Arash carried the queen ant's head, he declared to his father, "Father, I, Arash, have brought back the head of the queen ant, Oink." Everyone screamed in approval. Akush, beaming with pride, announced, "Fantastic! My son, in celebration, today will be a growling leg day." They then witnessed all the surrounding orcs squatting and lifting the treasures they had in their camp. Lloyd was shocked, carefully observing the treasures and realizing they were actually of very high value. He was perplexed as to why they were being used that way, thinking they had likely pillaged some villages or just picked them up somewhere, but clearly saw them as nothing more than fitness tools. That was why Lloyd had initiated a contract with the tribe chief to get the worker orcs and their treasure. Javier summarized the contract, mentioning that the contractor, Lloyd, would build a Sayok bingo for the client, the orc tribe, and the contractor would receive the fitness tools as payment, with replacement stone fitness equipment being provided instead. Javier questioned what a Sayok bingo was, internally admitting this was yet another thing he had never seen nor heard of before. Lloyd explained that just as royal palace mages used ice magic to preserve food, the Sayok bingo was a building that could do the same thing without the help of magic. Javier then asked where he had learned such a thing. Lloyd smugly replied that he had learned it at a student society. Javier repeated, "A student society?" Lloyd shifted the topic, mentioning that he did not want to explain and asking how there could be so many things Javier did not know. Lloyd then used his skill to change the subject, stating that to build the Sayok bingo, they needed a rock called granite, which was extremely strong, motioning to the rocky sides. Javier commented that the rock did not look like it would come loose easily, and agreed it was hard. Lloyd mused that there was no dynamite here, but they had something else instead. He turned to Javier, grinning viciously, internally labeling Javier as human dynamite. Javier was confused, thinking that Lloyd was going to use him again with that look on his face. Lloyd then recalled a crucial episode in the book Knights of Blood and Iron. In Namaren's wall, a city was trapped within a powerful evil magic force field. Inside the city were thousands of refugees that Javier needed to save. By then, Javier had achieved Swordmaster status and could form up to 4 mana circles, but he could only helplessly watch the refugees have their mana sucked out of them. Javier had desperately thought that he must save them, even if it cost him his life. At that moment, he created his lethal skill without even realizing it. 1 circle to protect the main mana heart, and the remaining 3 circles smashed together to form a mana blast. He used the skill to tear open the wall that had caused the chaos. From then on, this mana blast became one of the Knight of Blood and Iron signature moves, along with the Ashran core technique. Lloyd, wearing his usual lying expression, suggested to Javier that he could do something like that, having already explained the skill to him. Javier asked honestly how Lloyd knew about such things. Lloyd insisted that the thoughts had just come to him and asked if his eyes looked like those of a liar. Javier countered that they looked like the eyes of an extremely annoying liar. Lloyd laughed wildly, saying, "Oh no, wow, our little Javier's heart is rather dark." He encouraged Javier to just try it, mentioning that it would be cool if his swordsmanship evolved. Javier stated that he knew Lloyd was doing this because he wanted to get something out of him. Lloyd replied, "Come on, whatever could you mean? I just want what you want. It's a win-win." Javier walked toward the granite, saying that if it really was possible, it would be good for him as well. Lloyd laughed behind him, thinking that if this worked, he would get so much work out of Javier. Lloyd stood there as Javier attempted to practice the technique Lloyd had explained, 1 circle to protect the mana heart, and the remaining 2 mobilized. Javier fixed his sword into the granite and mentally commanded the word release. Suddenly, a flash erupted from the tip of his sword, followed by a loud kaboom. Lloyd realized Javier had mastered it on the first try. A smokescreen obscured Javier's silhouette, As Javier approached Lloyd, his figure was revealed. All his clothes had been burned off from the force of the skill. Javier angrily asked Lloyd if he had anticipated this outcome as well. Lloyd shook his head quickly and apologized profusely. Javier sighed, looking away to calm down. He conceded that Lloyd's thinking had proven correct this time as well, and asked if it was now time for him to start working. Javier was grateful for the teaching, and Lloyd received 3 points of approval rating, which reduced Javier's approval rating to -11. He had earned 54 RP for improving his relationship with a key character, leaving his current RP at 565. Javier reminded him that he was a knight and trained with his sword to protect his master, not to use it for construction. Lloyd told him he did not have to thank him, but Javier retorted that he was not thanking him at all. After that, construction proceeded at a lightning pace. Javier sliced up granite blocks while Pudong transported them. The orcs, meanwhile, harassed the human workers, shouting at one of them, "Hey! If you pick it up like that, you will throw your back out. Move, human. Let me show you how it is done, oink." The orcs then carried the granite themselves. Lloyd noted to himself that he had not even asked them, but the orcs had taken up the job like gym addicts. The orcs were happy, calling it a good workout and a, quote, killer workout. Lloyd fanned himself as the work continued swiftly, thinking that at this rate, they would finish 5 times faster than planned. Now all they needed was some ice and insulation. Lloyd asked Javier how many days it had been since they had sent out the 5 men to fetch the insulation. Javier replied that it had been 3 weeks. Lloyd stated that this was more than enough time for a trip there and back. Javier suggested that one of 2 things had happened. Either the men were being lazy and taking their time, or something had happened to them. Lloyd stood up, telling Javier they should go look for them. Javier blocked Lloyd, asking to complete the mission on his own, saying that they did not know what misfortune had befallen them, and that the heir to the estate should not risk himself. Lloyd stopped him, asking how many times he had to say that he was the man in charge and responsible for everything. Javier had no option but to yield and said, "Let's go then." Later that day, having reached the deeper parts of the mountains, they found a glove on the floor. Lloyd picked it up, recognizing it as the special glove he had made for his men, along with the straw for the insulation. Javier called out to him, "Master Lloyd!" Lloyd stared at him, asking what the problem was. Javier mentioned that something seemed off toward the Progia Gorge. Lloyd asked how so. Javier responded that the flow of mana seemed unnatural, adding that the feeling was very faint, so he was not entirely sure. Lloyd wondered about the Progia Gorge, pondering if there had been an episode in the Knights of Blood and Iron about it. Suddenly, he realized the situation and screamed at Javier, "Let's go!" "There's no time to waste." Javier asked if he suspected something. Lloyd responded that their men might already be dead, and urged them to keep going quickly. Javier was shocked and confused, but followed Lloyd's orders regardless. They moved swiftly into the mountains, taking note of all the straws along the path that guided them to where the men were possibly captured. Lloyd, despite his worry, maintained a calm demeanor. Some time passed, and they finally arrived at the entrance to the Lupelin dungeon. This was the place that Javier had tackled earlier, the secret hideout of the dark sorcerer named Lupelin. Lloyd was extremely angered that his soldiers had been captured, deeming it a violation of his property rights, and stating that even the death penalty would be generous for the perpetrators. Javier, without thinking, ventured into the cave and asked Lloyd to follow behind him. Lloyd called out to him, asking him to wait briefly, but it was too late, as Javier unknowingly activated a magic mine in the cave. Lloyd grabbed and pulled Javier before it could detonate. The resulting explosion would have been a huge drain on their stamina had Lloyd not intervened. Lloyd then scolded Javier, questioning if he was truly a knight, and asking how he had failed to consider that traps like this might be present in the cave. In the book, this trap had actually caught Javier, though he managed to withstand the pain, forcing him to enter the dungeon covered in wounds. However, there Javier was not caught again because he was able to use his mana sense to find the traps before he encountered them. So Lloyd told Javier to try focusing on being more in tune with the flow of mana in the area, which he had noted earlier was a bit off. Lloyd explained that mana usually had a uniform concentration in the air, so where a booby trap was planted, there would be an unnatural cluster of mana. When Javier tried to concentrate, he was able to notice the irregularity and told Lloyd to follow him. Lloyd responded that Javier was good at this. Javier thought that Lloyd always avoided a straight answer with lies, but there was no doubt that Lloyd Frontera knew exactly what was happening right now and what would happen in the future. Javier was suspicious of Lloyd, wondering how he could have known about the traps, especially since he did not feel any strange mana or special energy from Lloyd himself. He decided to just focus on the important task at hand of rescuing the soldiers. They kept walking inside, and suddenly, the scene shifted into a cage where a man was putting on a black robe, like black mages always did. He turned, took note that a trap had gone off, and wondered if it was an intruder. He thought about whether they were there to rescue the men he had abducted a while ago. He closed the book he was reading, believing that the men outside were surely already dead. He then walked towards the metal door by the side, acknowledging that the penetration preparations were finally complete and hoping that the experiment would succeed this time. Opening the door revealed the men Lloyd and Javier were looking for. He pulled one of them by the hair as the person begged not to be killed. He then threw the man into a mana circle constructed with blood. Holding a scythe, he began to mumble, listing the pentacle connected to the underworld. A circle soaked in blood for 100 days, and a young human were the perfect components. As he prepared himself to swing the scythe, the man screamed as though calling for help. Suddenly, a voice said, "Hey, hey, 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 you!" calling out to the people in front of him, specifically the man who was about to kill the soldier. It was Lloyd and Javier. Lloyd screamed that the mage should not touch his stuff, or he would kill him. The mage was shocked, wondering how they had bypassed the hundreds of traps. He used one of his skills that immediately pulled down the metal door in front of them, and the door behind slammed into the ground as well. Immediately after this happened, Lloyd took in a very deep breath and held his breath because he knew there would be sleeping gas in that space. The guy who cast the magic spell thought to himself that it was sleeping gas that could knock out an elephant. He was glad to know he would have 2 more people for the sacrifice. Lloyd then used his skill, Energizer, and received a notification saying that the Ashram Core Technique option, Energizer, was activated, and he would be able to walk without fatigue for 10 minutes. Lloyd then began to dig the ground, thinking that he did not even need 10 minutes to shovel his way through. He had energy to spare now, unlike when he was in the ant cave. Since Javier had tried every possible way to cure his sleep insomnia without finding a solution, this gas had no effect on him. Javier was immune to all forms of sleeping medication. Lloyd dug and dug deeply and quickly while Javier looked at Lloyd and thought that he was digging just like a mole, and he should mock him about this the next chance he got. Lloyd then came out and told Javier to get in there, pointing to the hole in the ground. Javier pounced on the hole and swiftly went underground, pointing his sword towards the end of the hole. He then gathered his mana as he slammed his sword into the end of the hole, using the mana. All of a sudden, a loud explosion occurred from the other end. The guy was shocked and trembled as he fell to the ground. Within the new hole that appeared in front of him, Lloyd reached out his hand, grabbed the ground, and pulled himself up, saying, "Hey there, punk, I bet you've never seen an entrance like this." The guy was shocked, wondering what type of monster this was, and activated yet another skill that summoned a massive ghoul. He thought to himself that his reincarnation spells kept failing, but he had created this extremely strong ghoul as a byproduct. There was no way they would even be able to get a single scratch on its steely skin. As the ghoul roared in front of Lloyd and Javier, Lloyd was about to say that it was going to be pretty tough, explaining that its weakness was its leg. However, it seemed like Javier did not pay him any attention as he leaped, and immediately activated his mana blast attempting to slash the ghoul. From the look of things, the mana blast worked like a charm because he was able to slash the ghoul in less than a second. The conjurer was shocked at this, and his mouth was wide open. Even Lloyd was shocked as well, thinking to himself that Javier used the mana blast to cut that thing in half, but that was not even in the book. Javier seemed to be far stronger than what Lloyd had thought of him. After the man had exhausted all of his usable skills, he fell to the ground, reflecting on the grim certainty that these 2 men were going to kill him. He simply could not defeat them. Lloyd Frontera then squatted closer to the man and mentioned that he had set his construction back by weeks because he had abducted his workers. Lloyd asked how he intended to make up for this costly delay. The man immediately thought he absolutely had to plead for his life and needed to escape first. He begged Lloyd to forgive him and spare his life. Lloyd demanded that the man be silent, stating that he did not care about apologies. He then reiterated his question, asking specifically how the man was going to compensate him. The man quickly told Lloyd that the cave was full of valuable tools for sorcery and promised to give him absolutely everything. Lloyd responded with slight surprise, asking if that was true and confirming if the man was saying that everything in the cave was now his. "Yes, sir, take it all," the man confirmed. Javier Ashran was already leading the abducted men out from their hidden confinement, reporting to Master Lloyd that the men were all worn out but otherwise seemed to be fine. Lloyd was pleased with this news. He continued speaking to the man, mentioning that if his men had stayed there for even a few more days, they would have starved to death, asking the sorcerer why he would commit such treason. The man explained that he was researching how to bring back the dead. Lloyd asked if that is even possible, and what would he do if he could bring back the dead. The man paused for a second and then said that he was trying to bring back his dead wife and child. Lloyd was taken aback. The man began a rambling tale about the lord he was serving, whom he referred to as a fiend. He explained that this lord had tried to steal his wife, so he had planned to run away with his family, but the lord had tracked them down. Stop, enough of your sob story," Lloyd interrupted, cutting the man off. Lloyd questioned him, asking if he seriously thought that if he did bring his wife and child back to life, they would thank him for killing hundreds of innocent people to achieve it. He questioned the man's serious lack of morality. The man started to interject, but Lloyd cut him off again, pointing to the ghoul he had created. Lloyd detailed all the people sacrificed to make that creature, their lost lives, families, and happiness. He asked if none of that mattered simply because the man had a tragic backstory, concluding that no matter how the man tried to spin the tale, it would not change who he really was. By this time, Javier had led all the men out of the cave. The man absorbed Lloyd's harsh words, and the reality of his actions sank in. Lloyd stated plainly that the man had utterly crushed the happiness of others and called him a serial murderer, stating that others had lives just like his. Hearing these words, the man started crying. Lloyd remained composed. He calmly took his stance and informed the man that he would return with his workers to collect the tools. He issued a final, serious warning. If the man ever tried to hurt anyone again, there would be absolutely no mercy, as he then turned and walked away. The man was shocked that Lloyd was considering showing him mercy. He screamed out his thanks to Lloyd. Lloyd thought about the novel's original plot, recalling that Javier had forgiven this Lupelin guy and forced him out of the laboratory. That version of Lupelin had then gone on to kill hundreds more people and altered his own body, eventually becoming the annoying villain that Javier fought repeatedly. Lloyd knew all this, yet he was still walking away from the man, feeling certain that Lupelin still intended to attack him even in that very moment. Suddenly, Lupelin activated yet another spell on his hand and lunged viciously at Lloyd, a smile spreading across his face. Lloyd turned swiftly and reminded the man that he had just told him there would be no mercy. The attacker froze in shock. Immediately, Javier sliced Lupelin's neck in his spellcasting hand, instantly halting the attack. His limp body fell to the ground. The scene then cut to a flashback for Lloyd. There was an elderly man in front of him who scolded him, demanding to know where his manners had gone and insisting that his greeting needed to be at 90 degrees to show his respect. This old man would constantly pick on Lloyd for trivial matters, cursing without reason. Every time the old man acted out, Lloyd would apologize and promise to be more careful. The old man would always respond by telling him to learn some manners, while Lloyd could only insist inwardly that kindness brought more kindness, and conflict only begot more conflict. Therefore, he must avoid confrontation. Lloyd felt that if he treated the old man with respect, one day that respect would be returned. He held back every time he was provoked, trusting in this belief. One day, Lloyd encountered the man once more and greeted him, bowing down properly and wishing him a good morning. The man angrily replied, yelling that Lloyd was shouting, nearly breaking his eardrum. The old man eventually took Lloyd for a weak pushover, and he walked away, dismissing Lloyd as pathetic. Lloyd felt enraged. He tried to convince himself that he should just ignore the man and forget about it. He told himself to just let it go, and it would be over. If he lost his temper now, things would only get worse. He repeated the words, inner peace, to try and calm himself down. But as the man walked off, he scoffed and remarked that Lloyd's parents must be so ashamed to have him as a child, laughing at his own words. Lloyd became extremely annoyed. He strode up to the man and grabbed him by the shoulder. He immediately punched him directly in the face, causing the man to scream. People nearby reacted with surprise and confusion. Lloyd punched him again, and then again and again. He kicked the man and beat him up ferociously. Even as he was delivering the brutal beating, a part of him worried, questioning if he had just ruined things for himself. People came around to stop him, because the situation looked terrible. What was the outcome? Another day, Lloyd was walking and encountered the man once more. As the man saw Lloyd, he swiftly walked in a completely different direction to avoid him. Lloyd had finally found peace. He concluded that there are clearly times when violence must be met with violence. The sentiment that we shouldn't sink to their level was exactly why, in his past experience, murderers, attackers, and fraudsters were given only a slap on the wrist because they also have rights. Lloyd dismissed this idea, finding it laughable. Villains, he firmly believed, deserved a punishment befitting a villain. As he walked out of the cave, that was all he could think about. Lloyd Frontera and his men began to walk back toward the Stone Tribe after the incident at the cage. Lloyd noticed that all the men were panting heavily as they carried the burdensome bags. He called out to them, worried they were going to collapse, and instructed them to hand over their luggage. One man insisted he could handle it, replying that he was fine. Lloyd countered this, stating that if the men passed out, he would have to carry both them and the bags. He then commanded them to surrender the bags immediately. You too, and you too. Give them here. Though they protested, saying, "No, my lord," Lloyd dismissed their hesitation. "That's an order. Give them to me." The men tried to suggest carrying their own items, but Lloyd gathered their bags, secured them together with a rope, and shouldered the load himself. He issued a clear threat to them, stating that if he heard another word, no one would be getting a bonus. He then directed them to continue, saying, "Now, let's go." This act of assistance deeply affected all of them. Lloyd's men were moved by his consideration, and even Javier Ashran felt a measure of surprise. Javier found he could not discern whether Lloyd was genuinely concerned for their well-being or simply unwilling to deal with the additional inconvenience of dragging unconscious men. He supposed, however, that the motivation did not matter right now to the men, who saw Master Lloyd as a trustworthy leader they would willingly follow. As they walked, Lloyd received a notification. It stated that the rescued soldiers had been profoundly touched by his actions and that this moving episode would soon spread far and wide, asking if this was not a rewarding experience. Lloyd was annoyed by the message, saying curtly that if the reward was not monetary, he was not interested. Upon arrival at the tribe, they were taken to the newly established Seok Bingo, or ice storage. Arash was inside and expressed interest in the interior's appearance, yet he seemed somewhat uneasy. He mentioned to Lloyd that it was only slightly cooler than the outside temperature, which meant that the meat would inevitably spoil, leading to their loss of muscle. Oink. Lloyd acknowledged this, confirming that they had no ice yet and the place was unfinished. Arash mentioned that he knew what ice was, but pointed out that there was none in the hot wasteland. Oink. Lloyd assured him that if they did not possess any, they would simply make some. Arash, confused, asked how. Lloyd simply replied, somehow. This vague response unsettled Arash, who began to wonder if he had invited a trickster into his space and whether the story about the queen ants was also a fabrication. Lloyd then received a notification which informed him that Arash was not as naive as Lloyd had assumed. Lloyd angrily told the notification to be silent, asserting that he had never thought Arash was foolish and that those were purely the notification's own thoughts. The notification disagreed, stating that they were not its thoughts and that Lloyd did think Arash was a fool. Lloyd denied it, clarifying that Arash was a very important and easily influenced customer. Arash shook his head, reasoning that since Lloyd had rescued him, he should not regard him as an unreliable person. He walked out of the Seok Bingo and told Lloyd to let him know if any assistance was needed. Lloyd waved in reply, saying not to worry, they would soon be finished. Javier then asked Lloyd how he planned to produce ice. Lloyd paused, turning to Javier and admitting that was a good question, and wondering aloud what they should do. Javier was stunned, realizing that Lloyd genuinely had no strategy. He asked if Lloyd had made a contract with the tribe without a feasible plan, questioning if he had intended to deceive them. Lloyd turned to Javier, annoyed. He asked Javier if he knew what all unsuccessful people shared. Surprised by the question, Javier waited. Lloyd explained that they always found excuses not to act. I can't do this because of that, or I can't do that because of this. He said that they found a million reasons not to attempt something without even trying. Lloyd then countered that people who succeed simply begin. Lloyd then stepped outside to the rocky area, thinking that first he should create a giant mold for the ice cube. Once Podong and Bangul retrieved water from the lake to fill the mold, they would be ready. He contemplated the nature of ice making in this world, which employed magic. He understood that true magic involved manipulating matter and mana to change its arrangement. He had felt this process daily while training and absorbing mana, noting that the natural world contained different types of mana with varied properties. Lloyd suddenly realized he might actually be able to succeed, and grinned at the insight. The next day, Lloyd considered that he, of course, did not know how to wield mana directly. At that same time, he called out to Podong and Bangul to come over with the water. Lloyd theorized the process of elemental magic. Since he possessed the Ashran core technique, he hoped that he could identify the mana types and eliminate the one he did not need. He dipped his hand into the water within the Seok Bingo, attempting to absorb the mana. His strategy was to absorb only the warm mana and thereby leave the cold mana behind. However, when he started, it appeared he was doing the opposite. It was far more challenging than he had expected. Javier stood watching him, thinking that Lloyd believed he could accomplish it, yet he was struggling. Javier recalled Lloyd's earlier statements about starting things and somehow figuring them out, deeming it utterly reckless. Still, Javier observed that Lloyd was already working on the technical issues, almost as if he were showing off. Javier sighed, thinking that there was no way to deter him, and continued to watch. Lloyd then received a notification stating that he had developed a new application for the Ashran core techniques, and the skill had subsequently leveled up. A few days later, the Seok Bingo was complete, and the orcs were seen shivering inside. They declared their amazement that Lloyd had created ice. Oink. Lloyd replied that all they needed to do now was add insulation. Arash's father, Akush, expressed his awe, oink, saying they would no longer have to discard meat or hunt daily. In celebration, he declared that it would be a day of strength training and told everyone to gather in the square. Lloyd then glared at Javier with a smirk, gesturing toward the ice and referring to the mind of an entrepreneur. Javier conceded, raising his hands in defeat, saying, Yeah, you're right. Some time had passed, and when Javier and Lloyd finished all their preparations, it was time to leave. The Sand and Steel tribe gave them a farewell. Akush spoke, saying that they, the Sand and Steel tribe, felt a deep sense of appreciation for Lloyd, the human. Lloyd responded that he was merely fulfilling the terms of their contract, stating that Akush was too kind. Lloyd had successfully acquired the 120 orc workers he had initially requested. Akush then explained that orcs were different from humans, and did not simply disregard the terms of a contract. He stated that when orcs were grateful, they demonstrated it. Therefore, he, Akush of the Sand and Steel tribe, made a solemn promise to Lloyd. He declared that from that moment on, the family of Lloyd Frontera and the Sand and Steel tribe were blood relatives. The surrounding orcs echoed the declaration. Lloyd was noticeably taken aback by this. Akush reiterated that the Fronteras were their friends, and that an enemy of the Frontera family was an enemy of their tribe. He pledged that should anyone cause them difficulty, the tribe would stand by their side. Lloyd received a notification stating that the Orc tribe had accepted him as a true friend, increasing the Orcs' approval rating of him and granting a special bonus of 100 RP for helping the tribe open up. Pleased, Lloyd returned the gesture the Orcs had made earlier, saying, "Long live the Sand and Steel tribe." They arrived back in town after the long and challenging journey. The townspeople were understandably frightened by the sight of 120 imposing Orcs entering the town. Lloyd thought that he should issue an announcement to try and calm their fears, as people already regarded him as someone to be feared. Even the Baron, who knew the purpose of Lloyd's trip, was frozen with apprehension upon seeing the Orcs in person. A secondary benefit soon emerged. The story of Lloyd defeating the Dark Sorcerer and rescuing the soldiers began to circulate across the land. People praised his boldness and determination. He received a bonus of 300 RP, increasing his current RP total to 911. Though Lloyd did not care much about the praise, he relished the RP. At this point, the Baron had promised to locate wealthy merchants for the Orcs' exercise equipment. The only remaining task was to manage the Dark Sorcerer's tools. Lloyd was examining the items he had taken from the cave when Javier asked if anything held monetary value. Lloyd, flipping through one of the books, said he was checking for anything they could use before selling any of the materials. Suddenly, he noticed something shocking. "What's this?" he exclaimed. He immediately stood up, grabbed his jacket, and began to run toward the mine. He told Javier to tidy up the rest, dashing away breathlessly. He rushed into the mine, calling out, searching for Tordes. Tordes then appeared, asking if his lord was looking for him. Lloyd grabbed him by the shoulder and said, still catching his breath, "Ah, there you are! I have some good news." He then asked Tordes if he remembered the terms of their contract, the part about working for 520 years. Tordes confirmed that he did. Lloyd smiled, telling him that, upon reflection, that clause was a bit excessive, a sort of joke, but that Tordes did not have to worry anymore. Tordes looked at Lloyd with surprise. Lloyd then said, "Here, there's a spell that can turn a departed body into a ghoul." The mention of this term startled Tordes. Lloyd tapped him on the shoulder, smiling, and said, "That means you can work the entire 520 years. Isn't that exciting?" "Sounds fun, right?" A brief silence followed. Lloyd then looked intently at Tordes, asking if he was the only one who was excited and commanded him to smile. Tordes stared back at Lloyd. After a moment, he burst into a smile, though tears streamed from his eyes. Lloyd walked away, telling Tordes to keep up the good effort, assuring him that he believed in him. Lloyd then received a notification, stating that the ruler of the underworld was impressed by him and offered him a position, but Lloyd dismissively told it to be quiet. The notification paused, then stated that it was actually true, but Lloyd ignored it. Later that day, within the Frontera Manor, Lloyd walked toward the office, planning to discuss matters with his father, but found Acros Frontera was not there. He asked one of the female house staff, who approached him and informed him that his father was in the reception room with some guests. Lloyd was surprised, wondering who the guests were. The servant replied that they were Mr. Shiloh and Mr. Meatloaf, the lenders who had previously visited. Lloyd paused upon hearing this, then gave a delighted smirk at the answer, feeling excited by their presence. The servant was, conversely, shocked by the expression, wondering what had caused that look. In the reception room, the men were addressing Lloyd's father. They mentioned, "So Acros, as you already know, our policy has been violated. Our standard policy requires the principal of the loan to be received in a single repayment. However, just this once, we will make a special arrangement so you can repay 10% of the principal if you hand over the rights to the mine." Lloyd's father appeared noticeably distressed by the proposal. The lenders pressed him, asking why he was not responding, noting that the arrangement would reduce his interest payment and would benefit him. Suddenly, a knock sounded at the door. Lloyd asked, "My lord, it's Lloyd. May I enter?" His father responded, "Oh yes, please, come in." Lloyd entered with an evident glow on his face. He smiled and said that it had been a while, and that he did hope they had both been well. One of the lenders waved a paper in his direction, saying that if Lloyd intended to resort to menacing behavior again, he should leave, as they possessed an official invitation. Lloyd quickly replied, "Ah, no, of course you do. You are intellectuals after all, haha." He then mentioned that he could not help but overhear their generous offer, and suggested he be so bold as to present a proposal of his own. The man replied that he did not care for any offer from Lloyd. Lloyd then said that going forward, they would repay their debts in smaller amounts, and that the lenders would, of course, lower the interest accordingly. The man retorted that he had said he did not want to hear it, and questioned Lloyd's impudence. Lloyd said. "So you two can propose subpar offers, but I cannot? Well, that suddenly makes me upset." Just then, a random voice interjected, asking, "Who would dare?" as footsteps entered the room. Arash walked in, announcing, "Who dares to upset my Frontera brother?" Oink. The lenders were startled and stared in shock. Arash continued, proclaiming that anyone who caused difficulty for the Frontera family would be overwhelmed by the full strength of the Sand and Steel tribe. Oink. Lloyd placed a friendly hand on Orochi, saying, "Come on, my friend." They weren't shouting at me. Orochi simply followed by grunting oink once more. Lloyd then commented that it was fine. The lenders simply had a very loud voice. The lenders were already visibly shaking. Lloyd told them not to worry about Orochi and then returned to his proposal. "Now, about my offer. What do you think? Should you refuse it, you might cause distress to me." Orochi immediately added that if they caused distress to Frontera, he would break them into pieces, oinking once more. The men fled the manor as quickly as they could. Inside the manor, Lloyd said to his father that if he had things his way, he would cancel the debt entirely, but since that would be against the regulations, they would have to settle for these changes. Akros thanked him. Lloyd then mentioned that the construction business was gradually expanding, and the mining of soft coal was proceeding smoothly, asserting that they would be able to pay off the debt in no time. He handed the contract to his father, asking him to keep it safe as he was the one named on the document. However, he added that they faced one major issue that, if not solved, would become serious. His father expressed concern. Lloyd explained that these workers consumed a vast amount of food, 10 times more than a normal human, and the cost of feeding them was enormous. He warned that if this continued, they might accumulate even more debt. Akros was visibly shocked by this news. The scene cut back to the mines, where the orcs were clearly the center of action. One of them furiously smashed the ground in a rage. A worker quickly approached Lloyd Frontera, mentioning that a particular orc had been working for 24 hours non-stop. Lloyd asked where it was, and the man pointed out its location. "Stop right there," Lloyd commanded the working orc. He told his men to get the orc out of the mine, and not to let him return until the following day. It took 5 men to successfully drag the single orc away. The orc screamed in protest, insisting he did not want to rest, and that he needed to work out his muscles. Oink. Lloyd reflected that with the orc's unbelievable fitness and insatiable thirst for a workout, productivity had increased by more than 10-fold. Orochi was speaking with Lloyd, seemingly after Lloyd had offered to give the orcs wages. The orc responded by asking if Lloyd meant money, adding that they had no need for money. Oink. They refused payment. Orochi clarified that all the orcs asked for was that their bellies be full. Oink. Lloyd privately considered that this was easier said than done. The perspective shifted to the Frontera estate, where Lloyd was conversing with his father, Akros Frontera. Lloyd stated they must increase tax revenues exponentially because they needed the money to buy the meat for the orcs. He argued that considering the productivity of the mines, they would never lose money. Akros understood his son's point but reminded him of the reality, mentioning that they had no sense of the current struggle of the people and that taxes could not be increased, as it was already a struggle for them. Lloyd responded by saying he knew, and that raising taxes endlessly for no reason would be like robbery. He expressed that if people felt everything they earned would be taken away, they would not be willing to work hard, and tax revenues would ultimately fall, leading to a loss. Akros then asked Lloyd how he proposed to raise tax revenue, if not through taxes. Lloyd answered that it was simple. They needed to have the people make lots of money. He then presented the idea of the Forgotten Northern Lands. He proposed they transform the Moritz wetlands into farmland and give that land to the people. He explained they could farm to their heart's content, make a killing, and then pay tons of taxes. The scene cut to the Moritz wetlands, where Lloyd and Javier Ashran were walking. Javier mentioned that the land had been abandoned for hundreds of years and questioned how people would farm there. Lloyd replied that he had a plan, and Javier should just wait. Lloyd conceded to himself that he at least needed to say that he did have a plan, acknowledging that this was not going to be easy. Soon after, Lloyd was seen constructing something at the Frontera estate. He mused that the terrain was so big, and they would have a lot of variables. He knew he needed to build something that could drain the water even when it rained. He was attempting to mold the terrain to create a replica of the wetlands, hoping to forge something that could withstand the rain and direct water away from the land itself, allowing them to farm. He felt he had no choice but to revert to the old-fashioned way. He was struggling and making tons of mistakes, but he was still trying and trying. As time passed, Lloyd was seen looking unkempt, hungry, and tired. Lloyd was mumbling and mumbling as he continued his experiments. Javier and Akros walked into the scene. Akros asked Javier how many days Lloyd had been at this. Javier responded that it had been 21 days, my lord, adding that Lloyd had not been resting or eating properly. Javier then asked Akros if he should stop Lloyd. Akros immediately said no. He admitted that although he was Lloyd's father, he used to hate him and had wondered when he would ever become a man, if it was even possible. But now, he noted, as if by a miracle, Lloyd was a different person and working to help the land. Akros decided that he might not be able to help him, but he did not want to be an obstacle. Javier agreed, calling it a wise decision. He described the current master Lloyd as the type of person who would never give up until he kept his word. Just then, Lloyd received a notification stating that Baron Frontera's approval ratings of him had increased, that he had received 20 RP, and his current RP was now 931. More time passed, and Lloyd was finally able to construct what he was working on. It was a success, and he was gladdened. "The water is draining away," he exclaimed, excited. He declared that tax money would flow in just as the water was draining, and internally, he longed to be showered in that sweet golden money. He fell to the ground and sighed, thinking that that took a lot of work but wasn't that bad, especially compared to staying up all night doing part-time construction work. He then received a notification. "Your efforts have had a major impact on the special skill architectural design. You have unlocked a new skill." Lloyd sat up, glaring at the screen and wondering what the design skill option simulation mode was. He read the description, which stated that data obtained from surveying the land is used to create a virtual simulation. He then looked at the mountains behind him and tried to stretch the model he had just seen. It crumbled immediately. Lloyd yelled at the system, asking why it was only telling him about this now after he had worked his butt off for an entire month. The system responded, mentioning that Lloyd had just said it wasn't that bad. Lloyd angrily retorted that he was just saying that, but it was actually really hard. The system then told him that only knowledge he had acquired himself was enhanced with skills, and this was all because of his wish. Lloyd sat back, remembering that the system had mentioned this wish earlier when he first took over this body. He said he still did not understand, confessing he did not know what his wish had to do with him coming to this world. He only wished to get through college, get his license, get into a good company, and not have to worry about money. That was all he wished for. The system informed him that those were merely goals, and a wish was something much more intense, something that transcends all time and space. Lloyd gradually got up and told the system that if it was going to keep talking nonsense, they should stop, as he had so much to do. He then called out to Podong and Bangul, asking them if they would like to meet a new friend. They were surprised by this question. The next day, Lloyd stood in front of the Moritz Wetlands Reclamation Project site. He told Podong and Bangul that he would need the two of them to get rid of all the water from the wetlands. They were shocked. As Podong was screaming at him, Lloyd picked Podong and told him that the job was too big for just the two of them. He gradually dropped them on the ground and said that was why he was going to get them some new friends right now. He decided he was going to use all the RP he had left and get as many summons as possible. He then called out to the summon system and requested it to show him the summon game, noting that 100 RP was required, and assumed the cost would increase by 1.5 times each time. He clicked to begin the summoning. The usual cranky sounds emanated as Lloyd hoped for just one summon who could get big like Podong and Bangul to carry the water away. A small head poked through the portal. Instead of plopping like the others, it sprang out of the summoning mechanism and smacked Lloyd on the nose. It bounced to the ground, plopped up, sprang to its full height, and glaring at Lloyd it said, "Hamang." Lloyd glared back at Hamang, noting to himself, a hippo, no wait, a water-guzzling hippo. Podong and Bangul extended their greetings to Hamang, who felt accepted in the group, and they danced and introduced themselves. Lloyd squatted and apologized for interrupting, but asked if he could have Hamang's manual. Hamang spat out the manual as usual, but Lloyd was already used to the disgusting thing. He picked it up and was surprised when he saw that Hamang did not get bigger with sunflower seeds. He wondered how he could be of use, wondering if he got a dud this time. Lloyd seemed very angry as he glared at the new summon. He told the system to show him the summons game screen because he wanted another attempt. The system responded that the summons game can only be played once a day. Lloyd was annoyed, thinking the new summon was a complete waste. Bangul, who was annoyed with Lloyd, was seen screaming at him and trying to comfort the new summon. Lloyd asked them if he was being mean. He squatted and told them that they got it though, right? They needed someone bigger for their next project. Lloyd then stated that Hamang was so small he was useless. Suddenly, Podong and Bangul began to protest, holding the most adorable protest posters and shouting at Lloyd. Lloyd backed down, saying, fine, you two are scaring me. He then asked Hamang what his skill was, warning that if it was dehumidifying or something similar, he could go in Lloyd's closet. Hamang's skill window appeared, and it read, 1 shot. Lloyd accessed the skill, asking if Hamang could chug water in 1 shot. Hamang nodded. Lloyd asked how much, and Hamang smacked his belly, stating, as much as he could stomach. Lloyd paused, thinking to himself that he thought this was going to be the perfect summon, acknowledging that he knew his luck was too good to be true. Then, Hamang walked towards the stream and told Lloyd to watch him. Lloyd urged him to go on and show them. Hamang began to slurp the water, and Lloyd watched. He slurped, and Lloyd began to feel a bit confused as he noticed something. He watched Hamang closely as the slurping continued. Lloyd thought, am I imagining it, or does it look like he is getting bigger? Hamang kept on slurping and gulping, becoming more and more confusing to watch. Suddenly, Lloyd's head tilted upwards as Hamang's size had almost quadrupled. Hamang kept on slurping and slurping all the water around until suddenly he stopped, standing up as if satisfied with what he had done. Lloyd then glared at the land in front of him. It was basically dry at this point, with even the fish looking confused. Lloyd was shocked, thinking, it can drink this much water? The view shifted to a satellite perspective, showing Lloyd as a tiny dot, as Hamang had been able to drink the entire water in half of the wasteland. Lloyd was excited, thinking he could get rid of all this water in a single day. Podong and Bangul then looked at Lloyd, smiling smugly. Lloyd asked them why they looked so smug. Lloyd then called out to the system, asking if this was really random, noting that he always seemed to get the exact skill he needed. The system responded that usually when someone goes into another world, they have some sort of a special skill, right? It noted that Lloyd was a human with no skill or luck, just a whole bunch of handicaps. The system suggested that maybe he got lucky random summon as his special skill, or maybe not. Shrugging off the inquiry, Lloyd glared at the system screen, annoyed at how vague the response was. But then Hamang spoke to Lloyd, saying he wanted to drink some more. Lloyd told him to go ahead and drink till his heart's content because tomorrow they would start reclaiming the Moritz wetland. Time passed, and for the project, Lloyd decided they would begin with the vertical drainage system. The sight of the gigantic Hamang was very scary to all the workers, as some of them almost fainted. First, Hamang was to remove all the water from the wetland. He spat out the water he drank into the river. He would get smaller, then do it all over again. Then they removed all weeds or debris from the exposed ground. Javier would then use mana blasts on the exposed ground, making holes all over the ground, and then putting in some bamboo stones. They would fill the area with sand to make a sandbank, while Podong packed down the sand. To get water out of the deepest parts of the soil, they used bamboo stalks like a straw, and had Hamang one-shot it all. After that, they would build a levee using his upgraded weapon, Lloyd's simulation skill. After 10 days of this, they had completed a sector. "We have a lot of work left to do," Lloyd screamed, asking his men what would happen when they were done. Everybody screamed, "Bonus party!" "Let's go," Lloyd said, hyping up his men as they were working. Some time had passed, and they were done. Javier glared at the once wet land, noting that it really was turning into farmland. The former wasteland was becoming farmland. Javier felt confused, thinking to himself that he wondered when he started being drafted in like this, like it was so normal, and asking himself what his duties were before. He had forgotten his normal purpose. Then suddenly, Lloyd ran towards Javier, calling his name. He gave him a bag of seeds and said to take them, plant them all the way over there, and look after them. Javier tried to rebel, saying he was a knight. Lloyd responded that it was to get rid of the pests and pleaded with the dear knight to save their land. Javier gave in, saying, "Ah yes, sir." He went to the area that Lloyd had instructed him to and was seen watering the seeds he had already planted. He got a rude awakening at that moment, realizing that Lloyd had gotten him again, but he vowed to himself that next time he must get out of this. Then Akros called out to Javier, saying that Lloyd was really turning this wetland into farmland. He believed that not only he but the people of the area must be thinking the same thing, calling it a miracle. The workers were extremely happy and glared at Lloyd with admiration. Lloyd then received the notification, "Everyone in the Fraternal Barony feels deep awe and respect for the miracle that you have performed. For this great achievement, you have been awarded a large amount of bonus RP. Bonus RP for a special achievement, 450. Lloyd smirked at this, feeling a sense of satisfaction from all the work he had put in. Time passed, and the seeds that were given to Javier to grow had already grown to a substantial amount. As Javier took care of the seeds, he smiled, happy with what he had done. Lloyd, who was sitting nearby, then said to Javier that now all they needed to do was build a water wheel, and they would really be done. Javier questioned him, asking what the water wheel was. Lloyd explained that it was something to remove the water when the rain comes. Otherwise, all the land they had reclaimed would be underwater. Lloyd slid down from where he was sitting, saying that his engineers should be here any time now. Suddenly, they heard a weird sound that caught their attention, and the thud of boots directed their attention to it. It was a group of horses and some men that were approaching. Lloyd wondered who they all were. Javier responded that it was Viscount Lacona from north of the Moritz wetlands. The horses halted. Then the man in front asked who was in charge of the project. Javier was about to tell Lloyd that he should show some manners, but Lloyd quickly interrupted Javier, saying, "Oh, that would be me. Can I help you with something?" The man then questioned if Lloyd did not know the land belonged to Viscount Lacona, and commanded Lloyd and Javier to leave the place at once. It seemed like an even greater problem had presented itself. The Moritz Wetlands, a place untouched by human presence for hundreds of years. Despite its desolation, the northern portion was designated to Viscount Lacona for administrative purposes, while the southern part belonged to Baron Frontera. Lloyd Frontera strongly believed that the Viscount had deliberately waited until the land was successfully reclaimed before suddenly appearing to assert his ownership. He considered the Viscount a person attempting to seize the rich, fertile land without putting in any labor. Lloyd privately conceded that, technically, the northern part of the wetlands did belong to the Viscount, at least for the moment. Lloyd then addressed Viscount Lacona, mentioning that if the Viscount's claim was indeed correct, they were currently trespassing on his lordship's land. The swordsman accompanying the Viscount affirmed this, stating that the Viscount had been granted the land by His Royal Highness. Lloyd sharply interrupted the swordsman's declaration, asking why a lowlife would dare to interrupt noblemen in conversation, and commanding him to keep quiet. The swordsman and every other person present were shocked, and the swordsman was visibly enraged by Lloyd's cold remarks. Lloyd then continued speaking, this time directly to Viscount Lacona. Lloyd introduced himself as the eldest son of Baron Frontera. Viscount Lacona acknowledged that he had heard of Lloyd's crude behavior, and stated that he had absolutely nothing to say to Lloyd, demanding instead that Lloyd bring his father. Javier Ashran, observing the exchange, thought the Viscount's behavior was incredibly rude. Lloyd remained silent for a moment. The swordsman reiterated the Viscount's demand, asking the boy if he had not heard him, and repeating that he had said to bring Baron Frontera. Lloyd responded by asking, "What?" He then expressed that he could hear quite well, but that the sound was similar to the buzzing of a pesky fly. Viscount Lacona scanned the area, confused by Lloyd's strange comment, asking, "Where? Where?" until his guard informed him that Lloyd was insulting him. "What?" Viscount Lacona uttered, completely bewildered. Lloyd then calmly began to speak, citing the Land Act of the Kingdom, Title 321, Special Exemption regarding development of barring land. Viscount Lacona tried to interrupt, saying to wait a minute, and pointing out that Lloyd had just been talking about something else. However, Lloyd continued, detailing Clause 1, Aim. The aim of the law, he explained, regarded the development of long-standing barring land and the establishment of ownership of the reclaimed land. Ignoring the Viscount's attempts to gain his attention, Lloyd proceeded to Clause 2, Definition. Barring land, he defined, was land that had been abandoned for over 100 years without any residential or cultivation activities taking place on it. He continued, holding everyone's attention with Clause 3, Ownership. Any and all land that met the requirements listed below, he stated, would be recognized as belonging to the developer of the barring land. Lloyd then listed the requirements. First, he stated, the land must be developed with a clear purpose through investment of capital and labor. He went on, second, the land must be able to support a residential building. And third, the land must be able to support long-term agricultural activity. Finally, Lloyd walked towards the planted vegetable, grabbed a sprout, pulled it out of the ground, and stated the fourth requirement. The land must have produced at least one harvest of a crop variety specified by law. He presented the crop. Viscount Lacona was clearly annoyed. Javier then understood why Lloyd had given him the seeds and asked him to plant them there, claiming it would get rid of the pests. Lloyd announced that they were witnessing the historic first-ever harvest of the Meritz wetland. He assured the Viscount that there was no charge, saying he was not that harsh. Viscount Lacona was confused, wondering where this brat had come from and if he had planned all of this out ahead of time. Lloyd handed him the crop and said to take it as a gift. He then calmly told the Viscount to now please get off his land. Viscount Lacona was visibly enraged and annoyed as he and his men rode away on their horses. Javier asked Lloyd if he had received a prophecy about the Viscount's arrival. Lloyd dismissed the idea, saying it was not his first time dealing with leeches who tried to steal someone else's hard work. Suddenly, the people began to cheer loudly that Master Lloyd had saved their land, shouting, 3 cheers for Master Lloyd! Hip hip hooray! Hip hip hooray! Hip hip hooray! Lloyd instantly stopped and changed his expression, demanding if he was paying them to cheer for him, and commanded them to get back to work. The scene shifted to a later time, during a heavy downpour of rain. The water was flowing through the designated stream paths. Lloyd was sitting outside, anxiously waiting for the rain to stop. With summer over, fall had brought heavy rain. Lloyd had run hundreds of simulations, but he felt absolutely no room for complacency. He felt he needed to stay and ensure until the very end that nothing went wrong, verifying if the Moritz wetland could genuinely be useful. Time passed and the rainy season ended, with everything still intact. Lloyd received a plethora of notifications indicating a monumental achievement in construction, having left an incredible mark in the history of civil engineering of the Laurasia continent. As a reward, he had received a large amount of skill experience. His surveying and design skills had both leveled up. His approval ratings from Baron Arcos Frontera, the Baroness, Javier, and Bayern had gone up by 3 points, and his town approval rating had also risen by 3, making his current RP stand at 1355. Lloyd was very pleased, thinking they could now move on to the next stage. Meanwhile, in the Lacona Viscounty, Viscount Lacona was visibly furious. He shouted at one of his advisors, demanding to know about the reclaimed land and migration incentives. The advisor responded that they were giving away the land for free, with full protection for 3 years, but in return, the residents must live there for 5 years, and migration was being restricted. This meant the residents would spend the last 2 years furiously cultivating the land that would eventually become theirs, turning the Meritz wetland into a golden goose laying golden eggs. Viscount Lacona was incredibly annoyed and jealous, believing half of the land was supposed to be his. He thought he could not give up this fertile land so easily. He then called the administrator in front of him and ordered him to bring in the supervisor of the dye workshop. A few days later, within the Frontera barony, Lloyd woke up with a throbbing headache, his brain pounding. He wondered if the long days had finally caught up to him, but he knew he could not get back to sleep when the situation was getting worse. All morning, he had been receiving reports of people running around in distress. He needed to organize the sections and distribution allotment. He called out to Javier, telling him to wake up as he was heading to work. Javier was shaking and fidgeting strangely. Lloyd noticed this and asked why he looked so out of it, wondering if he was tired too. Javier rubbed his head, mentioning that this severe headache had never happened before. Lloyd also grabbed his head, as his own head was throbbing. He realized it seemed like more than just a normal headache. In the land of Frontera that day, Ms. Emily, the maid of the Baron's estate, was experiencing a headache, saying she had had a bad headache since early that morning. In the village, Mr. Allop reported a similar affliction. His wife and little ones all had headaches. Even Michael, the farm boy in charge of the cows, complained that the cows had stopped drinking water since yesterday, worrying that dehydration would be detrimental. Lloyd walked past in the city, thinking that the issue was affecting everyone in the village, and the animals were avoiding water. He instantly knew the water must be the cause. He recalled that one of the strongholds of the village was its inhabitants, and the most powerful weapon he possessed was his knowledge of this world. But after the wild ant incident, he realized there were things that did not appear in the novel. He had expected Viscount Lacona to want the Moritz wetland back, so he had researched the Lacona people, and discovered that their main source of income came from their mysterious dyeing technology and the Lacona berry they used for their dye. Lloyd was furious as he realized the truth and vowed he would not let it slide. Later that day, in Lloyd's father's office, Arcos Frontera was discussing the matter with the swordsman from Viscount Lacona. The swordsman demanded half of the reclaimed Moritz wetlands, promising that if they conceded, the Viscount would stop dumping their dye wastewater into Frontera's water. Lloyd's father said the swordsman must know he was performing blackmail. The swordsman smirked, confirming that this was indeed blackmail. Arcos was annoyed, slamming the table, asking if the swordsman did not fear the law, and threatening to formally take the Viscount to court before the king. The swordsman responded that Arcos was welcome to do so and would likely even win, but he continued, saying it would take at least 2 years before a verdict was reached. He questioned Arcos on whether he would be able to hold out that long, with all the legal fees and the cost of paying for new drinking water. Arcos was extremely pissed. The man then stood up, saying he looked forward to Arcos's wise decision. As he was about to leave, Arcos declared that his son and his people put blood and sweat into that land, and that he would not give a lowlife like him a single inch of it. The swordsman bowed close to the door, but suddenly, the door slammed open, hitting him square in the face. The man fell to the ground, and Lloyd walked in, saying he had something to tell his father. "Hello, Lloyd," his father responded. Lloyd stated that it appeared their parasite neighbors had been tampering with their river water, and that he would like to discuss countermeasures. The swordsman suddenly rose from the ground, asking Lloyd if he had just insulted his master. Lloyd replied, feigning surprise, that the swordsman had scared him, and that he did not know parasite scum could understand humans. The swordsman grinned, pulled out his sword, and said that Lloyd Frontera had insulted the honor of this knight twice in the name of Connaught, challenging Lloyd to a duel. In the next scene, Lloyd was viciously whooping the swordsman on the battlefield. The man screamed that he yielded, begging Lloyd to stop hitting him. Lloyd paused for a second, saying he was satisfied. The swordsman sobbed on the floor. All of a sudden, Lloyd continued once more, saying that this was for treating the Baron with disrespect. The man continued to scream in pain. Baron Arcos sat in his chair, watching Lloyd and shouting that the duel was over, asking what Lloyd was doing. Yet he did nothing to stop the beating. Lloyd continued to beat the swordsman as Javier watched, shocked that he had never seen the Baron like this before. The scene cut back to the Lacona vicinity. The swordsman returned to report to Viscount Lacona, who screamed at him for being a fool. He had been told to go blackmail them and had returned with a beating. The swordsman begged for forgiveness. Lacona then thought about it and said, "No, good work, you did well, very well." He explained that the only thing the Baron could do was take them to court. With this outcome, they could frame it as an assault by a reckless aristocrat, and add 4 years to the whole process. Lloyd, at his own end, also grinned because he realized that this was probably what the Viscount was thinking, unaware that Lloyd had his own plans. Lloyd stood in front of his people and declared that the Frontera barony would never do something so wasteful as to go to court. They would blow them out of the water by their own means. He screamed that they worked this land with their blood, sweat, and tears, and they would protect it from the evil of greed. Everyone responded with a loud cheer. Lloyd thought to himself that first, they needed to solve the drinking water problem by building a very big reservoir. Hamang would bring the water from a location upstream before it became polluted, and then pour it into the reservoir with his skill. Javier said it was a good solution, but noted that neither Lloyd nor Hamang would be able to rest for even a day. Lloyd agreed that this was only temporary. He then said they were going to construct a water supply system, building infrastructure to bring in water from Lake Kapua in the eastern mountains. Javier pointed out that the distance was enormous, and the people involved in delivering the water would go crazy. Lloyd conceded that it was a huge loss for sure, but he planned to get a massive fee for the construction, aiming for 100 times the profits. A few months later, Viscount Lacona was visibly stressed, wondering how this could be happening. Someone then walked into his office and said that Baron Frontera's eldest son was requesting an audience. Viscount Lacona said he was busy and told them to get lost. The person replied that they wanted to help him with some problems he might be having. Viscount Lacona was taken aback by this and invited them in. Lloyd greeted him, saying that he was looking awfully well. The Viscount asked what Lloyd wanted. Lloyd asked if he had not heard, stating they had come to help with the Viscount's problems. The Viscount asked what nonsense Lloyd was talking about, claiming he had no problems. Lloyd urged him to be honest, suggesting he might be able to help save that scrambling dye workshop of his. The Viscount paused for a second and raised his head, saying viciously, "I knew it." He then asserted that Lloyd was the one that had ruined his dye workshop. Lloyd smirked at him, showing a sense of accomplishment in what he had just done. Lloyd continued, saying it was quite the undertaking, truth be told. Thanks to the wastewater the Viscount had dumped into their water supply, they had to bring in water all the way from Lake Kapua. He added that, of course, in the beginning they had no idea the Viscount was dumping wastewater. It was the Viscount's lovely knight who was kind enough to tell them that the Viscount was dumping it intentionally. Lloyd explained that they had dug out a path from the lake to their land, laid down the pipes, buried them, and gone through all sorts of trouble. Viscount Lacona shouted, demanding an end to the idle chatter and asking what Lloyd had done to his workshop. Lloyd asked the Viscount not to be impatient, smirking and telling him to hold on, as he was getting there. Lloyd continued, saying they thought, "Oh no, what do we do?" There was an enormous valley in the middle of their route. He asked what the Viscount thought they did. Lloyd said the only thing they could do was absolutely nothing else. They had no choice but to erect a Roman-style aqueduct, a bridge that conveys water and sewage across a valley or a river. Lloyd calmed himself and said the water from that valley flows down to the Viscount's workshop, and they had to blow up the limestone in the process of creating the bridge, he explained. It was all the lime in the water that had dyed all of the Viscount's clothes to shit. Viscount Lacona shouted at the brat, asking if he did not fear the law and threatening to sue him at the royal court. "Oh, please do," Lloyd said, stating it would take at least 2 years before a verdict was reached. He then questioned if there would be anyone left by then who remembered the Viscount's goods. Viscount Lacona was visibly stressed by this discussion, only thinking, "Why, you sneaky scoundrel, you good-for-nothing brats." Lloyd casually stood up and said that if he had helped satisfy the Viscount's queries about his problems, he would be taking his leave. Viscount Lacona was shocked and pissed, stating that Lloyd had messed with the wrong man. He screamed at Lloyd, saying he knew many people at the royal court and would make Lloyd pay for his damages many times over, but Lloyd just walked away and waved him goodbye. Some time passed, and Lloyd was still on his journey back to the Frontera barony. Javier said there was something he did not understand. Lloyd asked what it was. Javier said all Lloyd had done was provoke and infuriate the Viscount, and the Viscount would likely fight them in court until the bitter end, as he truly had many connections in the capital. Javier noted that if a legal battle ensued, it would cost more. "Ah, okay, I get it. I know what you are getting at," Lloyd said. "Just you wait. Let's see who has more to lose." 1 month later, Viscount Lacona was kneeling face down in front of Lloyd in the Frontera barony, saying he had done Lloyd wrong and begging him to save his dye shop. Lloyd glared at him with immense disgust. Javier was shocked that this could even happen. Lloyd asked if the Viscount's well-to-do connections had told him he could not win the case, stating that of course, he had already lost when his man admitted to intentional misbehavior. Viscount Lacona said it was imprudent of him and that he was deeply sorry. "Oh dear, what do we do?" Lloyd then said, stating he had no interest in the Viscount's words. Viscount Lacona pleaded with Lloyd to look at him, a Viscount, laying down his pride and begging. Lloyd replied, "Pride, you say? Is that worth even 1/10 of a piece of gold?" Lloyd Frontera asked, referring to Viscount Lacona's pride. He quickly mused that if it were, he would sell it off 1,000, no, even 10,000 times over. Viscount Lacona was whimpering and terrified. Lloyd then stated that he did not want an apology, and as he reached into his pocket, Viscount Lacona watched as Lloyd immediately pulled out a well-drafted contract, saying he just wanted a simple signature. The contract outlined a water supply agreement between the Frontera barony and the Viscounty. As the Viscount quickly scanned the document, Lloyd mentioned that if he signed it, they could begin supplying water to his workshop within a week. Suddenly, the spirit seemed to leave Viscount Lacona, and the content of the contract was clearly outrageous. Viscount Lacona shouted that the price was much too high. Besides, how could one put a price on water? "Oh, how strange," Lloyd responded, glaring viciously and very angrily. He declared that the person who taught him that water was not free was the Viscount himself. With that statement, the Viscount had a rude awakening. He realized the trap he had laid had snapped shut on his own leg. Sometime later, Arcos Frontera, Lloyd's father, was reviewing the contract. He asked if they were truly getting such a huge sum every month just for water. Lloyd confirmed that they were, and that the Viscount had even signed it himself. Arcos said that with this money, they could pay back all the interest and still have money left to spare. Lloyd was extremely happy, saying with mock politeness how generous the Viscount was. Lloyd realized the Viscount had definitely started this fight, which had brought about good results for the people and the Baron. Lloyd then thought to himself that the Viscount must now think of him as the devil, a consequence Lloyd welcomed. Lloyd noted the contract did not specify an end date, meaning they would be sucking the Viscount dry until he died, and even long after his death they would be draining his bloodline for generations. Lloyd thought he could not let the Viscount get away with just a slap on the wrist, and if he could exchange the Viscount's blood vessels for money, he would rip them right out of him. Arcos then announced that he had some good news to tell Lloyd. Acros then asked why Lloyd's face looked so strange, saying it was scaring him. Lloyd then quickly apologized, saying he was just so happy about the contract, and fixed his face with his hands. Arcos then said the good news was about that old, beat-up treasure he had received from the Orc tribe. Count Cremo would purchase it for a handsome price. Lloyd was surprised and tried to recall Count Cremo. He then commented that it was strange, as a big shot like him could easily purchase brand new pieces like that. His father replied that it was true. He did not know all the details, but the Count supposedly wanted to construct a statue. The scene then cut to Cremo, the city of commerce, inside Count Cremo's house. Count Cremo was looking out through his window at the vast ocean. Suddenly, a huge bulk emerged from the ocean, and his eyes began to change. The bulk gradually rose, and as it rose, a monster suddenly appeared and screamed viciously. Count Cremo was visibly uncomfortable and scared by the appearance of this monster. It was a Giga-Titan monster, and its very presence seemed to make the Count extremely uneasy, filling him with dread. Javier Ashran mentioned to Acros Frontera that they would be leaving in 1 week. He explained that the waterworks in Lacona would be finished around that time, and, to minimize expenses, Lloyd only wanted about 10 men to accompany them. Acros responded, indicating his understanding. He said that if that was what Lloyd wanted, then it was no problem. He fell quiet, and Javier watched as the Lord trimmed the plants. Javier then reassured him, saying he should not worry, as he would monitor Lloyd closely. Lloyd's father then spoke about a past incident. He recalled when the knights from Viscount Lacona had tried to blackmail him into giving up half of the reclaimed Moritz wetlands. He admitted that in the past he would have been terrified and simply handed it over, but after watching Lloyd and the people's efforts, he had found some courage of his own. Acros expressed his long-held belief that he had always been an indecisive and incompetent lord. Javier immediately denied this, respectfully telling his lord that it was not true. He insisted that Acros had always been the kindest and warmest person, more so than anyone else. "I appreciate your words," Acros said, but he maintained that he could not consider himself a good lord just because of kindness. He continued, expressing his view that a leader should possess firm principles and be willing to take action, exactly as Lloyd was doing now. Javier was taken aback by these words. He silently observed that, to his knowledge, Lloyd's only principle was money, but he realized that saying so out loud would be unwise. He then wondered internally if pursuing money was truly so bad, concluding that he was no longer certain about it. Acros then instructed Javier, saying his mission was no longer merely to monitor Lloyd. He was now asking him to protect Lloyd, the heir of the land. Javier paused for a second and then accepted the request, saying he would do as his lord wished. Javier felt that Lloyd Frontera had miraculously managed to revive his lord's fortunes, but he internally confirmed that he could never truly like him. He was suddenly reminded of a past memory. When he was very young, Acros Frontera had asked him what he wanted to do when he grew up, promising to help him with anything he could. Javier had thought for a second, and then declared his wish to become a knight and protect his lord. Acros had thanked him very much, patting his head and chuckling softly. Acros had told him that since he had managed to survive that harsh winter all alone, he was sure he would become the world's strongest knight. The Baron had then given Javier a wooden sword that he had carved out himself. That same wooden sword had later been broken by Lloyd at a young age, who had mocked him for thinking that an orphan could ever become a knight. Just then, Javier entered his room and took off his jacket. Glancing to the right, he saw the old wooden sword that he had been gifted when he was young. He reaffirmed his internal stance that he could never end up liking Lloyd. Later that evening, Lloyd was seen welcoming his dear customer, Javier. He thanked him for seeking out the Frontera Lullaby service once again, boastfully adding that Javier could no longer live without him and had become addicted. He jokingly warned Javier that if he did not do what Lloyd said, he could suspend his services. Javier, his customer, simply responded that Lloyd repeated the same things every time and suggested they just begin. Lloyd then began singing his lullaby, rambling on and on until Javier finally fell asleep. Javier thought that he was certain he should hate Lloyd, but as he reflected on all the things Lloyd had done over this short period, he concluded that he did not think he could hate him. He had learned about what Lloyd had done in the cave, what he had done with the Orc tribe, and how hard he was currently working. Javier internally felt that Lloyd seemed to have become a completely different person, but he dozed off in that very second. His final thought was that he hated himself for thinking that Lloyd was a decent person. Later that evening, Javier and Lloyd were sleeping peacefully in Lloyd's room. Suddenly, someone cloaked in a black robe entered through the window. It was the swordsman who had worked with Viscount Lacona. The swordsman was visibly enraged at Lloyd Frontera, convinced that everything was Lloyd's fault. He pulled out his sword and leaped forward, attempting to stab Lloyd in that moment. All he could think was that Lloyd should die. All of a sudden, Javier rose from his chair and dashed forward, stopping the attack instantly as he caught the man's blade. The man was shocked, and just then, Lloyd heard a crash sound. He slowly woke up, opening his eyes and rising. He saw what was happening, and as he was left confused, Javier had already subdued the man on the floor. The night passed, and the scenes continued as Javier reported that they had handed the man over to Viscount Lacona. Lloyd replied, saying that was great work. Javier then mentioned that the man had targeted Lloyd because... Lloyd then expressed that the Viscount had been paying a lot of money for the water, so he probably fired the man first. Lloyd added that he would have done the same, remarking that the man got paid a lot, but all he did was get beaten up by the brat next door. Lloyd concluded that the man came for revenge, which was how small-minded people thought. Javier then asked if that meant Lloyd had been expecting this. Lloyd clarified that not exactly, but he had thought something like this could happen. Javier was surprised and commented that it was reckless of Lloyd not to have taken any precautions. Javier internally mused that he thought Lloyd always planned everything in advance. Lloyd then glanced at Javier, a bit confused, and then asked Javier what he was talking about. Lloyd stated he had Javier beside him, so what other precautions did he need to take? Javier was shocked, and a look of childish innocence crossed his eyes as he stared at Lloyd in that moment. Lloyd then said it was thanks to Javier that he could move around freely. Javier was so capable, and Lloyd trusted him. Lloyd elaborated, asking Javier to consider if it was possible for a 5-year-old boy who lost his village in a monster attack to survive the winter without any help. Yet Javier had made it possible, and was now standing there as a knight. Lloyd asked if there was anything more dependable than that. Javier was short of words, and it was as if all his trauma was getting relieved at that moment. After that, for a short second, Lloyd and Javier glared at each other without speaking. Lloyd then, slightly angrily, told him that this was awkward and asked him to say something, as he was regretting being so cringe. Javier broke a little sweat and then looked away, muttering the word bleh, as he normally would. He internally admitted that he hated himself for thinking that Lloyd was actually a decent man. Lloyd then patted him on his shoulder and laughed, saying, "Aha, nice." That was a very Javier-like reaction. Suddenly, Lloyd received a system notification saying that Javier Ashran was finally letting go of his long-term resentment for him, increasing his approval rating by 15 and leaving his current approval rating at +6. The notification also stated that Lloyd had earned 320 RP, and his current RP stood at 1500 plus RP. Some time had passed, and Lloyd, Javier, and some other men were seen on their way to Count Cremo's state. Lloyd was busy dozing on Javier's back while riding the horse, and Javier was visibly annoyed by this. Javier then shoved Lloyd away from his back, whacking his face with his shoulder. Lloyd was surprised by the sudden contact and asked Javier if he had just hit him. Javier denied it. Lloyd insisted that it had certainly felt like it. Javier challenged him, asking if Lloyd had actually seen him do it. Lloyd angrily retorted that he bet Javier was thinking, he calls himself noble, but he can't even ride the horse and now he's snoozing? How annoying, and then hit him. Javier exclaimed that it was incredible and suggested Lloyd could now read minds. Lloyd responded, asking if Javier admitted that he had hit him. Javier denied it once more, saying he would not dream of it. Lloyd then raised his hand as if he was about to point at Javier but instead said, "Okay, fine, if you are so petty. Stop! Everyone stop!" He raised his hand to stop everyone in their tracks. He then dismounted from the horse and angrily told Javier to teach him how to ride the horse. Javier glared at him, refusing and stating that he was a knight, not a horse instructor. Just then, Lloyd received a system notification saying that what Javier really meant was, "I admire your attitude to strive to learn what you don't know." Lloyd then told Javier that it was an order, but then another notification popped up, saying what Lloyd really meant was, "I'm going to work hard. Working hard is easy for me." Javier then dismounted with a titch sound, saying that Lloyd was so petty. The notifications were trying to translate what they actually meant, but he also sensed that the system was simply trying to annoy him. He asked, "What was that? What did you just say?" The notification then claimed that Lloyd meant to say that Javier was so kind, and his heart and soul were like that of an angel. Lloyd screamed at the notification, asking it to stop because it was so noisy. When he did this, the men at the back were shocked because they had not been speaking, but suddenly they were roped into the situation. Javier asked Lloyd what was wrong all of a sudden, and if he had lost his mind. Lloyd was visibly annoyed because the messages were the actual cause of the whole thing, but he did not say that out loud. The notification then dropped a useful message, explaining that rumors were traveling faster than words. The rumor of Lloyd building the first waterworks on the continent was spreading fast. The system stated that his reputation as an engineer had increased, and his name would go down in the construction history of the kingdom and the continent, receiving 600 RP. Lloyd was surprised at this, calling it a jackpot. He internally thought that this meant he could win even bigger construction projects from now on. His reputation eventually meant more money, and more money meant his sweet retirement. Lloyd was happy because his golden future awaited him. Javier then commented that Lloyd was angry one minute and laughing the next, again asking if he had truly lost his mind. Lloyd was annoyed because the messages were the cause, but he kept silent. The journey to Cremo was definitely not a short one, as winter was drawing near, so they did not reach Cremo until midwinter. When they finally arrived, Count Cremo accepted them. He thanked them for coming such a long way and introduced himself as the lord of the place. Lloyd then bowed and said that they humbly greeted Count Cremo and that he was from the Frontera family. The Count then laughed, saying that Lloyd was completely different from what he had imagined. As the Count walked towards them, Lloyd glared at him. The Count now said that he had heard the rumor that Lloyd was a talented builder, so he had imagined someone with a rough countenance, but to see that he was of such a noble appearance. To Lloyd's shock, the Count went to Javier instead, thinking that Lloyd was Javier. The Count continued speaking, saying that Javier seemed like the noblest of all nobles, and that he would believe him if he said he was royalty, laughing as he said it. Lloyd glared at him in that moment and then said, "Excuse me, Count." He called his name again, Count. The Count then turned, looking visibly annoyed, and said, "How insolent! How dare you, a mere servant, interrupt the conversation between nobles?" Lloyd was shocked by this, and the system just laughed at him, calling him a servant because he had a servant face. The system continued to laugh. Later that day, the Count was seen laughing at what he had done earlier. He remarked that it looked like he had caused a great offense as he continued to laugh. Lloyd was visibly let down by the whole situation. Javier was seen standing behind Lloyd, holding in his laugh as hard as he could. The Count then apologized, saying he truly was sorry, and asked Lloyd not to be offended. Lloyd responded that it was fine and okay. The notification was laughing, stating that it was Lloyd's face that was at fault, not him. Lloyd internally considered that if he could, he would beat up the notification. Count Cremo then said that it was partly Lloyd's fault too if he was born with a servant face. Lloyd was simply praying that Count Cremo would stop with the stupid jokes. The Count Cremo was the Lord of Cremo, the city of commerce, and was also quite an important figure in the kingdom. Lloyd suddenly recalled the novel Night of Blood and Iron. In it, Javier becomes a wanted criminal after beheading the moneylenders, Shiloh and Meatloaf. He goes into hiding and is eventually arrested by the Count of Cremo, but the Count sees Javier's character and integrity from just a few words with him, and ends up providing a lot of support to Javier in many ways. Lloyd internally observed that even the parts of the story that were not fully fleshed out were still playing out. Count Cremo then said that he had wanted to buy Lloyd's jewels to decorate the statue they were going to put up in the sea. A few years ago, a Gigatitan had started appearing just off the coast from their ports. They had never suffered any direct damage, but its mere existence was a source of fear. Lloyd recalled reading something like this. He knew they had no way of attacking it in the water, so even the Navy could not do anything, and Cremo continued to decline, leading the Count to face a crisis. The Count explained that he had done a lot of research to drive the bastard out, and in doing so he had discovered something important. Mermaids, the strongest warriors who rule over the seas. Mermaids were the object of fear for the Gigatitan. The Count had reasoned that the Gigatitan was terrified of anything that even resembled mermaids, so he had wanted to build a statue of a mermaid in the sea. However, he admitted he had given up now. "Excuse me?" Lloyd asked. Count Cremo continued, saying that if they raised the seabed to build a statue, then the depth would not be enough for the bait. Lloyd, upon hearing this, began to ponder about how he could work around the problem. But Count Cremo told him to put his mind at ease, as he did not have a use for it anymore. He added, however, that since he had already promised he would buy the jewels. Lloyd responded, saying he could not let the Count do that and requested that he not just take a loss. Count Cremo asked if Lloyd was not going to sell him the treasure. Lloyd confirmed that he would, and for a high price, if possible, but he also offered to build the statue for the Count without disturbing the water level in the sea channels. Lloyd thought internally about a friction pile and box caissons. If he could combine the two, then it would be more than possible. Later that day, the scene took them outside where the water was. Lloyd and Javier were in a boat. Lloyd then took a deep breath as he plunged his head into the water, looking at the seabed, the bedrock, and analyzing the terrain around there. He noted that, fortunately, the seabed was pretty flat with a thick sedimentary layer, so it was the right amount of soft. He wondered if the bedrock was deeper down but realized that it did not matter. Just then, as he pulled his head up, he was shivering because it was very, very cold. He looked at Javier and noticed that Javier was smiling. He asked him why he looked so happy. Javier apologized, saying it was the first time that watching someone suffer had made him so happy. Lloyd glared at him while shivering, too short of words to even respond to him at that moment. Javier then paddled away, seemingly going to shore. Lloyd told him to take the measurements. Javier asked if the contract was okay. Lloyd told him not to change the subject, and internally he was annoyed with Javier, telling him to take the measurements instead of him. He thought that Javier should plunge his head into the sea and see how terrible it was. But then Javier said to Lloyd that he thought this every time and still could not imagine it. To build up the ground vertically from the seabed seemed impossible, unless Lloyd was going to use magic. Lloyd responded that Javier could call it magic if he was referring to the magic of cement. The question Lloyd wondered was how he could create cement in this world. He decided that if it was Roman-style cement, he could definitely be able to do it. They finally got to shore, and Javier pulled Lloyd up from the boat, though Javier told him that he should please try not to watch his steps and fall. Lloyd was annoyed with Javier, telling him that his banter was reaching a swordmaster's level and asking if he was a banter master. Suddenly, someone called out to them, and they turned. A lady holding a card asked if he was Master Lloyd Frontera. She was blushing and said that she had something she wanted to give to him. Lloyd was surprised by this and asked if she was referring to him, having no idea what was going on. The lady then said her name was Christine and that she was Count Cremo's daughter. The lady explained that she had seen Lloyd Frontera walking through the mansion courtyard the previous day. Bowing her head, she gestured toward the letter, and a sudden, heavy pounding started in Lloyd's heart. She pointed at the paper, asking that they please accept it, and it became clear that she was addressing Javier Ashran. Lloyd accepted the situation readily. He had, after all, been expecting this outcome. Javier took the envelope, slipping it into his pocket, and the lady promptly ran off with her companions. She was clearly jubilant, excitedly repeating that Javier had accepted the letter. Javier and Lloyd stood together. Lloyd looked visibly distraught. Javier suggested they proceed with their plans. Lloyd abruptly halted him, calling Javier an asshole and saying he should stop acting as if nothing had happened, as it annoyed him greatly. Javier turned back, asking what Lloyd was talking about. Lloyd pointed out that Javier had simply taken the love letter and put it away. Javier asked what was wrong with that action. Lloyd was incredulous and thoroughly annoyed by Javier's nonchalance. Glaring at Lloyd, Javier suddenly realized something and covered his mouth. He then asked if Lloyd had never received a love letter before. Lloyd remained silent, yet the question clearly irritated him. Javier looked left and right, appearing uncomfortable, and admitted he did not know what to say at that moment. Looking away, he offered a quiet plea for his lord to take strength. Lloyd immediately received a notification, indicating that Javier sincerely wished him well. Lloyd felt such profound annoyance by this development that he felt he might cry, with tears almost visible in his eyes. Later that day, he was in his room working on the construction of the pool. He told himself firmly that he was absolutely not jealous, not even a little bit, because he was going to be rich and make a lot of money soon. Suddenly, Count Cremo walked in and called out to Lloyd. Lloyd turned, looking vicious and deranged. This appearance scared the Count, who asked what was wrong with his face. Lloyd instantly changed his expression, smiling as he ran toward the Count, the sudden shift appearing comical. He asked the Count for forgiveness, explaining with a smirk that he had merely been focused on his work. The Count said he had been shocked, noting that Lloyd had the eyes of a killer. The Count then informed Lloyd that he had easily gathered most of the materials requested, but getting the volcanic ash would be difficult. Lloyd realized this was a key ingredient for Roman cement. He mused that the obvious advantage of Roman cement was its durability. Its structures were still standing 2,000 years later, proving its materials were ahead of their time. Count Cremo stated that obtaining the ash was not impossible, but they would have to travel to a volcano, a journey that would take at least half a year, which the Count did not think he could wait for. Lloyd assured him not to worry, saying he was sure he could find another way, initiating Plan B, giving up on Roman cement and making Portland cement instead. Later that day, Lloyd was still seated in his studies. Portland cement was what led to modern cement. Lloyd knew the rough process but lacked the precise details. He felt that if he could not rely on intellect, he would rely on brute force, planning to keep experimenting with every different combination. After some time, most of Lloyd's experiments had proven to be duds. He had failed with all 129 samples. He believed he was very close to success, and only needed to adjust the mixing ratio slightly. Mumbling to himself, showing the length of his contemplation, he decided he would add 4 more combinations for the time being. Suddenly, his summons spotted him speaking to himself. Podong called out to him. Lloyd acknowledged them. Podong jumped onto Lloyd, shaking him. Lloyd told them he was busy and suggested they go on a walk without him. Hamang and Bangul also jumped onto Lloyd, shaking him vigorously. Lloyd reiterated that he absolutely could not go. They shook him viciously, causing Lloyd to scream out his annoyance that he had already told them he was busy. Lloyd paused abruptly, a flashback hitting him of the dog he had when he was younger. He recalled the dog's funeral and the last time he saw him, sitting beside the dog in his house, crying as if he had lost his last family member. The dog had, truly, been his only family. He felt a deep sense of regret at that moment, wishing he had brushed his fur and played with him just one more time. Right then, Lloyd grabbed the 3 summons, hugging them tightly and closely. He announced that they should go, affirming that they were far more important to him than his research. As they walked outside, they sang and squeaked happily. While they were having fun, Lloyd thought how awful a person he was being. He glared at them, and they glared back, wondering why he would think such a thing. but they were too absorbed in their fun to pay it much attention. Lloyd explained that since everything had been going so well lately, he had only been giving them orders, treating them like machines. Lloyd felt sadness, believing he was the biggest moron in the world and reflecting that he would have had profound regrets if he continued to see them merely as tools for work. He paused, knelt down on one knee, and sincerely thanked his summons, acknowledging everything was thanks to them. The summons stared back at him, and then Lloyd received a sudden notification stating that the fantastical creatures acknowledged his sincere feelings and now considered him part of their family. The relationship level was then listed as master-servant relationship. Lloyd was surprised by the contradiction. The notification went on to refer to Lloyd as a member of the gang and announced a new upgrade for the creatures, enabling him to add new skills for 500 RP. He was shocked, saying aloud that this was an unexpected bonus. The summons then presented Bangul, suggesting Lloyd use the new skill on her. Lloyd, though surprised, accepted, reasoning that if this was what they wanted, he would comply readily. He felt confident he could find a use for the skill, whatever it was, and since it was their desire, it was perfectly fine. He used the skill on Bangul, and her body began to glow from the ground up. She started to levitate, emitting a blinding light that forced Lloyd to quickly cover his face as it intensified, radiating throughout the entire space. Suddenly, Bangul successfully leveled up and was upgraded. As a reward, Bangul received new skills, Accelerated Digestion Level 3, Steel Dung Launcher Level 3, and a new acquisition, Volcanic Blast Level 1. Lloyd was shocked, immediately focusing on the Volcanic Blast Level 1 skill. He thought that this was an absolutely awesome development because it perfectly aligned with his current need for volcanic ash. Early that morning in the city of Cremo, a shattering boom caused by a massive explosion echoed from the far-off mountain range. Every inhabitant, including Count Cremo himself, turned their attention to the towering plume of visible volcanic ash now drifting across the sky. The focus shifted to Lloyd Frontera and Bangul, the summon who was, apparently, the source of the blast. Lloyd was utterly stunned by the magnitude of the eruption, having covered his ears against the sound. He glanced at the floating ash, registering that it was genuine volcanic material, and felt a surge of excitement, realizing that the skill he had recently acquired for Bangul worked perfectly. Lloyd chuckled and said to Javier Ashran that he should look at this, saying he had now witnessed it and describing the result as an absolute gift. Javier remained silent. Lloyd called to him again, addressing him by name. He then stared at Javier, realizing the knight was feigning deafness. Lloyd expressed regret for having forgotten to tell him to cover his ears. Javier still did not react. Exasperated, Lloyd yelled that Javier was ugly. Javier instantly responded, saying he was not as ugly as Lloyd, though Lloyd's ears also seemed to have gone on a break at that point, as he did not catch that stray bullet. Javier appeared to be having the time of his life on this construction trip. In any case, thanks to Bangul, the problem of sourcing cement ingredients was quickly solved. Lloyd walked away, mentioning that speed was the key to construction and declaring that they should begin immediately. The first stage involved building and installing a giant filter, which Lloyd termed a diaper, designed to filter the volcanic ash. This diaper had 5 layers to catch the fine material. Lloyd shouted a warning that the blast was coming, and Bangul activated her volcanic blast skill, producing the necessary ash. Everyone covered their ears as Lloyd yelled a final warning that it would blow again. Count Cremo watched the process with astonishment. He thought the engineer was clearly extraordinary, noting that he had never heard of such techniques, nor of summoning creatures to aid construction. He resolved to keep a close eye on this project, determining that he would submit a detailed report to Her Majesty the King, believing that if the rumors about Lloyd were true, keeping him confined to the backwoods would be a waste of talent. With the cement ingredients gathered, it was time for Stage 2. They constructed a caisson, placed it in the sea, and then used Hemang's one-shot skill to drain all the water from inside the structure. Stage 3 was simple. Put the heavy-duty swordsman, the one-man workforce, to work. Javier was tasked with driving friction posts into the ground to cover the bottom of the caisson. Javier wasted no time in finishing the posts he had been given. He asked Lloyd when they would receive the next post. Lloyd told him to wait a moment, assuring him that the workers were hurrying to deliver them. Lloyd then looked at Javier and smirked. Javier asked what the look was for. Lloyd replied that he was simply thinking about how compliant Javier had been, noting that he had not even uttered his usual objection about being a knight. Suddenly, as if to tease Lloyd, Javier dropped his hammer. He walked away, saying that he was a knight and questioning why he should be hammering. Confused, Lloyd called out to him, saying that Javier was the knight assigned to escort him. Lloyd pleaded with Javier, explaining that if he did not hammer the posts in, Lloyd would not earn any money, meaning they could not clear their debts. Lloyd then became dramatic, suggesting that if he fainted from the stress, the Baron would be sad, and if he became bedridden, the Baroness might also fall ill. He appealed to Javier's sense of duty, begging the knight to protect his family and asking for his help. Javier frowned, stared back at Lloyd, and then reluctantly returned to work, hammering away once more. Lloyd planned that once his regular coaching sessions with Javier were finished, he would use Bangul's steel dung launchers to construct the steel frame. Finally, they would pour in the long-awaited cement, and once it hardened, they would dismantle the caisson, leaving the artificial sea platform complete. The platform was designed to be 50 centimeters higher than the water level at high tide, suggesting that if a mermaid statue were placed there, it would appear to be floating. Count Cremo, still observing, murmured that he honestly could not believe the foundation could withstand the weight of the statue. He promised Lloyd that if he succeeded, the fees would not be disappointing. Lloyd bowed in response. Later that evening, a feast, a ball as some might call it, was being held in the middle of the sea. 5 ships encircled the finished statue, which glittered magnificently in the night. The party itself was flashy, filled with the excited chatter and revelry of the guests. Lloyd stood uncomfortably, pulling at the tie around his neck, apparently clad in stiff, unfamiliar clothes. He asked Javier how he tolerated such attire. Javier reminded him that he acted as if he had never worn them before, recalling that Lloyd occasionally wore them to events. Lloyd looked away, shrugging, and admitted that it had been a while. He cursed internally, recognizing that Javier was too sharp. Count Cremo then called for everyone's attention, asking the guests to look over. He introduced Lloyd as the young man who had made the statue a reality. The guests reacted with murmurs of recognition, saying it was him, and praising Lloyd for his great job. Suddenly, the crowd shifted into a frenzy. They flocked around Javier instead of Lloyd, showering him with praises. Lloyd was utterly stunned, feeling as though his soul had left his body. He convinced himself internally that he was smarter than most, and knew they would flock to Javier, asserting that he was definitely not jealous. He rationalized that he preferred fast money transfers to compliments, but Javier's look of passive acceptance annoyed him immensely. Lloyd irritably told Javier inwardly that he should leave, not to look at him, and to stop pitying him. Count Cremo laughed loudly, saying the attention was because of Javier's face. The Count then patted Lloyd on the shoulder and told everyone that Lloyd was the man who had made the sea platform, not Javier. Someone in the crowd expressed surprise, having thought Lloyd was a servant. The party continued. Expanding the scene, a Giga-Titan was revealed, swimming swiftly towards the gathering. The massive creature raised its head slightly out of the water, glaring at the commotion. It spotted the mermaid statue, internally recognizing it as their natural enemy, and was enraged. It slowly submerged and swam rapidly towards the mermaid, believing there was only one and resolving to kill it. Lloyd was enjoying the attention he was finally receiving, while Javier was eating biscuits and being worshipped by the surrounding ladies. They were both unaware of the impending danger. The ball continued as expected, with no one noticing the threat. Javier eventually went to a corner, sat down, and enjoyed the view of the sea, taking a sip of wine. Suddenly, his hand froze as he sensed something approaching. He peered into the vast ocean, feeling with certainty that something was there. As Javier sat, Lloyd approached, asking him what he was doing, adding that he looked like a statue, but not as good as a Greek one. He then asked if Javier was ignoring him, calling his name. Javier finally responded, saying that he thought something was coming their way. Lloyd paused, just as the view of the Giga-Titan showed once more, swimming with great speed toward them. Lloyd asked what it was. Javier said he did not know exactly, but that it was extraordinarily swift. Lloyd asked how big it was. Javier replied that it was about twice the size of the ship, perhaps slightly bigger than Hamong at its full height. Lloyd was shocked by the description of the size, exclaiming, "Holy crap!" The Giga-Titan was now very close. Lloyd swiftly walked through the crowd, trying to get Count Cremo's attention. Count Cremo asked if Lloyd was enjoying the party. Lloyd walked up to him and whispered that the Giga-Titan was approaching, and that they must inform the passengers and evacuate everyone. Count Cremo called for his swordsman, Sir Genevieve. When the night approached, the Count asked if he detected anything strange far out in the sea. Sir Genevieve gazed at the sea for a moment and said he did not. The Count hummed, then looked at Lloyd, saying that Sir Genevieve had virtually reached swordsmaster status and his senses were extremely sharp, making him trustworthy. Lloyd thought to himself that Javier's senses were even sharper, and he was the protagonist. He wondered how he could possibly persuade the Count now. Count Cremo told Lloyd not to worry, assuring him that the Giga-Titan had never come this close in the last few years, and there was no reason why it would suddenly attack. Lloyd countered, suggesting that there might be a reason now. He stared pointedly at the mermaid statue. Count Cremo became visibly uncomfortable. Lloyd nodded, confirming that the statue was the reason. The Count's swordsman then interjected that he did not know why they were saying these things, but his senses were telling him. But before he could continue, Count Cremo cut him off. He ordered his men to raise the anchors and get the boats away from the statue immediately. Just then, the figure of the Giga-Titan began to emerge from the sea. Everyone began to move, screaming for the crew to hurry and follow the Count's order. Javier said that this was taking too long. Lloyd screamed at Javier to take care of the anchors. Javier glared into the sea and nodded. He swiftly leaped and dove into the ocean, holding his breath. Lloyd threw Podong over to the statue, telling the summon to take care of the ropes on the statue. Podong beat on a sunflower seed, swiftly enlarging and landing on the mermaid statue, covering it. Javier was already underwater, where he ignited his sword with a mana blast and swiftly sliced through a chain, cutting it in half. Podong then used its teeth to cut the rope attached to the mermaid. As the ships quickly came loose, Javier swiftly dismantled all the other levers underwater. He turned, seeing that the Giga Titan was already in front of them, and he felt visibly uneasy. People on the ships were screaming to spread out and scatter. All of a sudden, the Giga Titan's head blew forward, hitting one of the ships. Lloyd and every other person on that ship were instantly thrown into the air. Podong looked visibly scared, glaring at the Giga Titan. The creature immediately smashed the mermaid statue, and Podong was flung away from it. Javier used his mana blast to launch himself out of the water, swiftly catching Lloyd in midair. The mermaid statue, propelled by the Giga Titan's attack, flew inward, landing in the town. Chaos reigned as debris from the statue slammed near the people in the town who had no idea what was happening. One piece of the statue, struck by the impact, bounced off the ground and destroyed one of the buildings inside the estate. Back in the ocean, the damaged ship was flipped over, and all its passengers were begging for their lives, about to drown. Lloyd screamed, realizing they could not save all those people. He then remembered that he could use Hamang. He called for Hamang, and the summon swiftly appeared. Lloyd threw Hamang into the water, asking him to use his one-shot skill. Hamang used the skill, gulping down all the water swiftly, and in doing so swallowed every single person that was in sight. Just then, inside the city, the Giga Titan was about to enter to finish off the mermaid statue. Javier said to Lloyd that they must stop the Giga Titan, as it was moving towards the city. Just then, he saw Lloyd was already on top of a table-like structure, paddling his way away from the city. Javier was shocked and asked Lloyd where he was going, pointing out that the Giga Titan was going the other way. Lloyd turned and screamed at Javier that they had to run this way, calling him a fool and asking if he wanted to fight that monster, questioning if he had lost his bananas. Javier was visibly shocked by Lloyd's statement. The entire scene was chaotic. Count Cremo was trying to evacuate all the people still on his ship. Hamang was busy pouring out the people he had rescued from the ocean. Count Cremo was yelling for his men to hurry, warning that the sea was dangerously cold and to get the people out of the water as soon as possible. People in the water were screaming to be saved, begging for help. Meanwhile, the Giga Titan was already in the city, searching for the mermaid statue. People screamed warnings as the Giga Titan paid them no mind, swiftly breaking through all the houses in its path. Back with Lloyd and Javier, while the screams of people begging for help were still audible, Lloyd told Javier, who was standing still, to come on and move already. Javier asked if Lloyd was ignoring all the people in danger. Lloyd responded that they came here to make money, not to fight some sea monster and keep the peace, arguing that the city had an army and artillery and would be just fine on its own. Javier looked at Lloyd, shocked and uncomfortable, as if questioning what was happening. Javier internally recalled that in a moment of crisis, Lloyd Frontera had always shown great ingenuity and a resolve not to give up, never turning his back on those who were struggling. But at this moment, it seemed different. Lloyd yelled at Javier that they were busy with their own affairs and questioned why they had to protect someone else's city, insisting that running away was the rational thing to do. Javier stood there, feeling deeply disappointed, thinking that this, in the end, was who Lloyd truly was. Lloyd then received a notification stating that Javier's approval ratings had decreased by 5 points, leaving them at +1, noting that his relationship with an important character had worsened but that he would not lose RP from this. Javier pulled his sword out and told Lloyd that he could never abandon people who were in danger. Lloyd said, "Hey, stop trying to be righteous all the time. If you go back there, you will die." Javier ignored him, leaping into the water, using his sword almost like a skidboard on the surface, propelling himself straight into the city with a mana blast. He moved swiftly. Inside the city, the army was already trying to defend against the Giga Titan, launching cannonballs at it. However, the balls had absolutely no effect, simply bouncing off its skin. The Giga Titan's skin was extremely sturdy. The knights were shocked, internally wondering how the creature did not even flinch. The Giga Titan then growled, and its sides opened strangely. It began to launch jets of water from its flanks, and the water damaged the pillar where the soldiers were launching their cannons. The Giga Titan was clearly furious, scanning the city for the mermaid statue. Upon finding it, it began to move again. The creature's internal thoughts centered on the idea that the mermaid must die. It paid no mind to the people around it, who seemed like mere ants in its presence. All of a sudden, someone fell to the ground, and the Giga Titan was about to step on the person with its large claws as it ran toward the mermaid. Just then, Javier entered the scene. Using his sword's mana blast, he slashed at the Giga Titan, blasting its hand away and protecting the man in the process. However, Javier was stunned. Instead of taking effect, his mana blast slice literally bounced off the Giga Titan. The creature did feel the push from the attack, which caused it to push back and land on a building, screaming. Javier stood there, holding his sword, ready to face the Giga Titan. The creature thrust its hand out to attack Javier, but he was able to swiftly jump away from the blow. The Giga Titan then used its water jets from its face once more. Javier was caught in the air and appeared certain to be hit. He thought to himself that he could not dodge it, so he tried to use his sword to block the attack instead. The force from the blast pushed him, propelling him to slam his back on the wall as he fell to the ground. His face was already bloodied as he looked up, glaring at the Giga Titan. Just then, the Giga Titan focused more attention on Javier Ashrin. Javier felt that having tied the creature up was sufficient, yet he knew he would never defeat that kind of monster and might even die there. Still, he resolved not to perish before ensuring the people were safe. The scene then shifted back to Lloyd Frontera, who was trying to escape the entire situation. Lloyd felt he was certainly not some overpowered character, believing there was nothing he could do even with his RP, as it all related to construction. He wondered what he could even accomplish if he went back there. He reflected that he was only human too, and although it broke his heart when the city was destroyed and people were hurt, he felt there was genuinely nothing he could do. His thought process abruptly paused as the realization struck him that the city would be destroyed and people would get hurt. It was as if he had an epiphany. He stopped paddling, took a deep breath, and then exhaled. He then realized that if he ran away like this, the city would be destroyed. He paused for a second concerning the destruction, and then a low growl escaped him as he became very angry. Then, he understood the true issue. The construction fee payment would be delayed if the city was destroyed, leaving him no choice but to return. "Ah, let's head back, Bangul," he screamed. Bangul, the female summon, appeared from his clothes. Lloyd then yelled at the monster, calling it dead meat, and a, quote, damn oversized lobster, as Bangul thrust forward using her volcanic blast skill. Meanwhile, back to Javier and the Giga Titan facing off against each other. The Giga Titan smashed to the ground, which Javier was able to dodge, and then jumped up using its mana blast once more. Javier realized the creature was still an animal, and therefore its weak spot had to be its eye. He was about to attack the Giga Titan's eye. All of a sudden, the Giga Titan's whiskers swiftly sprung out and targeted Javier. But suddenly, Hamang used his cannonball-shaped body and dashed toward the Giga Titan, instantly smashing it away. The force from the heat pushed the Giga Titan back, and Hamang then propelled back. Hamang then poured out the water within its stomach, enveloped himself, and returned to Lloyd. Lloyd then stood there, furious, and roared at the Giga Titan, screaming how dare it mess with his cash flow. The scene was set as Lloyd Frontera finally joined the attack against the Giga Titan. Javier Ashrin used the opportunity to attempt to blow at the Giga Titan, but even as he smashed the creature, his attack bounced off once more. He found it outrageous that he could not even breach the armor. Standing there, about to continue the fight, he admitted that he could not find any way to attack it properly. He had thought he could win at first, but now he saw no immediate solution, yet he wondered why he felt so composed. He then realized that his calm came from Master Lloyd finally returning. Lloyd's presence meant there was a way to defeat the Giga Titan. 2.5 minutes earlier, Lloyd was seen speeding through the city. He was riding Padong as they approached the Giga Titan. Lloyd yelled to Padong that it should not get too close, instructing it to take them around the Giga Titan so the creature could not detect them. Lloyd needed to find a weak spot. Just as Javier continued his assault on the Giga Titan, Lloyd noticed that Javier's mana blast was having absolutely no effect. He wondered how the creature was so strong and what it was made of. He paused, realizing he could use his survey skill to analyze the material of the Giga Titan's body. He activated the skill and checked the creature's flesh and strong armor, confirming that it was possible. Lloyd smirked, knowing that even living things were made out of something and could definitely be surveyed. The armor was a mixture of dentin and chitin, a whopping 1 meter thick at the molecular level. It was a triple-layer honeycomb structure, tightly woven together, truly a state-of-the-art armor. Even as Javier continued his attacks, nothing changed. But Lloyd noticed that when Javier's blow landed, the attack's vibrations followed a pattern, causing the shock energy to migrate to a single spot. Lloyd observed that the energy collected from the attack gathered in the creature's horn before being released. He quickly understood that they first needed to deal with that horn. They had to cut it, or it simply had to be removed. Lloyd then used the simulation mode on the Giga Titan, discovering a spot containing a water sac for its hydraulic claw. He realized that if they could strike that area from a specific direction with a mana blast, they would be able to shatter the entire Giga Titan from within and destroy the thing. Javier then yelled to Master Lloyd, asking what they should do. Lloyd tried to communicate with sign language, but Javier had no idea what he was doing, shouting that Lloyd had lost all control of himself. Lloyd angrily screamed the instruction, emphasizing the horn, that it was its horn, and that Javier needed to cut off its horn, and to hurry up. Just then, the Giga Titan was about to strike Javier once more. Javier swiftly leaped, soaring above the attack as it smashed the ground. Airborne, he acknowledged that even if he cut off the horn, it would not be a fatal blow. As he landed, however, he remembered what Master Lloyd had just said, trusting that Master Lloyd would never give an instruction he could not stand behind. And so, Javier dashed forward. Lloyd told him that even though the horn was hollow, it would not be easy to cut, explaining that mana circles were not just about hitting hard. Javier shouted back, asking what he should do. Lloyd then instructed him to do it fast, suggesting that quickness, even if weaker, was the key. Javier cried out that was easier said than done. Javier then struck the horn using his skill, attempting to imitate Lloyd's suggestion by executing the Mana Blast skill as swiftly as possible. His core circles literally moved swiftly in an attempt to create the Mana Blast. Lloyd watched as Javier used his full strength and full speed to try and cut the horn. Lloyd internally sensed it was working. A high-frequency mana chainsaw. It had just been a theory, but he knew Javier could pull it off. As Javier was cutting the horn, the Giga Titan roared and attempted to use its claw to smash Javier away. Lloyd cried out for Pidong to assist. Pidong leaped swiftly and slammed the Giga Titan's hand away as Javier continued cutting. Luckily enough, the horn fell off, and they successfully cut it. The Giga Titan roared as the horn twirled before landing on the ground near where Lloyd stood. Lloyd then yelled to Javier to get the area right between where its middle legs meet, from its tail toward its head at an angle. Javier ran inward, under the Giga Titan, as Lloyd continued to say that if Javier got a Mana Blast from that direction, their construction payment would not be delayed. Lloyd was entirely focused on his construction payments. Javier ignored him as he slid and paused at the exact location. He took a stance, about to thrust his sword upwards to destroy the place Lloyd had specified. Suddenly, the Giga Titan began to descend. Just then, Javier noticed the Giga Titan's movements and was shocked, as he had not planned for it. All of a sudden, the Giga Titan crashed onto the ground with the intention of smashing Javier. Javier's sword flung outwards and fell to the ground. Lloyd was shocked, wondering if Javier had died, and screamed Javier's name. For those who almost had a heart attack, the scene was replayed in slow motion. Javier was under the Giga Titan, unaware that it was about to descend on him. All of a sudden, Pidong swiftly moved into the scene and was able to grab Javier by his jacket, pulling him away in the nick of time. Javier would have been a goner, but Pidong rescued him, and Lloyd was extremely happy. But then Pidong began to screech words that were incomprehensible. Javier mentioned that he did not understand what Master Pidong was saying, but as he picked up his sword, he realized that Pidong was probably scolding him for his recklessness. He glared at the Giga Titan, and then said he would try to stay alive until he had defeated it, affirming that he would trust Master Lloyd's plan. Lloyd recalled that after successfully surveying the Giga Titan, he had developed a plan. It had been hard to implement since the Giga Titan was much faster than he expected. They needed to move forward, though. They needed to push through the plan until the end, as it was the only way to beat that thing once and for all. Just then, Lloyd called out to Podong. Podong turned his head toward him, and then rushed back toward Lloyd. Lloyd then said to him to take him to that place he had mentioned earlier. Podong acknowledged the request, and they sped off. Lloyd then yelled to Javier that the creature saw Javier as its biggest threat, and instructed him to lure it along the east coast and into the woods. Javier responded, saying he would obey. Lloyd internally believed he had bought them enough time, and that the others should be finished. He was counting on Count Cremo. Javier admitted to himself that he had no idea what Lloyd's plan was, but it seemed like Lloyd was really thinking of something. 15 minutes earlier, just before the Giga Titan had entered the city, Count Cremo was visibly distressed as he watched it, saying to himself that such an event was unfathomable. His knight apologized, saying that he should be forgiven if only he had detected it sooner. The Count replied that it was his own fault, not the knight's, acknowledging that he had been too complacent, believing he could drive out the beast with a statue. Then, Lloyd screamed out of nowhere, declaring that a statue would indeed drive it away. Count Cremo was gladdened that Lloyd was safe, but Lloyd continued, saying that the monster had come ashore to finish off that statue, and there was no doubt. Lloyd proposed that they were going to take advantage of its obsession, confirming that Javier and he would buy the Count some time, and meanwhile he needed the Count to do something. The scene then continued with Javier and the Giga Titan. The Giga Titan tried to attack Javier, but Javier was able to dodge it, as he had been doing. Now, however, it was a calculated movement from Javier. Javier recognized that he was at his limit and could not fight any longer. He was panting. He decided that his mission now was to lure the creature away from the city. No, from the people. He then ran away, and the Giga Titan roared as it followed Javier because it perceived Javier as its biggest threat. Javier ran and ran, running into the forest, running as fast as he could. Suddenly, Lloyd from the other end then screamed for everyone to give it up for the one, the only, bronze statue. To Javier's shock, he glared up as he saw wheels coming forward carrying something, and even the Giga Titan glared at it ferociously. Then the clatter of something moving could be heard. The statue was moving as though it was alive, and Lloyd was smirking as he rode in. Javier was shocked because he had no idea what was happening, but as it came into view, the mermaid statue almost seemed alive, but it was not. Count Cremo had used ropes to tie the hand and the body to assemble it back, and Lloyd was carrying it toward the Giga Titan at that moment. "I've brought you your real enemy," Lloyd screamed. The Giga Titan, upon noticing this, was visibly annoyed and roared ferociously. Lloyd was satisfied, liking the reaction. He remarked that they had done a great job putting the thing back together. Lloyd internally reflected that from the book, he knew he could trust the Count to do this. He then screamed at Javier, saying he would make an opening for him to attack. Javier then told him that next time, he should please explain the whole plan to him. Lloyd screamed back at him, saying that there had better not be a next time, as they passed each other swiftly. Just before he was about to reach the Giga Titan, Podong drifted away, carrying the statue off the route as the Giga Titan continued chasing them. Podong looked visibly scared as Lloyd screamed, "Mommy!" because he too was scared. Javier kept sprinting as the Giga Titan followed, but then Javier leaped toward the Giga Titan and decided to use his Mana Blast as initially planned. Now that they had finally distracted the Giga Titan, he used the skill Mana Blast upon the Giga Titan on the same spot as Lloyd had instructed, and the explosion was instant, propelling the Giga Titan up. Lloyd glared back as he watched it. Just then, the Giga Titan paused because it had taken a great hit from Javier's impact. Javier then fell backward as he had finally managed to open the belly of the Giga Titan, but he considered that he had only cracked a small hole in its outer shell and had used his Mana Blast too many times, so he could not use it anymore. He then dismissed this thought, concluding it was an excuse, and that he was simply not strong enough to protect the people. Then Lloyd shouted, "You did it, Javier!" As Javier's attention turned to Lloyd's voice, Lloyd then said that Javier should leave the rest to him as he held his shovel, about to do something unprecedented. As Javier fell, all he could think was that he was losing consciousness, yet he felt he could rest easy because Master Lloyd had said it so confidently. Then suddenly, Hamang came into the scene, rolling swiftly, and was able to safely catch Javier before he fell to the ground. Lloyd then screamed that Javier should rest easy, that he would protect the city no matter what. Lloyd shouted this, but he internally admitted this was just what he had yelled at Javier as he dashed toward the beast. To be honest, he did not think it was possible. Maybe he could lure this thing far away and leave it there, but then he thought there was no guarantee the beast would not come back. The waters of Kremor were already the Giga Titan's habitat. After all, that thing was pretty strong. It might go berserk and take revenge for them summoning the mermaid statue. Then he thought, wait, before that his Podong was already at his limit. He could not ask him to do any more. He then called out to Podong and said, "Now!" Podong then halted abruptly, screeching its leg on the floor, and then, as Lloyd looked upward, Podong thrust him from the back, pushing him, propelling him upwards toward the opening point of the Giga Titan. As Lloyd moved upward, he wondered what exactly he could pull off right now, wondering what to do. He then remembered that earlier, when he had decided to save the city and ensure a swift return on his investment, he had a couple of plans that involved him attacking it. He was thinking if he could use Mana Blast, but to use a Mana Blast attack he needed a triple heart circle, and right now he only had a double heart circle. He then called out to his system, saying he needed to open the Ashran core technique through a message alert and the skill window. Then the system appeared, dinging 3 times. He then resolved to level up to a triple heart circle. The option appeared in front of him, double heart circle, level 4. The system suggested to level up skill, stating that the RP needed was 190. Lloyd thought to himself that 190 was a lot, but he clicked on level up. He immediately coughed because it was not enough. It only went up to level 5, and the required RP went up by 30, meaning he needed 220 RP to continue leveling up. That was so steep, he thought, but who cared? What did he have to lose anyway? Come on, he urged, tapping the button repeatedly. It leveled up to 6, it leveled up to 7, it leveled up to 8, but then he realized something. Just then, for it to level up further to 3 mana circles, he needed 370 RP more, and he began to sweat as all the RP he had left was just 311. Just then, he cursed the situation. Meanwhile, he was still airborne as he flew toward the Giga Titan. This was crazy. He had initially planned to stay out of this, which was his rational decision at the time. He had finally reached the Giga Titan, his hand visibly hanging on the opening of the Giga Titan's sushi belly crack, holding himself in a compromised position. He realized it was very strange. Why was he even dangling from this thing? He glared at Javier, who was already on Hamang's back. Lloyd wondered if he should summon some mana and just jab it. If there was even a small nick, he could dig his way into it. But then, as Javier glared at Lloyd where he was, Javier suddenly fainted. Based on Javier's reaction and his view of Lloyd trying so hard, Lloyd then received a notification saying that his approval rating by Javier had increased by +4 once more, leaving his current approval rating as +5. Lloyd's attention immediately went to the notification, which stated that he now had 391 RP because he had gained some RP from Javier. Lloyd decided to push forward, instructing the system to continue the level-up process. We could visibly see the double heart circle within Lloyd. Then a spark buzzed as the third one began to form. Triple heart circle level 1 appeared and began to twirl around Lloyd's heart, stating that his mana amplification had now gone up to 500%. He then turned and readied himself, internally confirming that the Giga Titan was dead meat, as he swung his shovel, about to execute the attack. He was rehearsing the plan, one circle to protect the heart, just like he had rehearsed before. But just in that moment, the Giga Titan swung its hand and struck some rocks nearby. Lloyd was still lost in his own thoughts, trying to rehearse the components of forming the Mana Blast. Suddenly, some rocks began to propel toward Lloyd. As Lloyd swung his shovel, about to use the Mana Blast for the first time, the rock was coming at him with speed. Without Lloyd's knowing, the rock struck him on the head as it bounced off, and for a second he lost control of all his senses. Lloyd became dazed, no longer able to hold his thoughts. His hand suddenly slipped from where he had held himself. This was not good, and he needed to get it in one shot. He then tried to mumble the process to build the mana blast once more, saying one circle was to protect the... But he was confused, and wondered what was going on, and what he was doing again with the other circle. The heart circles, he noticed, were colliding. Lloyd, due to the impact of the rock, could no longer compose his thoughts. Instead of using one circle to protect the heart and 2 circles to form the mana blast, 3 of the circles moved forward with the mana blast, leaving his heart unprotected. Just as Lloyd was about to fall because he had lost his grip, he propelled his hand upwards and still used the mana blast skill regardless. This was a 3-circle mana blast used for the first time by Lloyd. Just then, Lloyd was suspended in the air, about to use the skill. The mana blast propelled out of his shovel, and a massive kaboom sound occurred as the explosion literally roasted the Giga Titan from inside out. The Giga Titan's mouth opened wide as the explosion came out of its mouth, destroying the Giga Titan instantly as it fell toward the ground, creating lobster meat. The explosion was so visible that everyone from the city could see what was going on. The Giga Titan was down, but just then, it seemed like everything had calmed. Then the voices of Pidong, Hamang, and Bangul could be heard, and they stood somewhere, seeming very distressed. Javier's eyes opened as he looked visibly confused. He then rose up slightly, saying to Master Hamang and Master Podong that they were all safe and sound. He then glared at the Giga Titan, taking note that Lloyd really did it. He did what he said he would do, but Javier wondered how he had done it. Podong pulled at Javier's finger, saying something. Javier then said to Podong, asking what was wrong and if he meant for him to follow. He then stood up as he mustered all his strength to try and follow Hamang, Pidong, and Bangul. Just then, he arrived at the location. Where Lloyd was, Lloyd's shovel was on the ground as his body laid there. Javier was shocked as he saw Lloyd. Lloyd's face looked out of it, like he was not with them anymore. Javier was shocked and screamed, "Master Lloyd! Master Lloyd!" He ran towards Lloyd and put his head on Lloyd's chest as he tried to hear Lloyd's heartbeat. But then his eyes opened wide as he was shocked, because he found out that his heart had stopped, and he glared at Lloyd with so much fear in him in that moment. A messenger pigeon, its silhouette briefly visible against the sky, was dispatched toward the Frontera Manor. Arcos Frontera glared out his window and noticed the messenger pigeon awaiting him. Opening the window, he retrieved the letter, observing that it bore the seal of Count Cremo, and he wondered about its contents. Upon reading it, he was visibly shocked. He swiftly dashed to his horse, mounted it, and prepared to ride. All he could think about at that moment was his son, Lloyd Frontera. He felt great concern, recalling that he had repeatedly told Lloyd not to get into dangerous situations. The letter's content, addressed to his dearest Baron Frontera, stated that his eldest son, Lloyd Frontera, had admirably completed all the necessary construction work in Cremo. However, immediately afterward, Cremo had faced a grave peril, during which Lloyd Frontera and his guard, Sir Javier Ashran, Siam, had saved many lives through acts of sacrifice. His wife, Marbella, was seen screaming for Arcos, telling him that she would be coming with him and asking how he could depart so suddenly without any preparations. Sir Bayern was also behind them. Arcos then told them it would be a long journey and that he would go with Sir Bayern alone. His wife questioned what he was talking about, asking if he had forgotten that she rode much better than he did. And so, they kept moving with the horses, riding as swiftly as they could, even in the harsh weather. Lloyd's father reflected on his son, remembering a time when Lloyd used to be such a despicable boy, but now he was the most diligent and trustworthy son. He recalled Lloyd's words before he departed, saying he should fear not, my lord, it could be done. Another time, Lloyd had said he would like to express his gratitude to his lord for his wise judgments. Arcos realized that his son had only been referring to him as my lord for the past couple of weeks. He wondered if Lloyd was truly his son. Just then, the claws of a massive werewolf-like monster came into view, halting Arcos, his wife, and Sir Bayern. The beast growled at them, and they seemed visibly shaken. Bayern dismounted his horse and told Arcos that since they had chosen the shortcut, they must face this head-on. He would buy them some time and urge them to go around him and head toward Cremo. Arcos then told Sir Bayern that he must run as well. But Sir Bayern responded that the beast was faster than their horses, and the moment they turned around, it would have them. The beast growled and dashed toward them, and Sir Bayern screamed for Arcos and his wife to run away. The beast slashed, but Sir Bayern was able to block the attack with his sword. Arcos screamed at Sir Bayern, saying that he should please forgive them, as they would see each other again in Cremo. He then left, seemingly abandoning Sir Bayern to handle the wolf. Sir Bayern readied himself for the battle, and they kept clanging, pawed a sword. One of the monster's attacks sliced off Sir Bayern's sword, and he was visibly distressed. Immediately after that, the monster dashed towards Sir Bayern and beat him. Sir Bayern then pulled out a dagger from his back pocket and immediately stabbed the beast in the throat. This only annoyed the beast more, and it pushed forward, landing on the floor with Sir Byron caught in its mouth. Sir Byron was visibly in pain as he tried to slash the monster's mouth even more to weaken its bite. But it kept chomping harder and harder as Sir Byron kept trying. All of a sudden, Lord Arcos came with a sword in hand and stabbed the beast from behind. Sir Arcos' wife also came with a short dagger and stabbed the beast in the eyes. They had dealt vicious attacks on the beast, and so it released its grasp on Sir Byron and roared viciously, falling to its back as it thrashed uncomfortably before finally passing out. Lord Arcos then went to Sir Byron and asked him if he was okay. Sir Byron told him he was ashamed, saying he was Lord Arcos' sword, yet this had happened. Arcos mentioned that Sir Byron was one of his subjects, and he had a duty to protect his subjects. Just then, Arcos' wife called out to him, expressing her worry. Arcos responded, asking Marbella if she was hurt. Suddenly, Arcos' face was visibly distressed as he glared at what seemed to be a herd of monsters that appeared on the scene. The wolf must have been moving in a pack. Just then, Byron moved even with his injury to grab his sword, and with a sense of duty he glared at the monsters and told Arcos and his wife that he would handle this. The wolves dashed toward him, and Byron readied himself and dashed toward them as well. Arcos and his wife were at a loss for what to do in this moment. All of a sudden, Javier entered the scene, jumping down from a tree. Upon landing, he readied himself, holding his sword. The sound of his landing got the attention of the wolves, and they glared at him. But to their shock, Javier swiftly dashed, sliced the head off of one of the wolves, and immediately continued with a barrage of attacks, slicing and swinging almost too fast for them to even see his movement. After that, he sheathed back his sword, and then said he had come to escort them just in case something happened, and he prayed they were not injured. Just then, the wind blew behind Javier, and the blood from the wolves was seen everywhere. His attack was even faster than the wind. Byron was shocked, thinking that he already knew Javier's swordsmanship and abilities were far beyond his own, but they were not at this level prior to him leaving for Cremo. Byron wondered how Javier could have improved so much. The scene was set, and Arcos Frontera and his wife were finally safe upon the rescue of Javier. Arcos' wife asked Javier if their Lloyd, was okay. Javier paused for a second, looking downward, and then he walked up to them and said he did not know and could not tell if Lloyd was alive or not. A flashback then occurred to the moment the Giga Titan was taken down. Javier looked at Lloyd's body, thinking that if Lloyd left them now, their estate, everything would be lost. He held onto Lloyd's hand and was almost praying, fearing for his newly found home. He pulled Lloyd's hand closer to himself, and then he began to hear a light pulse. He was shocked when he heard this, then he felt the pulse once more and once more. It was very faint, but it was there. Lloyd's heart had definitely stopped though, so Javier was confused, realizing that though it was faint, Lloyd was breathing in that moment, wondering how this could be. Touching Lloyd's chest, he realized something. He wondered what it was, asking if it was a triple heart circle. They were all spinning around at an unbelievable speed. He could not judge the condition of Lloyd's heart and could not see because of the magnetic field. He thought the strong minor rotations were keeping him alive in the place of his heart. Javier then realized why the Giga Titan came to be that way, and how Lloyd had succeeded in defeating the Giga Titan, thinking that Lloyd was truly something else. The next day, as the city was trying to recuperate after the hazard that occurred from the Giga Titan, Javier, Arcos, his wife and Byron were walking through the city. Javier told them that the young master was at the Count's manor, and a doctor was tending to him, but his condition had not improved. Arcos thought it was terrible to think it was just Javier and Lloyd fighting against the monster. Javier corrected him, saying he was merely of help as the sword Master Lloyd wielded, though it was Master Lloyd's strength that vanquished the monster. These words were surprising to Arcos and his wife, as they wondered to themselves how Lloyd, their son Lloyd, had that sort of power. As they walked past, they began to hear murmurs from the people around. One of them asked if they were all off to the Count's manor too. He said he could not do much, but this was the least they could do for Lloyd Frontera. If not for him, he would have frozen to death by now. He expressed how Lloyd had saved him and so many people from drowning. Someone else then said that he had thought he was doomed to die buried beneath all that rubble and had given up awaiting death, but Lloyd had sent Bangul to assist him in that harsh moment when he was under the rubble. Another person, while talking to a friend, said the embers must have spread from fireplaces because of the statue fragments left alone, and the whole area would have been engulfed in flames. She then mentioned seeing the giant hippopotamus that appeared during construction, which spewed out water and engulfed the fire. Someone else agreed, saying that was the summon called forth by the man named Lloyd. He noted that now, in this city, who knew how many people owed Lloyd their lives? Everyone within the city gathered in front of the Count's manor as they awaited, expressing how Lloyd was able to rescue fathers, wives, and mothers, everyone, calling Lloyd their savior. This scene of their devotion to Lloyd came into view. All everyone could hope was that he would open his eyes. Just then, a voice was heard from behind as someone screamed, asking if all of them had lost their senses. The man said if only that man had not made a platform for that statue, none of this would have happened. It seemed to be someone who was truly hateful, calling them foolish idiots and saying that ultimately it was all Lloyd's fault. Everyone glared at him. Suddenly, everyone began to whisper privately. The public was agitated. Just then, they swiftly went toward the man and suppressed him, hitting him because he was talking nonsense. The scene then went back to Lloyd as faint heartbeats were heard, one upon another. Then a flash occurred as Lloyd's heart developed a small mana circle, and a notification appeared, saying that his courage and sacrifice had deeply moved the people of Cremo, and he would receive an enormous reward for this achievement. He was prompted to click for more details. Just then, Lloyd was able to wake up as he squinted his eyes because of the lights. When he opened his eyes, he looked up and held onto his head because it was feeling a little bit heavy. He remembered using the triple core mana blast like a fool. He wondered how he was alive right now. He then glared at the notification, which implied that if he were dead, he would not be able to even have a dream. Lloyd then responded to the notification, asking how, and shouldn't his heart have exploded. The notification responded that he would find that out soon enough. It then reminded Lloyd that there was something much more important to check on. "Oh, that's right," Lloyd said. Just then, Javier walked into the scene, shocked when he saw Lloyd. Lloyd then looked at Javier and said that Javier was just the man he wanted to see, asking Javier when they said they would pay for their done construction. Javier was shocked by these words, but then he smiled and said to Lloyd that it seemed he was in good health. Then suddenly, Lloyd heard screams as they called out his name. He looked in front of him and saw his parents dashing toward him. His father and mother then hugged him and squeezed him tight, and he screamed. His father then said, "Lloyd, you scoundrel." His mother then said, "Thank goodness, Lloyd. Do you have any idea how worried we were?" With tears in their eyes, his parents wondered deeply, "Are you really our Lloyd?" But decided that the unsettling question was not what was important right now. They were just thankful that he was alive. Some time passed as the scenes arrived at the royal capital in Magenta. A voice was heard, saying that the Giga Titan had been completely destroyed, concluding Count Cremo's letter. It seemed like someone was reading a letter to someone. Inside the palace, a lady was seated upon a chair, legs folded. She then said it was intriguing to learn that such a man existed in this kingdom. She then instructed the man to send a messenger to the Frontera barony and bring both this man and his guard to her. The man bowed in response, saying, "As you wish, your majesty." The lady, revealed to be Her Royal Highness, the Empress Alicia Termina Magentano, said, "Let us see if the contents of this letter are indeed true. I will meet this man and judge for myself." The scene then cut back to the capital of Cremo, where Lloyd received a notification saying that the stories of his great courage, wisdom, and self-sacrifice were spreading all over the land. Lloyd glared at the notification as it continued, saying that he had received bonus RP for his elevated social status, with a bonus of +1 500 RP received. Lloyd then yelled, screaming in excitement, "Yeah!" Then the notification continued, saying, "Accessing skilled information, skill mana hearts. You can store high concentrations of mana in your heart now." Lloyd thought to himself that this was why he had so much energy, despite being in a coma for a month. Wow, he thought. He had become the owner of the mana hearts, which meant shoveling would become a lot easier. The notification then asked him if that was the only thing he could think of to use it on. Lloyd responded by asking if it was belittling all the construction workers of this land. The notification swiftly said, "Forgive me, my lord, of course not, my lord." The description then continued, saying that his mana heart was born not as a result of regular training but from the impact of the mana blast. As such, his mana heart had been given unique capabilities. Lloyd's eye opened widely as he continued reading the skill option. Shock Neutralizer was formed upon impact from Mana Blast. The impact from Mana Blast could be neutralized without additional protection. Lloyd wondered what this was, questioning if this meant he could use the triple core blast as much as he wanted, which meant the work in the quarry could be done faster. He was happy about this. The notification then asked him to think of something more impressive. Lloyd then asked if there was anything more impressive and noble than manual labor. He questioned if the notification was belittling quarry work. The notification responded once more, saying, quote, "Forgive me, my lord, of course not, my lord." Lloyd thought to himself that the mana heart needed to be protected from the impact of the mana blast because it acts like an ammunition dump, so using a mana blast is like setting off an explosion next to one of those powder kegs. When the explosion is set off, it makes a loud kaboom sound, and it is literally a death trap if one does not protect it. He realized that at the time he had used his mana blast skill, he did not have a mana heart, which was why he did not die. The shock from the blast filled his heart, and as it was working to keep him alive, it condensed and turned into a mana heart. He reflected that he had neglected his mana heart training, thinking it was a better use of his time to do more manual labor. He concluded that it sometimes paid off to be lazy. Just then, Count Cremo walked into the carriage and said to Lloyd, "Forgive me for keeping you waiting. Let us depart right away." "Oh yes, my lord." Just as Count Cremo walked inside, Lloyd's eyes squinted a bit as he licked his lips because he knew he had his own plan in mind. As the carriage began to move, Lloyd peeked outside the window, keeping quiet. He then mentioned the buildings and streets, wondering how much it would cost to repair them. Count Cremo, thinking he was initiating an innocent conversation, said it was hard to tell, but imagined it was well over a month's worth of the city's budget. Lloyd then said if the Giga Titan had not been knocked down, he bet it would have been another half a year's worth. Silence engulfed the space for a second as Count Cremo, now realizing what was going on, squinted his eyes and asked Lloyd what he was trying to tell him. Lloyd replied, "Oh, nothing," as he folded his leg. He then continued, saying that compared to half a year's budget, what he was getting for this construction project must be like small change, laughing, feigning innocence. He then continued, saying, quote, "My goodness, who would have known to think that this tragedy was the result of some statue made to drive the Giga Titan away? Regardless of whose plan it was, you cannot say it was anyone's fault, or that it was just Mother Nature either way. A few people did have to risk their lives, but everything worked out very, very well in the end." Lloyd then smiled a bit as he looked to the side and mentioned that he happened to hear something from Count Cremo's attendants. He had heard that his lordship offered an annual compensation to anyone who worked for the public interest of the city, regardless of who they were, without fail, and he was curious, wondering how much of a benefit to public interest that would lead to. Count Cremo was visibly uncomfortable and sweating. He was quiet for a second, then asked Lloyd if 1.5 times the construction fee would do. Silence then engulfed the space, and Count Cremo asked Lloyd if that would do. Lloyd then said, I apologize. I do apologize. It seems I have caused a misunderstanding. I was not asking for more money, but anyways, I finally get it. To you, my lord, your citizens' lives are worth 1.5 times my construction fee." These words shocked Count Cremo, as he was visibly uncomfortable as the carriage kept on going. Count Cremo then said, "Twofold." Lloyd was quiet in this instance. Count Cremo was visibly uncomfortable. He then said, "Threefold." Lloyd's face lit up as he grinned viciously at the mirror by his side. He was very excited by this. Count Cremo felt visibly shaken by this expression from Lloyd, as Lloyd then reached out his hand and said, "I am in awe of your bold generosity, Count Cremo. I will consider this a special compensation and put it to good use on myself." "Oh yes, of course," Count Cremo said as he shook Lloyd's hand. Count Cremo thought to himself that this was strange, so very strange. He was most definitely being exploited by him, yet he did not hate him, wondering why he did not hate him. Just then, people gathered as the carriage arrived, then one of them said, "Hey, that's the Count's carriage. It's Lloyd. It's Master Lloyd. Mr. Lloyd has arrived." People were chanting praises for Lloyd. 3 cheers for Master Lloyd. Hip hip hooray. Lloyd thought to himself that he was just a nobody in Korea, and this was so much pressure. As they continued chanting, Count Cremo then said they had set up the podium for him with a magic crystal ball with amplification powers, and all the people were clamoring to hear what he had to say. "Oh, of course," Lloyd responded. He then looked away as he thought to himself that all of them who prevailed over this tragedy were the real heroes, wondering if that sort of speech would do. He mused that it was not like he was making money off of this. As he stood at the podium with Count Cremo, Javier beside him and his father and mother behind him, people were chanting his name in the far crowds. It was a lot of pressure. But then Lloyd's face was visible. He was very uninterested in all the chanting, glaring at the people with little to no emotion. He then placed his hand on the ball that amplified sound as he thought to himself that the space was definitely filled with all the people from the land of Count Cremo. Lloyd then thought to himself that if he could make money from everyone here, it would be nice. He began his speech, asking, citizens of Cremo, have you ever heard of Ondal flooring?" Everyone paused for a second as they glared at him. Lloyd looked left and right at the people, but he got no response, then palmed his face and said, I see you haven't." He then continued on the rant, trying to advertise his products. He said to an old sir, "For those of you that experience stiff joints in the freezing winter cold, and those of you who worry about your child catching a cold in this weather, how much time have you wasted wrestling with your silly fireplace? 1 hour? 2 hours? If you've lived 50 years, that would be 15 years wasted in front of a fire. If you think that is too much time, then remember Ondal flooring." When he was giving this speech, Count Cremo was visibly shocked as he tried to muster out laugh chuckles, but he was very confused by this speech. Lloyd then told them that it would improve their lives by a great amount. He then calmed himself and said, "For more information, please visit the Baron's Manor located in the Frontera Barony. That will be all." He then turned and walked away. Count Cremo thought to himself that this was the craziest speech he had ever seen, and now he knew why he did not hate this man. He found Lloyd meticulous in seeking every penny of profit. He was persistent but reasonable, and he got done what he needed to get done. Far from hating him, Count Cremo wanted this man by his side. He thought a man of Lloyd's caliber stuck in some far-flung village was an unfortunate circumstance. Count Cremo truly wanted Lloyd in that moment. Some time had passed, and the scene returned to the Frontera Manor. Lloyd thought the manor, his soon-to-be golden goose, was quite grand. Sir Byron, the most senior knight, was waiting. Lloyd felt Byron was a man of honesty, integrity, and sincerity, a good man indeed. However, he judged the knight's skills to be only average, perhaps even slightly below average. Lloyd sat across from Sir Byron in the manor. Byron, explaining all he had done during Lloyd's absence, mentioned that the migration plans were complete, detailing the list of names and land allocations on paper. Regarding the farm owner's complaints about the labor shortage, he had decided to send the orcs and bolster the workforce at the mines. He also mentioned they had signed a large-scale Ondal flooring contract with their neighbor, offering a 30% discount, which left their net profit margin at only 10%. But factoring in the subsequent coal sales, he projected the final profit would exceed 50%. Next, he began to explain the water pipe installation and repairs. Wait, Sir Byron, hold on," Lloyd suddenly said to him, asking if he had done all that in the time he was gone. Sir Byron paused, appearing slightly confused. He said to Lloyd that he had simply been doing what he was told, as Lloyd had instructed him to take care of the rest. Suddenly, a man walked into the room and said he had an update for Sir Byron. The interior work on the last Ondal project was complete and was awaiting inspection. "Ah, all right, I'll be there in 30 minutes, Sir Byron mentioned. He then went to the inspection space, carefully checking their work. He complimented them, saying the work was well made now, with no flaws at all, and that it was very good work, and they all seemed extremely happy. Sir Byron said that all the times he had raised his voice at them were leading up to this moment. They were now the most important people on their traveling build team. Lloyd stared at Sir Byron in utter shock, realizing just how capable he was. Lloyd believed Sir Byron was born in the wrong era, thinking that if he were in Korea, he would have been at least a managing director at a big corporation. Lloyd felt he needed to give this man a huge bonus. Just then, he received a notification. The installation of Ondal flooring to Frontera Estates homes is complete. A new page has been written in the Continent History book. With Ondal, now known as the Frontera heating system, a large amount of RP will be awarded for this monumental achievement in construction. Lloyd received 400 RP in that moment. It turned out that the large-scale Ondal flooring contract was entirely the work of the Baron and Baroness. Lloyd realized those two also had a gift for something other than being the lord and lady of an estate. He mused that luck began the moment a person was born, and many people would either laugh or cry depending on the era they were born in. Later, Lloyd was outside one of the construction sites as Javier Ashram asked Lloyd if they needed a storage building that large for all the coal. "Of course," Lloyd responded. "The coal will keep coming and coming." He felt satisfied that he had paid off more than half the debt with the money from the construction, and they were getting more than enough in water supply fees from their neighbor. He grinned mischievously, thinking his retirement of fun and merit was almost here. His grin expanded even more as Javier glared at him. Javier felt that he sometimes couldn't stand it when Lloyd made that face, finding himself suddenly wanting to punch him. Then suddenly, a loud horn blew, alerting everyone around. Lloyd turned and asked what that noise was. Javier said he had never heard it before either, but he believed it was the sound of the horn announcing the arrival of the royal messenger. Men holding a flag walked into the scene, entering the Frontera barony. Lloyd wondered what the royal messenger was doing there. They then rode a red carpet on the floor, and the royal messenger jumped off his horse, landing on the carpet. He pulled out a scroll, grabbed it, and flapped it swiftly. The royal messenger held it, gazing at it as the people behind him began to clap, as though cheering him for what he had just done. Lloyd, kneeling in front of the messenger, thought the performance was ridiculous and wished the man would just get to the point. Lloyd was visibly uncomfortable, getting an outrageously strong feeling that this meant trouble. The man then began to read, saying that since time immemorial, I, along with the great sovereigns that came before me, had worked hard to achieve peace and comfort from the nobles, citizens, and all else. Lloyd then realized this might be about Creamer, about what had happened there. But the man continued, saying that not only were they relieved to hear of their people's safety, blah blah blah, but it was also more responsibility to blah blah blah. The man then said that for these reasons, the Queen shall personally greet the two valiant heroes who defeated the Gigatitan and praise them on their achievements. Lloyd then received the notification. Favor with Baron has increased by +9. You have received 90 RP. Lloyd's father, Acros Frontera, was visibly overjoyed, saying that this was an honor, an honor. Lloyd felt visibly uncomfortable at this moment. He was thankful for the RP, but felt this was not good. He had learned the hard lesson in the army: do just enough so there is no problem, and never do more than what is necessary. Once that rule was broken, everything changed. Lloyd recalled a flashback from his days in the army. A higher-up had called out to him, asking, "Hey, Corporal Kim, you are a civil engineering major, right? Make a sauna in that spot over there for us." Lloyd then responded to the higher-up, saying that civil engineering wasn't about being a builder. The man then asked if he was telling him he didn't want to do it. Lloyd then responded that he would do it. That was when Lloyd made the fatal mistake. He researched too hard and built one that was way too perfect. He began to get more recognition, and someone else then said to him, asking if he was Corporal Kim, and that he looked pretty brainy, asking him to make them a little cottage over there. Lloyd then received a plethora of requests just like the other, and he wasted all his time in the army slaving himself until he got out. At this point, Lloyd realized that once Her Royal Highness was involved, it was bye-bye to the sweet life of the country noble. The messenger continued, saying, "Hear ye, hear ye! Lloyd Frontera and his guard are hereby ordered to travel immediately to the royal capital." Lloyd felt like crying, thinking he should have just made that sea platform and ended it there. He wondered if that lobster had put a curse on him. He was sad because he believed that once he was on the Queen's radar, she would call on him for the rest of his life. He briefly considered pretending to be an idiot, but immediately dismissed the idea as too dangerous, realizing he would lose his head if she took offense. Without sparing any time, Lloyd was headed towards the Queen's castle, escorted by an entourage. Lloyd sat within the carriage, looking dazed and very uncomfortable. Javier then called out to him, saying he had the face of a man who was about to be executed. "Oh, you have a sharp eye," Lloyd said. Javier said this was unexpected. Lloyd glared at Javier as Javier continued, saying that the Master Lloyd he knew would be excited to meet Her Royal Highness, thinking how much he could weasel out of her. Javier looked away, folding his arms. Lloyd then realized Javier was right. If he took advantage of his knowledge about this world, Her Highness Alicia Termina Magentano's personality, and her future, there had to be a way. He decided that he would take this opportunity to squeeze as much as he could out of the royal palace. When he finally arrived at the palace, the Royal Highness appeared in her jacket and said to Lloyd, "Lloyd Frontera and Javier Ashram, you may lift your gaze." When they lifted their heads, they were faced by the Queen of Magenta. Lloyd was overwhelmed by her charisma, feeling he almost had a heart attack. He then said to her, "All hail our Majesty the Queen. I, Lloyd Frontera, have come to salute your Majesty, the rightful ruler of this land." She glared at him, saying, "So it is you." She seemed to think from his aura that the man beside him, Javier, was the noble. That said, "Javier Ashram, did you say that was your name?" She continued, saying she sensed a mana flow from him that she had never seen before, and that he seemed like a worthy, inspiring partner for her. Javier said to her that he was merely a nameless knight. Lloyd noted that she could tell Javier was special just by looking at him. He was aware that she was one of the only two swordmasters in this kingdom, and that clumsy flattery would not work on her. He needed to be careful. The conversation continued as the Queen mentioned to Javier and Lloyd that she had heard of their deeds from Count Creamer's accounts, and that they had her appreciation for the courage and selflessness they displayed. However, she said, she didn't judge a man merely based on another's recommendation. She trusted only what she had seen for herself. Lloyd felt that this was just as he had expected. She then continued, saying, "Lloyd Frontera, I shall put your skills to the test." Lloyd smirked at this, realizing this was it, a chance to win a contract with Her Majesty, the highest ruler. She then asked Lloyd what construction project he thought was most urgently needed in Magenta, the royal capital, in the current state of affairs. Lloyd realized she was starting things off with a quiz about the most necessary construction project. He believed he knew the answer, as he knew the entire plot of the book. The Queen thought that if he truly was a capable man, he would have noticed it the moment he saw the royal palace. If he was unable to catch that, then she would not acknowledge him. They glared at each other, their thoughts unanimous. The most urgent construction project in Magenta was repairing the crumbling palace. But Lloyd's answer was different. Lloyd said to her that he would place a new bridge on the Magenta River, which ran through the capital. The Queen was surprised by this response as she glared at Lloyd. Lloyd thought she couldn't be completely satisfied with his response. It wasn't the answer she expected. But with her personality, the test wouldn't end here. Lloyd knew she was the one with the highest authority, as well as absolute power. She was tolerant, fair, just, and listened to all, regardless of class or rank. The Queen then asked him what his reason was. Lloyd responded by saying that others may think differently and say that repairing the royal palace was the most urgent thing right now. Upon hearing this, the Queen's eyebrows twitched. Lloyd then continued, saying he knew that a very long time ago, a badly tempered dragon took off with the palace's tower on 2 separate occasions, and to prevent it from happening a third time, the entire structure was widened and flattened into its current shape. The Magenta Castle they saw today was built in this manner. Lloyd then continued, saying that he believed the weight of this structure pressing down on the ground and its pillars was causing it to slowly crumble. However, he concluded that the necessary repairs would only be needed at a much later date. Therefore, it couldn't be deemed as the current most pressing need. The Queen was confused as she glared at Lloyd, thinking what an impudent man he was. He knew what she was thinking, yet he gave her a different answer. Lloyd smirked, realizing she knew he had given her a different answer, even though he knew the answer she was thinking of. The Queen then thought that she knew that he gave her a different answer, even though he knew the answer she was thinking of was different. Lloyd then smirked inwardly, realizing he knew that she knew that he gave her a different answer even though he knew the answer she was thinking of. Suddenly, a notification appeared angrily complaining as it stated, "Enough with this nonsense already, Lloyd." Just then, the Queen thought to herself, "You are toying with me? Is that it?" glaring at Lloyd ferociously. "I would never," Lloyd thought to himself. "I am begging for a contract construction fee," he thought, glaring at the Queen with a puppy-like demeanor. Lloyd then said, "The current bridge across the Magenta River has been rebuilt 12 times already. The bridge collapses regularly because it is unable to withstand the rising waters in the spring. Each time it happens, people's lives are inconvenienced, and large amounts of money are spent on it. Everyone sees the rebuilding of the bridge as an inevitable part of nature. However, if your majesty would trust me with its construction, I would build a bridge that will not collapse even if there are spring floods or drift ice. At this moment, Lloyd was talking about the modern suspension bridge. He even criticizes my decisions, the queen thought. Why this arrogant and insolent man? Lloyd gulped, knowing the queen was visibly pissed. Though the more I speak with him, the queen thought, the more I seem to like him. She then told him to tell her more about this bridge he would construct. Lloyd then smirked viciously. Thank you, your majesty. Nice. I knew she would like it, he thought. He knew she absolutely despised yes-men who drowned her in flattery, and that she put unlimited trust in those with strong conviction. Just then, Lloyd began to ramble about how he intended to build the bridge, just as he would normally ramble to make Javier sleep. The queen then paused him and said, "All right, enough, I have suddenly lost interest." The Queen Magentano, in the books, is eventually betrayed by the one she cherished the most in the story. She loses one of her arms and turns evil, transforming into the butchering tyrant. That story, however, was 3 years into the future. Right now, she was an honorable queen who listened even to the lowly. The queen then asked, "And if that bridge fails?" Lloyd thought to himself that he would gather his things and flee the country. But what he actually responded was, "Then you can have my head, your majesty." He then looked upwards and said, "In exchange, while that bridge stands, please guarantee my family's station." The queen chuckled, surprised that he had even made her laugh eventually. She then said, "Fine, you may carry out your plans. I promise you reasonable compensation and the upholding of your family station." Lloyd then scooted towards the queen as he was still knelt down and dipped his hand in his jacket. The queen was visibly confused as Lloyd then pulled out a contract and raised it upwards. The queen asked what that was. Lloyd then responded, saying it was a contract, your majesty, and asked her to please sign it. The queen was visibly pissed, asking, "Are you saying you don't trust my word?" In her mind, she thought he prepared a contract ahead of time? Why this little piece of shit? Lloyd then responded, saying, "Not at all, your majesty. This contract states that if I do not construct the bridge in an honest manner, then I am to be hung, drowned, and quartered. Consider this as a necessary shackle for such an untrustworthy and lowly man as myself, your highness." The queen was confused, glaring at Lloyd. She then signed it regardless, thinking to herself that she was being sweet-talked into something, yet she didn't mind it. Lloyd then took the signed contract and raised his backside upwards as he bowed all the way to the ground and said to the queen, "1,000 thanks, your majesty." "What is with your bottom?" the queen responded. Lloyd then said that he couldn't lower his head any lower than her signature, so he raised his behind to make it seem lower. "Oh, okay," the queen then said. "I understand your intentions now. Lower it, I don't want to see it." Just after the whole thing, Lloyd and Javier then walked out of the queen's presence. Lloyd tapped his shoes and swirled in celebration, thinking he had just ripped off the queen with this contract. Javier glared at Lloyd, thinking he could have lost his head if she had thought he was being disrespectful. Javier knew he couldn't stop a swordmaster, so he felt Lloyd needed to exercise caution. The scene then cut back to the queen as her butler, Sir Kyle, who stood beside her, said to her that he was a clever man, very calculating. She then responded, saying, "You noticed it as well? He is more shrewd than I thought." But then Kyle asked if she was not slightly displeased by the man. "Oh, I was," the queen responded, saying that he assumed from the beginning that he could beat her, but he seemed so pathetic that it was rather adorable. The queen said this while looking away and feigning a little smile. A few days later, Lloyd was headed somewhere. He was up and ready to go, as he hung a bag on his shoulder. Javier then asked him if he would really be all right going alone. Lloyd then glared at Javier and said to him, "Why would I need an escort in the capital? It's already secured. Besides, it's a huge pain walking around with you." Lloyd said this as he remembered that earlier, when they went out to survey, he couldn't concentrate at all, because all the ladies were literally flocking towards Javier, admiring him, and Lloyd was pissed that this happened. Javier asked him to please tell Master Julian that he was doing well. Yeah, sure thing, no problem," Lloyd said. That Julian Frontera was Lloyd's little brother, who was studying at the Argentina Royal Academy. Before they left for the capital, the Baroness Marbella had prepared heaps of winter clothes and blankets, asking that Lloyd take them to Julian. Lloyd thought to himself, "That reminds me, what happens to him in the book?" He recalled that around this time the Baron loses everything and is unable to pay the tuition, so Julian is kicked out of the dorms and dies wandering around at night, killed by a thief. But that won't happen now. I'm pretty amazing, saving lives and whatnot, Lloyd thought, looking up at the school. It's time to see my little brother, I guess. I don't even know what he looks like. Lloyd chuckled as he walked into the school. Inside the Argentina Royal Academy, Lloyd stared at his junior brother Julian. Julian asked him what he was doing here. Lloyd thought he remembered Julian and Javier being of the same age, but Julian was just so small. Look at that face, staring at his own brother like that. Lloyd must have been a piece of work, he thought. As long as I am not too nice to him and act like I have turned over a new leaf, maybe he won't be too suspicious. Here, it's from Mother, Lloyd said as he threw the bag at Julian. Julian then thought that he hadn't called him a little shit, and on top of that, he had come all this way because Mother asked him to. Julian was heavily suspicious of Lloyd. Lloyd then received the notification. He is suspicious of who you are due to your own characteristic kindness. What? Lloyd thought. What I did just now was nice? Oh geez, this Lloyd guy is so exhausting. He then turned away, saying, "Alright, later, you little shit." Julian was shocked, thinking that he had left without hitting him, and wondered what was wrong with him. Lloyd then received yet another notification that said, "His suspicions are multiplying due to your humane behavior." Lloyd was confused, because he even called Julian a little shit. What do I need to do? He thought. Lloyd was confused about the entire thing. He then remembered that his mother also asked if he could have lunch with Julian, please, and to think of how lonely he must be. Lloyd scratched his head, visibly uncomfortable. Julian stared at him, very suspicious. Lloyd then turned as he said to Julian, "Hey, you little shit. Is there a restaurant around here? Not some cheap place, somewhere fancy." "Let's go to somewhere fancy," Julian responded. "Why?" Lloyd then said, "What do you mean why?" "I'm going to buy you lunch, you little shit." "But why?" "Because Mother asked me to, you little shit." Julian was very suspicious of Lloyd at this point. The scene then took them to a very high-class, beautiful-looking restaurant, as Lloyd and Julian sat across each other at the table. It was very awkward at the moment. Julian then said to Lloyd that he would have the basic set A. Huh? Lloyd responded, telling him to get something expensive, as he probably didn't get to come to places like this often. Julian was confused as Lloyd said this. Lloyd then said to him, "You little shit." Julian thought back, realizing that Lloyd had forgotten to call him a little shit, so he had said it later. Julian then said that he would go for the special set D. Julian thought to himself why Lloyd was acting so normal. He used to curse so much and would kick him if he just looked at him. Lloyd, speaking to the waiter, said that they would have 2 special set Ds. The waiter asked if he would care for any wine. "No," Lloyd responded. "Thank you, I do not drink. I stopped drinking." Julian was shocked, thinking, "What? He stopped drinking? He used to be drunk 24 hours a day and cause all sorts of trouble." A few days ago, someone from the palace had come to see Julian and briefed him on the entire situation, saying that the trading port of Krimmer was attacked by a Gigatitan, and that the person who defeated the Gigatitan was Lloyd Frontera. Julian was shocked at this, saying he couldn't believe it. The Lloyd Frontera he knew had neither the skills nor the mind to do something like that, and he thought it was definitely either an unfounded rumor or him stealing credit for something Javier did. Lloyd paid him no attention though, as he ate his beef, but Julian was very suspicious as he glared at Lloyd. Julian thought to himself that at least that's what he had thought, but this was so strange. He was just so different, he looked like a completely different person. As Julian was lost in his thoughts, someone came from behind and smacked him at the back of his head. Lloyd leaned upwards slowly as the person then continued, asking what a nobody like him was doing here. Julian was visibly shocked and then said he was sorry, something came up today. The man then responded, asking, quote, "Something came up? What kind of something?" He then punched Julian on the back of his head and asked, "Didn't you learn anything in your law class?" He continued smacking Julian at the back of his head as he said, "Can you just break the rules because it feels like it? The Baron's scum should eat where they can't be seen, because you offend our eyes." Lloyd then glanced at what was happening. He looked around and saw that people were smirking as Julian was being bullied. The man who was bullying Julian said to him, "Your family is nothing. Just because you came to a nice place like this, do you think you've become something more? You impoverished piece of trash." Lloyd kept on glancing as even the people who seemed to be teachers and the chef didn't do anything as this smacking was occurring. The man that was smacking Julian continued, saying, "What do you even have in that estate of yours? Ah, that's right. You have your filthy, mangy peasants." Lloyd then realized that though they called it an academy, they valued family status over academics, and it annoyed them even more that the son of a poor country baron was near the top of his class. What do I do? Lloyd wondered. If he helped him, life for Julian here would only get harder. Julian was also giving him eyes that he shouldn't interfere, so maybe he should just sit still. The boy then said, quote, "Our family has the royally recognized Lacanada dyed cloth to their name. You need to at least be at that level to be able to eat here." Lloyd then glared up as he heard something familiar, but he didn't quite get it right. He thought to himself, Lacona? Which Count Lacona? His brain began to boot as it was computing the whole situation. Just then, Lloyd smiled viciously as the calculation was complete. Before the guy could smack Julian's head once more, Lloyd approached him and asked, "What does your father do for a living?" The guy then glared at Lloyd and said to him, "My father? He is the wise and merciful Viscount Lacona. What's it to you? Are you related to this trash? Now stop stinking this place out and beat it." Just then, Lloyd's palm met his face as his face twisted almost comedically, and he twirled as 2 of his teeth went flying out. Julian was visibly shocked by this movement. The guy twirled and slammed the wall. Splats! Lloyd thought to himself that this was the attack called Mana Bitch Slap, and it had a cooldown of 0 seconds. Just then, his notification said to him, "That's not a real thing." Immediately, someone beside Lloyd stood up and screamed, "How dare you mess with a member of the elite union?" But just then, Lloyd responded with yet another slap at the guy. Another man rose up once more, and this guy was visibly bigger than the others, but Lloyd still finished him up with yet another slap. Two other men that looked to be twins also tried to speak up, but Lloyd calmed down for a second and then used 2 bitch slaps on their faces as they twirled away. One of the guys that stood there was feigning innocence, but Lloyd said to him, "But you were the one blabbering about some double horns just now, right?" Before the guy could respond, Lloyd finished him up with his slap. Lloyd then went to the last table with 2 men that were looking downwards. One of them said, "We didn't say anything," but Lloyd glared at them viciously and said, "But you were giggling just now." He then finished them up with 2 slaps as they fell to the ground. Just behind Lloyd, unknown to him, the Viscount Lacona's son dashed at him and told him to die as he was about to punch him. Just then, he landed the punch on Lloyd's face, and the sound echoed around the space. He shouted out loud, "How dare you! How did you like that, getting mana punched by a mana prodigy like me?" His name was Diego Lacona, and he was age 21. Just then, his facial expression changed, as if something unexpected had happened. The young man regretted his decision as he glared at Lloyd. Lloyd stuck out his tongue and licked the blood that dripped from his nose from the attack from Diego Lacona. Diego Lacona then realized that he should not have thrown that punch as Lloyd looked deranged, and he was very happy because he knew he was about to mess up this guy, as he licked his blood on his face, smirking. That's all for today. Remember guys, make sure you like the video, tap that like button, and drop a comment. Bye for now.